The open world of romantic travel. Discover a different reality. The best fantasy game in virtual reality? Chrono Life. Welcome. Teams rarely accepted amateurs, and the clothes in the game had to be upgraded to at least level 11 to be respected. The player was extremely dissatisfied with the weapon he received. He stood in the middle of the street and shouted about it. On top of that, he wasn't accepted into the team. They didn't understand anything. What kind of weapon was that? He had invested so much gold in it, and what did they give him? A cute, long-haired girl with a heart-shaped staff approached the player. She offered to let him join her team. His eyes lit up. Chrono Life is the best. They strolled along the shady paths of a warm green forest. His parents had given him some money yesterday, which he had invested in gold. He told the girl about this with pride. The girl was curious to know how long he had been playing. Whenever possible, he bought all the beginner's sets for 55,000 won, which was all he had. And this knight's sword had just come out of one of those sets. The girl was enchanted and really saw a fairy tale knight in him. In his dreams, this attraction was mutual, and at some point, they were already kissing. Then they started dating. And then, over time, they got married. After a while, they even had a daughter. But this was all just his fantasy. From a chance encounter, such a strong and loving family could have been formed. But they came. The girl led the player deeper into the forest, and she wounded him badly. His health dropped to the minimum. The guy had no idea what was happening. Why did she do this to him? He was bleeding to death. Was it all just to take his weapon? But she didn't need that piece of junk. She lured him deeper into the forest, away from prying eyes, precisely to take his life. And of course, she didn't really invite him to join the team. She didn't need someone like him on her team, a poor loser who begged his parents for money. Even if he was poor in the game, one could imagine what his life was like. In reality, she believed that the guy would not even dare to approach her. He even bragged about his beginner's kit. That meant his parents were very poor too. The guy asked her to stop. The arrogant girl had crossed the line by insulting his parents. Gritting his teeth, the player stood up. His eyes burned with wild rage. He intended to fight back, but the girl was stronger and killed him with one blow. His words about her arrogance had hurt her. The conditions were met. The process of transition to the hidden class began. She turned around and then something strange began to happen. Her hair darkened, her clothes changed, and most importantly, wings grew out of her back. Her staff also transformed. The transition was complete. Now she was a member of the hidden class, a goddess of life. Finally, 1,000 victims. It had taken her a very long time to get here. Now she only had the main quest left. On that day, he learned something. The terrible truth about this game. It was ruled by the law of the jungle. His character died. Having lost most of his experience, the player was reborn in a safe place. He remembered the hurtful words of the girl, and how everyone had mocked him for his poverty. He put his new sword on the floor, took out a craftsman's hammer, and hit the sword with all his might. He was unable to improve his equipment. The sword was broken. He did the same with his silver bracers, but they too were broken, not improved. When he broke one part of the set, he lost the entire set. Those were the rules. It was all useless. This game is just terrible. He can't do anything right in it. Suddenly, a wooden club falls near him. A weapon for a beginner. It was practically useless. The player sat there without clothes, equipment, or weapons. Then a guy approached him. Judging by his appearance, he was probably another beginner. It seems like the newbie is giving him his club for free. He probably saw him standing on the street in his underwear and felt sorry for him. Unable to think of anything better, the player hit the stick with a hammer. And lo and behold, the item improved. +1 damage. He hit it again. +1 more. Life is painful. They always put such mechanisms in such useless items. Continuing to hit the club, at some point he realized that the stick already had 64 damage. It would probably break soon. The higher the level, the greater the chance of breakage. And he continued to hit it with the hammer. Dusk was already falling, and the player kept hitting and hitting. Fatigue was already setting in. Success. The equipment has been upgraded to the maximum level of 99. How is that even possible? After the 10th upgrade, the probability of success decreases by 5% each time. The player began to swing the club in his hands, and suddenly stones began to fall from the sky in a wild stream. All that remained in front of him was a scorched spot. The characters around him thought that a dragon attack had begun, or some kind of new game event. As it turned out, the continent had split in two, and it was all done by his club. On that day, a new world record was entered into the Guinness Book of Records for virtual reality games, for the number of players destroyed with a single blow. His reputation grew and grew. 850,617 players destroyed with a single blow. The guy remembered everyone who had humiliated and hurt him. He had paid dearly for his knowledge, and now it was his turn to teach everyone a lesson. In real life, he was a nobody. He was of average height and unremarkable appearance. He did not excel in either his studies or sports. If you were to describe his life in gaming terms, he would be a bronze 4 player. But now everything will be completely different thanks to the possibilities offered by his new weapon. Coming out of an alley, the player bumped into a big guy who was very rude. But now he has a club, which he used to hit the big guy in the face. The big guy fell unconscious. Here, he is not like in real life. Here, he is invincible. The weapon's durability is reduced after the blow and needs to be repaired. As it turns out, the durability of his weapon was low. It broke after a few hits. He only made 2 hits, and the club is already worn down to 3 points out of 5. That means he only has 3 hits left. That's sad. The guy has problems. He planned to take revenge on everyone, especially the girl who destroyed him. Only 3 hits, he had to use them wisely, and so he set off for the Valley of the Dead. It's a pretty grim place. The ground is littered with skulls, and tall stone ledges resembling sharp cliffs tower above. And then, in the thick of the rocks, he appeared. A huge winged demon with 2 heads. It was the strongest boss in the game. The monster was displeased that some insignificant ordinary man had crossed the line of the undead. The two-headed dragon Urus was ready to attack. This was the boundary between life and death. Eternal torment awaited this fool. Suddenly, the dragon roared. With one blow of his stick, the guy knocked off one of the dragon's heads. With 3 blows left, he had to defeat the strongest monster in the game. And when the boy raised his hand for the second blow, the dragon began to beg him to wait and listen to him. But the guy had no intention of stopping. He struck with his club and practically destroyed the strongest boss in the game. Only 1 blow remained. If only there was something he could do about its durability. Suddenly, the dragon opened its eyes. It said it could help with the durability of the player's weapon. A message popped up describing a pact with the two-headed dragon. The dragon wanted to give the player his soul. The guy wondered whether to accept the task or not. The dragon offered to become his ego weapon. In other words, it would inhabit the player's sword. It would dwell in it with its spirit. The weapon would have a soul, and it would evolve into an ego sword. It would have infinite durability. This sword would be the strongest weapon in Chrono Life. The guy's eyes lit up. It seemed like the game really wanted him to start his revenge, and he accepted the task. Everything around him began to transform. The dragon's soul moved into the boy's sword. Urus's physical body disappeared. His soul had finally moved into the weapon. The wooden club became a class ego weapon and now had infinite durability. Revenge. That was now the main thing. The master craved revenge. Urus craved revenge. On top of everything else, Urus also had his own army of monsters. Excellent. Now he could take his revenge. Meanwhile, in the city, a reward of 1 trillion gold pieces was offered for the capture of the player. He was wanted for killing more than 800,000 players at once. The reward for his head was posted throughout the 12 kingdoms on all 3 continents. The royal guard appeared in the square. They were led by the guild leader, Saintry herself. In addition, 10 elite knights appeared. Their cloaks were emblazoned with white crosses. The leader of the White Crosses Guild was Suku, a man with a scar on his face. Next appeared the strongest mage in the royal family, the leader of the Holy Land Guild, Abracadabra. The Thieves Guild, the leader of the Noble Bandits Guild, Robin Hood, Hong. The king from the Arden Palace also arrived, the leader of the Justice Guild, Hawkeye. The 5 strongest guilds in the world gathered together with a single goal, the first alliance of the strongest guilds on the planet in history. The leader of the Arden Alliance announced the start of a total battle with a mass assassination of players. Hen Nim was in a good mood. His head poked out of his club to report this. He was very frightened. What was it? It was the dragon Urus. Since Urus's soul had entered the club, he now had certain privileges. Only Hen Nim could see and hear him. The dragon was very cute. Now Hen Nim was curious where the second head of the dragon had gone, but he didn't know either. The wind carried a flyer to Urus and Hyun Nim. It was a wanted poster with a reward for his capture. These flyers were literally everywhere. Anyone who saw him would recognize him immediately. While eating lunch and walking around the kingdom, Hyun Nim was very cautious and tense. The fact that the dragon knew what real money was surprised Hen Nim. How could artificial intelligence know about the existence of the real world? For a non-player character, Urus was quite headstrong. The little dragon was interested in the player's plans. After all, now the best guilds from all over the world would be hunting him day and night. Perhaps it would be better to get rid of humanity right now. But Hyun Nim found it all amusing. Now he was a real celebrity. Since that was the case, Hen Nim decided to act like an NPC, a loser hiding superpowers, when someone very strong pretends to be weak and harmless. It was very amusing. Hen Nim planned to have some fun. Suddenly, an arrow pierced his body. The dragon was shocked. Hen Nim lay face down on the ground, and from the roof, the one who did it was looking down at him. It was the leader of the Justice Guild, Hawkeye. A direct hit. Hen Nim was surrounded. The head of the United Forces Guild ordered his men to capture the man. He must be imprisoned. Dragon Urus tried to lift Hen Nim. The people around him were weak, but as a crowd, they posed a serious threat. Then Hen Nim struggled to his feet. They had no intention of showing him mercy. They rushed forward to attack. Hen Nim gritted his teeth, pulled the arrow out of his body, and threw it to the ground. The loser's way of life would not work. Hyun Nim changed his mind. They had asked for it. He had tried to be inconspicuous and quiet. A bright flash lit up the entire planet. It was a powerful explosion. The members of the Justice Guild lay on the ground, showing almost no signs of life. One blow wiped out almost the entire guild. The capital of the First Kingdom was destroyed. There was nothing but dust and stones around. Then Arden took a summoning crystal out of his pocket. It summoned as many users as the summoner desired. It could only be used once, and the crystal was very expensive. Breaking the sphere in his hand, Arden began the summoning. All members of the United Forces Guild were summoned. Mass teleportation began. Members of the United Forces Guild appeared one after another in small groups, and so Hen Nim was once again surrounded by players. There were an incredible number of them. Approximately 3 million people had been teleported to the kingdom. The army was ordered to attack the criminal again. He raised his club above his head. A pillar of fire swept through the crowd of players, destroying everything in its path. But even if Urus was the strongest boss in the world, he couldn't defeat all the players at once. The United Forces Guild is too powerful an enemy. They are elite warriors from all over the world. Urus can only defeat them by summoning his own army. So it's best to get out of here as quickly as possible, but he didn't have time to do so. He was attacked. But again, to no avail. A new wave of fire swept across the battlefield. The strongest mage of the royal family, Abracadabra, and her comrades tried to cast spells. They summoned a magic circle that hovered above the ground. The spell sounded cool. Hen Nim also needed a spell for his attacks, but this trick of the guild would not work either. Hen Nim interrupted the greatest ancient spell and struck the kingdom's magicians. Enraged, Abracadabra ordered the mages to continue, but Hen Nim used his spell, Strike. The powerful sound and light waves sent the sorceresses flying like dolls in all directions. 1 against 3 million. Not as spectacular as one would have liked, but it was definitely a disaster. The United Forces Guild was completely defeated. Arden sat in despair among his motionless comrades. This simply couldn't be happening. Hen Nim approached Arden and told him he would spare his life. But for that shot with the bow, Hen Nim struck Arden with his club. As expected, the next day, this battle was on everyone's lips. Not only among Chrono Life players, but also among players of other games. And even among people who weren't interested in games at all. The dragon Urus was ecstatic about what they had done to Hen Nim. The next moment, a girl approached Hen Nim from behind. Could someone have survived? What a pity. But who could it be? It was her, the same insolent, self-centered girl who had ruined him and hurt him so badly. Hen Nim recognized her immediately, even though she had changed. The sun was setting over the endless expanse littered with the bodies of 3 million people. There were countless swords and spears scattered on the ground. And then there was this fateful encounter. Who could have thought it would turn out like this? For some reason, Hyun Nim felt like laughing. The girl also did not expect to meet him under such circumstances, that was obvious. But in reality, Hyun Nim knew that she had been looking for him on purpose and had come here to destroy him. The girl smiled. She continued to pretend to be a sweet, naive fool. Ready to take her life at any moment, Hyun Nim tried to calm down. He had something to discuss with her. To begin with, he asked her why her hair had changed color. She didn't beat around the bush and told him that she had sacrificed him to enter a new hidden class of goddesses of life. That's why her hair color had changed. Having ruined so many lives, she now called herself the goddess of life. It didn't make sense. Why not the goddess of death? The girl continued to smile. This was starting to annoy Hyun Nim. Hyun Nim swung his stick and struck the ground. The girl rose above the ground and he missed her on the first try. The girl wanted to talk to Hyun Nim some more. She followed him. Seeing this, Hyun Nim turned around and struck the ground again with the log, creating a wave of fire. But when the smoke cleared, he saw that the girl was standing in the middle of the crater, unharmed. The most interesting thing was that she continued to smile. Hyun Nim seemed much stronger to her, but it seemed that this trick would not defeat her. Both the dragon and Hyun Nim were surprised that the girl had survived such an attack. Moreover, it turned out that she could see the dragon. No one was supposed to see him except his master. It was all extremely strange. Hyun Nim was sure he had hit her, but the girl didn't have a scratch on her. She said it was all because she was a goddess of life. An ordinary person cannot destroy a goddess no matter how hard they try. But the evil Hyun Nim tried again, and again, to no avail. Nothing worked on her. Time after time, Hyun struck the ground with his club, causing various cataclysms. The entire planet literally shook, but it was all in vain, against a goddess. He could have destroyed the entire planet if he hadn't stopped, but she just smiled. Then the goddess grew older. Now she was hundreds of times bigger than Hyun. She began to mock him, reminding him of their first meeting and teasing him even more. Returning to her original form, she approached Hyun Nim and pointed out that no matter what he did, he would never be able to destroy her. Well, Hyun Nim turned around and silently walked away. But he didn't give up. He tried to gauge how much strength he could put into his blow again. He wanted to break the entire planet. At this point, the goddess became a little concerned. After all, if he destroyed the planet, she would also cease to exist. It would work. She would either die or find herself in outer space. The goddess was no longer smiling. His train of thought alarmed her. It even frightened her a little, but she wasn't sure he had enough strength to do it. However, she couldn't know for sure that he didn't. The goddess was also interested in whether Hyun himself was afraid of dying. After all, a mere mortal would certainly die in an explosion. Was he willing to do this just for revenge? In response, Hyun Nim just laughed loudly. He had nothing to lose. She had made the mistake of touching him in his pride, and she would pay for it. Hyun raised his weapon. The girl, now seriously frightened, tried to stop him, but she was too late. With all his might, Hyun Nim struck the ground with his log. Streaks of fire spread in all directions. They literally enveloped the entire Earth, and then there was a powerful explosion. The planet was completely destroyed. In the real world, in the virtual reality gaming pods, the players began to come to their senses. They were all thrown out of Chrono Life at once. People were extremely dissatisfied and did not understand what had happened. They all rushed to the administrator with questions. He also knew nothing. Then notifications began to arrive. The game server reported that a critical technical malfunction had occurred. Work was already underway, and further news was to be expected. This was the first time something had broken on the server. Only one capsule was closed and occupied, and the player was online. Hyun Nim was the only player left on the server. However, he didn't really understand where he was. The game interface was completely gone. It was a completely empty room with numbers. Behind him, a voice said that the planet Hyun had destroyed was called ST-389. It was one of the most beautiful planets in the fourth universe. Some guy in shorts and a t-shirt with long hair. And this planet was the favorite planet of the guy's mother. When asked who he was, the guy replied that he was the creator. Then Hyun Nim asked if he had seen a girl with black hair. The creator said that Hyun had destroyed everyone, and as a player he was the only one left. Hearing this, Hyun Nim almost jumped for joy. That was why he had been playing. He took out his stick and wanted to show off his revenge to Urus, but Urus did not appear. The creator repeated to Hyun Nim that there were only 2 of them here. Everyone else had died, without exception. Then Han tried to find out who this guy was, perhaps the developer, but he said he was neither. Interference came and he didn't reveal his name. After asking to say hello to Furry, the guy disappeared. Now Hyun Nim was also kicked out of the game. He woke up in his capsule. He had no words. Who was this guy and why did he show up? And what was this nonsense about Furry? Looking across, Hyun Nim saw 3 guys. 2 guards and some older blonde guy sitting in an open capsule. You could tell he was really rich. The man knew about Lee Ji-woo, whose real name was known to everyone. He was 21 years old. He had only been in the game for 3 months. And he knew that his weapon was a wooden club. This man was the very same Furry, and he had come for Lee Ji-woo's club. In real life, 21-year-old Lee Ji-woo was a college student and a fan of the game Chrono Life. During all his time playing the game, Lee never rose above the amateur level. But Lee Ji-woo was lucky enough to get a club that could do almost anything. Then he took revenge on all his tormentors. Then this guy appeared who called himself the creator, and he disappeared. And now this. Now Lee was sitting at a table with Furry, surrounded by a crowd of security guards on all sides. They were in a fancy restaurant, but Lee Ji-woo didn't have much of an appetite. But in order not to anger Furry, Lee Ji-woo began to eat. What was happening? He was scared. Furry talked about his past when he was poor. It was 16 years ago. He founded his company when the game was still in development. And then Lee Ji-woo realized who was sitting in front of him. It was the president of Chrono Life, Cho Dok-bae, so he wasn't a mobster. The people around him turned out to be employees. A character designer, a sound engineer, the head of marketing, and so on. After calming down a little, Lee Ji-woo asked Furry what the president wanted from him. Cho Dok-bae repeated that he had come for his bat. For a company leader, this was normal practice, to take back an item with a defect. But Lee Ji-woo jumped up and shouted that it wasn't a defect. He said that he had personally upgraded the bat, 3%. That was the probability of successful improvement after the 10th time, according to Furry. And after the 10th time, it was logical that the probability would only decrease. Even if it wasn't a mistake, the probability was negligible. So Furry said he would confiscate the bat. In the vicinity of the city of Front, a level 21 monster named Gortys was attacking a group of players. 2 guys and 2 girls were preparing to defend themselves. One of the girls sent a fireball created with magic at the monster. It was a huge fireball that flew out of her staff. It worked. The monster was on fire. The second girl, Kyunim Kentucky, went after the monster alone. She jumped right at its face, but it threw her back and she fell. Lee Ji-woo, who was sitting nearby, watched everything. He didn't know what to do next. The dragon Urus, sitting behind him, was eating meat and asked the same question. Lee raised his ego club. It was the same as before. That evening, Furry explained to Lee Ji-woo that he had been instructed by the company to take the club, but Furry himself considered this unfair. Director Furry conducted his own investigation and decided that Lee's club was not a mistake after all. He decided not to interfere and to leave Lee Ji-woo alone. Lee himself couldn't believe his ears. Furry believed that all users were equal and had the right to choose. The guy on the battlefield accused Kentucky of being careless and negligent, saying that because of her, they would now have to postpone the battle. He claimed that she didn't know how to work in a team. Looking at Kentucky, Lee Ji-woo recognized himself in her. He had been bullied and humiliated in the same way. He also remembered Furry's only request, not to destroy the world anymore, but to just enjoy the game. Meanwhile, the guy became completely insolent and, spitting at Kentucky, declared that she would never be taken on a raid again. And they left, leaving her alone. Poor Kentucky was expelled from the team. Lee Ji-woo decided that he would take everything he could from the game, jumped down and looked after the trio, preparing to leave. Suddenly, he noticed Q-Nim. She was indignant and shouting curses after the players who had kicked her out. Looking at Q-Nim walking away, Lee didn't know what to think. Then something unexpected happened. Before Kentucky could leave, she was surrounded by monsters. Now there were several of them. The monsters rushed toward Kentucky and she closed her eyes, mentally preparing herself for death. Not understanding why she was doing this, Lee jumped in front of her and knocked all the monsters down with his club. Kentucky opened her eyes and realized she was alive and that the monsters were gone. She saw Lee Ji-woo standing next to her. He realized that he hadn't done it out of sympathy or pity, but just to have some fun. A little bit of epic action and that's it. There you have it, the prologue. Lee greeted Kentucky. What's more, he invited her to join his team. And only now did his story really begin. An unexpected reaction followed. Kentucky made an indecent gesture and told Lee that she didn't talk to newbies. She turned around and walked away. The incident, which caught the attention of the public around the world, was dubbed The Incident. Judgment Day. The end of the world. Gamers around the world discussed the incident day and night. Everyone wondered who he was. An assassin or simply a god of battle. He was the strongest in Chrono Life. Everyone wondered what was so special about him that he was able to defeat 3 million players at once. After all, it was impossible to defeat such an overwhelming number of opponents with even a leveled up character. People around the world considered him a cheater and wanted justice. Everyone waited for the game administration to respond. They demanded that they block the character, and the response came. It was stated that no violations had been found on the player's part. A thorough investigation established that the player had not broken any rules. His actions did not violate the rules of the game world. That was it. And that was the end of the matter. The news that the game had been taken down thanks to the actions of this mysterious character also spread quickly. No one really understood what he looked like because he was wearing a hood in the posters. This mysterious character, also known as Lee Ji-woo, continued to follow Q Kentucky Nim. Noticing this, the girl started screaming and shaming Lee for wearing only a cloak over his underwear and carrying a stick as a weapon. This ended up embarrassing Lee, but he didn't understand why Kentucky was so ungrateful since he had saved her from the monsters. Urus explained that Q Nim hadn't seen anything because she had closed her eyes. It turns out that Q didn't even realize how strong Lee Ji-woo really was, but he had to hide his true strength. There was another option. Running after Kentucky, Lee asked her to teach him everything she knew about the game. He even called Q Nim Sensei to satisfy her pride. And perhaps that's what worked. Lee continued to pretend to be weak, the loser's strategy he told the dragon about. So, Love was the nickname of the girl who invited him to join her team. She agreed to be Lee Ji-woo's teacher. Love was a 24th level master of hand-to-hand combat. And now they were already near the city of Front, at the first cave. Love was fighting hand-to-hand with a huge monster rabbit, a 4th level bear rabbit. In hand-to-hand combat, Love was truly an excellent fighter. The monsters flew everywhere. Her kick, like a diving dragon, was unmatched. Lee Ji-woo and the little dragon Urus couldn't deny that Love was a good fighter. They sat nearby and watched her. Although in Lee's opinion, allowing herself to be surrounded was not a very good idea in any case. Urus noticed that Love had good equipment. Her weapon, for example, was worth 10 million, and that's 10 million won in real life. The rest of her equipment was also expensive. In total, it would cost about 100 million won. Where did she get such fine clothes and equipment? The conversation between the dragon and Lee was interrupted by Love herself, who scolded Lee Ji-woo for sitting around while she was working hard. It was time to put his bat to work. Confused, Lee didn't know what to do. He couldn't let Love see his power. The concept of a loser with superpowers was starting to bother him. Then Love received a message that something was starting in 10 minutes. and it was time to log out of the game. She said she would be back in half an hour and logged out. Wow, she just left like that. Lee Ji-woo was disappointed by her behavior. This wasn't serious. I wonder who she really is if she can spend 100 million on gold. Love logged out of the game and woke up in her room. She didn't even have time to get out of bed before the door burst open. A woman entered, calling Love names. The woman was unhappy that Love had put her virtual reality helmet on top of her glasses. It leaves dents. But Love couldn't take off the glasses because it could trigger a panic attack, and the marks could be covered with makeup. If it weren't for her salary, the woman wouldn't have bothered. But she had to. She took out a case with cosmetics and sat Love down in a chair. After taking off Love's glasses, the woman began to apply makeup to the girl. With her hair down, Love was ready to go. Today's festival was opened by the winner of the charts for 13 weeks, the popular solo idol and best head in the world, Han Sarang. The hall was jubilant. Everyone was shouting, and some were even crying with excitement. Han Sarang came on stage. Of course it was Love, but in reality it was Han. The idol was only 17 years old. Han Sarang was a popular singer and composer, but no one knew about her hobby. While his sensei was away, Lee Ji-woo decided to practice. He needed practice to learn how to hide his superpower. In other words, he needed to learn how to strike without killing his opponent. The Medvedozai were advancing. Watching the flashes on the planet, the creator found them amusing, an interesting practice. He was talking to his mother, to the sun. Meanwhile, Han Sarang's concert continued. She entered the music industry when she was very young. It was difficult at first, and popularity passed her by. But now Han is called the best idol and singer-songwriter. She was truly amazing. The lyrics of her songs were sad and touching. In an interview, Han Sarang said that she liked to be home alone. She liked to read poetry collections and sometimes even fairy tales. That's where the name of her hit song, The Little Mermaid, came from. In real life, Han played the role of a cute, naive, and even a little silly girl who was very shy. This was completely different from her character in the game, which annoyed her manager. According to her manager, Han was deceiving the whole country. Fairy tales and poetry. What nonsense. Her hobby, which the public doesn't know about, is gaming. As it turned out, in addition to being a singer, Han Sarang also starred in dramas and was a good actress. The role was difficult for her because she is not so rude in real life. Returning to the game, Love proved the opposite. Here she is rude and headstrong. She hit Lee Ji-woo for not greeting her after her return. Now the cheeky girl wanted to be called boss and have everyone obey her. Han Sarang was one of those people who relieves stress through games. Dragon Eurus didn't understand why Lee Ji-woo put up with this rude girl and didn't kick her out of the game. But he was hiding his strength and had to pretend to be weak. So Lee had to obey and repeat, Love boss. His idea worked. No one would believe in his strength now. Love's constant mockery required incredible patience from Lee Ji-woo. His journey was far from over. The dragon didn't like this tactic at all. Finally, Love asked Lee to introduce himself and give her his nickname. His nickname was Knee. She decided to call him Panties. As it turned out, they were being followed in this cave. It was a group of people in black robes, and judging by everything, the leader of their group was following Love and looking for her specifically. According to the guild master, this guild was going to mete out some kind of justice. Deep inside the cave, a wild bear appeared in front of Love and Lee Ji-woo. Love ordered Lee to attack. Trying to gauge the force of his blow, Lee struck the monster on the head with his club. He managed to do so in a way that kept the bear rabbit alive. But Lav was still surprised that Lee was so strong. He had knocked the monster out with a single blow. The next second, Love noticed a spear flying toward them. She quickly pushed Lee aside to avoid the blow. The weapon was thrown by the same man who had been watching them from the beginning, but Love didn't know who he was. Mr. Kim, a member of the Vulcan Guild, was surprised that Love had forgotten his voice. After all, he was Pain. And then Love realized that this was the Halasan Guild. There was no further dialogue. The guild members began to attack Love and Lee Ji-woo. But surprisingly, Love didn't run away. She was ready to fight hand to hand. After all, she was a master at it. Love took down the guys one by one. Love's diving dragon kick was unmatched. What was happening was completely incomprehensible to Lee Ji-woo and Urus. But Urus guessed that the guys from the Halasan Guild had decided to get even with Love and avenge their previous losses. However, this old man doesn't know when to stop. But the guys from the guild were very weak. They were all defeated by Love, and they were all level 20. They staged a completely useless fight, which greatly amused the little dragon Urus. But everything was going exactly according to Mr. Kim's plan. Love was distracted by the battle. He ordered his comrade to act. She jumped up behind Love and held out her bare hands. Love realized that the girl was a skilled fighter. When the girl uttered the word theft, the cave was illuminated by a bright yellow light that blinded everyone. Opening her eyes, Love realized that her brass knuckles were gone. The brass knuckles were now in the hands of the girl from the Hulasan Guild. The items were expensive, and the girl mentioned this. She had apparently realized that Love was not poor. This skill impressed Lee Ji-woo. Theft is a skill from the thief class. But it was strange. It shouldn't be like that. Then Lee remembered that he also had something to steal. He grabbed his club. The guild noticed him, but all he had was a cloak, underwear, and a club. They realized that Lee was a novice and had nothing to steal. Let him go. He's not even a threat. But the female thief had other ideas. For her, stealing from a beggar was even more fun. She rushed after Lee Ji-woo. Catching up with Lee Ji-woo, the girl stood in front of him. She held out her hand, ready to steal, and then Lee realized that now was not the time to hide his strength. And then Lee Ji-woo tried to use his club against the dark-haired thief. But in the next second, the club was already in her hands, and now the girl was going to take Lee's cloak. Suddenly, the club struck the girl, breaking free from her hand. It was the soul of a dragon. How dare she steal it? Flying away from the dark-haired girl's head, the club fell at Lee Ji-woo's feet. Its master. The soul of Urus refused to surrender to the enemy. Lee picked up the club. Now Lee was once again the owner of this weapon. Urus was outraged by the girl's insolence. His master was only Hyun Nim, as he called Lee. She had clearly overestimated herself. The girl did not understand what had just happened. What kind of ghost was that, and so realistic? Her guild master started yelling at her for not doing her job properly. The professional mercenary working for money got to her feet, but didn't have time to take a step before she was knocked down by a blow from Love. She wanted to get her weapon back, but Love's weapon was no longer in the thief's hands. It was now in the hands of Mr. Kim, who had been watching everything from the sidelines. Love was about to take back what was hers when something completely unexpected happened. Lee Ji-woo, who had approached from behind, knocked her out with a light blow from his baton. His skill in fighting without taking a life worked. It was unclear why he did this. The others were also interested. Lee did it to continue hiding his strength from Love. Lee struck the baton against the ground with considerable force. A moment later, the thief saw that all her companions were unconscious and scattered throughout the cave, including the most important one, Mr. Kim. Lee didn't stop there. The thief herself was also struck. He knocked her out but spared her life, honing his skills. Lee was on the verge of a nervous breakdown because of this girl. Unable to control himself, Lee Ji-woo struck again with the club, this time much harder. There was an explosion. When she woke up, Love jumped up instantly. She didn't understand what had happened or where she was. She and Lee Ji-woo were in a forest clearing. Lee was sitting under a tree eating lunch. He explained to Love that the bad people had already left, but Love was more interested in why they had left and how she had fainted. Then she noticed that her brass knuckles were still there. Without explaining anything, Lee began to ask who the Hulasan Guild was and what they did. Love decided to tell him. Since Lee had gotten involved because of her, Love asked if he had ever heard of PW. He hadn't. But Eurus explained to Lee that the term was used in online games. People between the ages of 30 and 50 played it. PW users were the game's main source of income and were the richest among the players. They are the main buyers of in-game items. Top players pay about 30 million won a month. Simply put, these are people who spend millions on games. And the Hulasan Guild is made up of just such players. A few months ago, Love accidentally bought her brass knuckles at an auction, and then the guild started chasing her to take them back. Still, Love was curious how Lee Ji-woo got them back. Lee lied that they had forgotten them. Love believed him, but was sure they would return. This old crook and his obsession had gone too far. Lee Ji-woo was curious what it was about Love's weapons that attracted them so much. For Love, it was obvious, because those brass knuckles were worth 10 million won. But it was still strange. Old men spending billions on a game were obsessed with weapons worth 10 million won. Of course, Lee didn't think that was the reason. Either Love was hiding something, or they both knew something. In the Hulasan Guild's hideout, Mr. Kim was being punished by his master for his failure. They didn't have much time left. The boss decided to pass the mission on to the 4 Divine Kings. They were already there. Kim was also one of the 4, but he was not respected there. He had less gold and caused a lot of trouble. The 4 Divine Kings were also members of the Hulasan Guild. The fact that Kim hired a mercenary instead of doing the work himself amused the 3 Divine Kings. Now the first of the Divine Kings would take care of it. He would be able to take back those brass knuckles in half a day. The head of the Hulasan Guild, Mr. King, was pleased with such confidence. King's capital amounted to 12 billion won. No one in the room noticed Lee Ji-woo appear behind them, picking his nose and laughing at them. Mr. King demanded that the stranger introduce himself, but Lee only said that it would be difficult for him to restrain his power if the guild continued to bother Love. Lee himself didn't want to drag things out and needed to end this. Mr. King naturally thought he was a fool and ordered him to be destroyed. The Divine Kings began their attack, but they didn't know what awaited them. Lee struck with his club. A pillar of fire flew toward the men. They began to writhe in pain. She appeared near the shelter, stepping softly and singing songs. A girl with a heart-shaped staff. She watched as the guild's hideout split in two. The girl was delighted by what she saw. This was what she had been looking for. More precisely, this was the one. All members of the guild were ordered to attack Lee Ji-woo, but he just laughed. Even 3 million of them couldn't defeat him. Shocked, Mr. King watched as his entire guild fell at the hands of some boy in shorts and a raincoat. Then Mr. Kim, who was still lying behind him, said they had to run. Then Mr. King remembered those flyers with the hooded guy that everyone was talking about. He figured out who this kid was who had taken down his entire guild. Mr. King started playing in 2nd grade. The games were simpler than they are now, but leveling up was more difficult without quests and raids. But even so, it was a lot of fun. His parents scolded him when he spent all night playing games, and he fondly remembered those days when he spent days on end leveling up with his online friends. But the years passed. Mr. King grew up. He had many responsibilities. He didn't even have time to reminisce. But then he came to his senses. He was already over 40. He was the CEO of a large company. For his incredibly hard work, King wanted to give himself something special. And he did. It was something special, his memories, his old computer. King's subordinate didn't understand why he wanted this antique. He didn't understand the atmosphere it created. His heart beat as fast as it did in his childhood. It was like meeting his first love. But Mr. King wasn't the only one who had changed under the weight of time. Now his guild was broken. Only Mr. King and Mr. Kim, who was still lying on the floor, remained. Lee Ji-woo noticed that it wasn't right for such rich old men to steal from girls. It wasn't just King who had changed. No more effort was needed. 2 clicks were enough to become the strongest with money. People without money were oppressed. All the games Mr. King had learned were the same. Pay to survive. And the final one was the critically acclaimed Chrono Life. Using his skill to fight without taking a life, Lee Ji-woo struck Mr. King on the head. He fell next to Kim. The Hulasan Guild was finished for Lee. After warning them once more not to touch the boss, Lovely left the Hulasan Guild's hideout. With difficulty, King got up and asked if Lee was the guy everyone was looking for, the one who destroyed the 5 best guilds. He was curious how much money he had spent to do it. However, Lee didn't want to listen to King's musings. He said he had spent 55,000 won on equipment for a newbie, and that was all. Of course, King couldn't believe it. It takes a lot of money to have that kind of power. Mr. King began to laugh loudly and boisterously. This game turned out to be fun. And again, an uninvited guest. It was the girl with the staff. She greeted them and asked if the guild was well prepared. Without answering, Mr. King said he was leaving and terminating their cooperation agreement. The girl didn't like that. The girl hit Mr. King and took his life. She was clearly not in a good mood. Next was Mr. Kim. She quickly disposed of him as well. Now the guild was definitely gone. Smiling with the help of magic, the girl changed her hair color and clothes. Boss love, huh? She remembered that. The system notified Lee Ji-woo that the Hulasan Guild had been destroyed, and his level was now 999. There were almost 5,000 unallocated experience points that could be spent on skills. Chrono Life was number 1 in terms of total users, active users, sales, and reviews. However, even advanced gamers believed that reaching the maximum level was practically impossible. Although players spent days and nights immersed in the game, no one had yet succeeded. But it turned out to be possible, and Lee Ji-woo didn't even have to play for decades to achieve it. He was the first to reach the master level. Urus was very proud of his master. Just recently, Lee was only at level 7. The conclusion is obvious. This club changed everything, his whole life. A new notification came from the system. A player who has reached master level will be sent to transcendent space. Player Love lay under the stars and pondered. She was bored. Plus, Trisiki was gone. Where could he be? He said he'd be back soon. Fine. Love was ready to wait for him for another hour. She even had time to sleep a little. Somewhere else, Lee Ji-woo found himself. He was curious why he was constantly being dragged somewhere without his consent, either by God or the creator of the game. Then Lee heard a voice. It said that he was a guide for the best, and that he was waiting for him. It was a strange blue creature with many arms. He was huge, dozens or even hundreds of times larger than a normal person. The god of superiority, the guide of the best. The guide said that he greatly appreciated Lee's participation and that he had come all the way from a beginner to a master. This was worthy of respect. The necessary conditions had been met. The transition to the hidden class began. The soul of the sword entered Lee Ji-woo's body. The soul of the shield entered Lee's body. The soul of the bow entered Lee's body. The soul of the staff entered Lee's body. The soul of the brass knuckles entered Lee's body. The soul of the spear entered Lee's body. And this continued endlessly. All kinds of items. And finally, the change of profession was complete. Hidden class, novice master. The privileges of the profession will be granted. All stats were reset, and unallocated points were tripled. Now there were more than 14,000 points. That's a lot. Ordinary players usually receive 5 points for a transition, but Lee Ji-woo received 15. It was very strange and cool. This will go down in the history of the gaming community as the greatest achievement. Lee Ji-woo began to distribute these points among his skills. Stubborn Lee Ji-woo put all the points into one characteristic, which greatly disappointed Urus. It was very unwise from his point of view. He screwed up. An employee burst into President Furry's office and reported that they had a problem. It was about that very user. The boy with the wooden club had reached the maximum level, but that wasn't the problem. The problem was that he had invested all his points in one characteristic, and what a characteristic it was. When Mr. King saw which attribute Lee had chosen, he started laughing out loud. This guy really enjoys the game and lives it to the fullest. The problem was that this made his character third-rate trash with no room for growth. And when he realized that he had created garbage, he would most likely react as he did last time in a fit of rage. But Mr. King ordered them to ignore it. The company should not interfere with the player's choices in any case. According to Mr. King, the worst and strongest character in the history of virtual reality games had appeared. The conductor informed Lee that he was being given one chance. The right to one of the superior weapons would be transferred to Lee Ji-woo, but Lee didn't know which weapon to choose as they all looked excellent. Without thinking twice, Lee made his decision. Without hesitation, Lee asked for all of them, but the guide said that unfortunately he could not grant his request. Excessive greed leads to intense anger. He should have chosen wisely, but Lee Ji-woo insisted and even began to threaten his mentor. The god of excellence was angry. The character's relationship with him deteriorated to the point of hostility. Everyone in the game office was also shocked. The enraged god of superiority would not let such insolence go unpunished. Lee Ji-woo grabbed his club and wanted to fight the god. Surprisingly, he managed to wound him with the first blow. The characteristic that Lee had leveled up was physical endurance. Therefore, after the god's blow, it decreased only slightly. However, due to the lack of other characteristics such as strength, Lee couldn't even buy equipment because carrying it also required strength. A hidden skill window popped up. The conditions for it had been met. This skill was healing factor, improved recovery. After any blow, instant healing was guaranteed. And after the god's blow, his slightly damaged health was immediately restored. So much for the trash character, who isn't really trash anymore. Even more enraged, the god continued to attack the insolent player. He even almost destroyed him. But the player came back to life before his eyes. His stats were flawless. Unable to believe his eyes, the god of superiority shouted in frustration. How was this possible? Lee Ji laughed in the god's face continuously. Since the evil god would not calm down, Lee Ji-woo considered ending it. He asked once more to return the weapon peacefully. The god warned that such greed would destroy Lee. But Lee was no longer listening. He swung his club and delivered a vertical blow. The god of superiority ceased to exist. The transcendent space was about to collapse. The player will be transported to the main world. And so Lee returned, and all of God's superior weapons were scattered around him. There were many items. Now Lee Ji-woo had become the owner of all the superior weapons at once. They had all been transported to the subspace, and they would always come when their master called. An annoyed Love was already waiting for Lee and was unhappy that he had been gone for so long. She kicked him and yelled at him. Turning around, Love announced that she was leaving the game. She would return tomorrow evening at 7:30 when she finished work, and he had to be there at that time. In reality, it was already past midnight, so Lee Ji-woo also decided it was time to go. After saying goodbye to the dragon Urus until tomorrow, he left. Lee woke up in the virtual reality game room. Today had been a great day. The game had been fun. He was curious to see how much he could sell the excellent weapons for. These were first-class items and could fetch a decent amount of money. That is, if they could be sold at all. It would be a shame if they couldn't. Lee was hungry. Thinking about food, Lee looked in his wallet and found almost nothing. That was sad. He was tired of being poor, and the price of the game kept going up. Maybe he should take on another part-time job. Although, if Lee could sell the in-game items, he could exchange them for real money, and Lee ran. The world's #1 game, Chrono Life. The first players named one location in it a forbidden place, on the border between life and death. a high-level hunting ground that no one has yet been able to clear. But for unknown reasons, it remained hidden, the location where the strongest boss, Urus, dwells, the Valley of the Fallen. It was Urus's home. Blinded by revenge, Lee didn't even think about collecting items and left them there. He had a lot of work to do today. This day will be the beginning of the end of Lee Ji-woo's worthless poor life. He must become rich in the blink of an eye. Turbot of Despair, Lapis of the Abyss, and Tridzion of Dawn, the three strongest members of Urus's army. They were completely destroyed with just 2 blows from a club. All the monsters in the Valley of the Dead were destroyed, and valuable items fell like rain from a cornucopia. The dragon Urus praised Lee even though he felt sorry for his army of monsters, but Lee had only just begun. After a certain amount of time, the monsters were reborn in the same place. Only special creatures like Urus did not resurrect. Lee wanted to gather a large supply of items to sell. One day, an interesting lecture was held at Harvard University. It was about Bill Gates, the richest man in the world. Even on his way to work, he found $100 but didn't pick it up. If he had picked up the money from the ground, he would have suffered a loss. It would have taken 2 or 3 seconds to bend down and pick up the bill. But in 1 second, he earns at least $150, and he would have lost at least $200. An excellent lecture spiced up with a joke. However, considering the delay in revival, it took about an hour to destroy the monsters 100 times. As a result, the value of all the items dropped was about 15 billion gold. Based on the aforementioned lecture, we can calculate that Bill Gates earns about 500 million won per hour. And Lee Ji-woo earned much more in an hour. Dressed in the most expensive brand name stores, Lee Ji-woo was extremely satisfied. Among other things, he bought himself a cool car. Many people in his city saw a Lamborghini for the first time in their lives and were thrilled, but Lee didn't get very far before he crashed into a pole. His Lamborghini, worth 400 million, was wrecked, but that's not a problem. After all, Lee Ji-woo is now very rich and can easily buy a new one. Mr. King listened to the company employee's report. The cost of the new items is 15 billion. They are all of the highest quality. The content is consumed for years to come, and it has become difficult to estimate the value of the assets. In short, the company was in a very difficult position. Due to recent events, people were beginning to doubt the company's reliability, and its shares were rapidly losing value. Shocked, King asked if there was any way to block Lee's transactions. He was already extremely annoyed with him, but for now, that was impossible. The president dialed Lee Ji-woo's number. He answered and said he was on his way to spend money. In response, Mr. King couldn't hold back. Because of Lee Ji-woo, the company was in a very difficult position. As President King shouted into the phone, Lee asked for the phone, but Lee didn't worry or think about it. He only thought about what else he could buy that was expensive. He had already bought everything he could, but something was missing. Some key moment? And then Lee Ji-woo remembered. How could he have forgotten the most important thing? Yes, it was super expensive. Top quality housing. Welcome home. This was the best moment of his life. There was one last thing to do before moving. Holding a plate of cakes in his hands, Lee Ji-woo rang the doorbell. It was an ancient Korean tradition to treat your neighbors. Someone was watching him through the camera. The door was opened by a cute girl wearing glasses. She looked familiar to him. He had seen her somewhere before. It seemed like this was the key moment Lee Ji-woo had been waiting for. All the best players know one location known as a forbidden place, the Valley of the Dead. Someone had come there and began total destruction. Monsters surrounded him, the 3 strongest monsters of the Urus army. The mindless monsters did not even recognize their master. His tentacles pierced each monster, and he began to drink their life force and power. The 3 strongest monsters of Urus's army lost their ability to resurrect. Someone swallowed the target level and its characteristics. Information about the 3 strongest monsters was completely deleted. This was the second dragon head lost by Urus, and he was born to exterminate all humans. His name is Urakan. This was the first time Lee had ever met the boss Love, Han Sarang, an idol. Smiling sweetly, Han happily accepted the treat from her new neighbor. Lee recognized her as the idol Han Sarang. She was the complete opposite of Love in the game. He didn't even recognize her as Love at the time. Returning to her room, Han thought about how she had seen this guy somewhere before. The two didn't recognize each other because their game models looked different from their real appearances. Han's manager told her to change into her school uniform to finish the shoot if she wanted to make it by 7:30. She needed to be in the game at that time. So Khan agreed and went to change. The manager noticed her reaction and guessed that she had met someone special in the game. The most special person in the Valley of the Dead was furious. All the monsters were gone. The dragon didn't know how this could have happened either. It was impossible. It seemed like they had disappeared without a trace. It was sad, of course, but it wasn't the only place to hunt. It was almost 7:30 and Love would be arriving soon. It was so strange. Urus felt a familiar yet ominous aura. The giant snow snake Elarus was level 190, a summoned boss. His Urakan had also been devoured. But that still wasn't enough. To destroy that human creation, that had ruined him. He would have to go a long way. And then she appeared. The girl with wings. Urakan was her beloved child, and he had already gone so far. But Urakan still wasn't satisfied. He began to absorb her as well, but the absorption failed. Urakan was surprised. Such surprises did not suit her. Urakan did not understand why she did not absorb him. What was her nature? Without answering, the girl pointed to the city in the distance. There was plenty of food there. She allowed him to go there and eat as much as he wanted. Saliva dripped from his lips. The players in the city did not understand what was happening. They were being attacked and absorbed by some kind of tentacles, one after another, simultaneously. All the players became food for Urakan, in the place where newbies and pros worked side by side in the frontline village. Many newcomers lived there, high level and top players. However, this did not prevent Urakan from destroying them, practically every single one of them. The company was in trouble again. The flood of complaints from users was increasing. Customer support couldn't keep up. These complaints were all over social media. Mr. King himself knew that Urakan had already left, and he found it amusing. King ordered that 2 characters be monitored from that moment on. One was Urakan. In one night, Urakan devoured everyone, and the village became a ghost town. But that wasn't enough for him. He wanted to know where else he could find food. The girl had her eye on a delicious delicacy. She definitely had something in mind. It was 8:34. Trushiki was already 4 minutes late. Love was furious. She heard footsteps behind her. But it wasn't Trushiki. It was Urakan. He was also at the highest level, just like Lee. Love was at level 24. The supreme commander of the alliance of the 5 largest guilds, Hawkeye, was devastated. He had previously been unrivaled in the game. However, after the end of the World Alliance was disbanded, and Hawkeye fell to the bottom after taking all the blame and responsibility upon himself. Before, all the guilds of the world were at his feet. Suddenly, panic broke out. People said that a monster had appeared in the main square. On that day, Hawkeye witnessed a scene after which most of the players were deleted, when Urakan engulfed them. It turned out that after dying at the hands of the monster, the character was completely deleted. This was beyond all limits. Love stood in the clearing, not understanding who was in front of her. This guy didn't look like a player. Where did this monster come from on this hill? And then there was this strange girl who greeted her and called her boss. Only Trushiki called her that. The dark-haired girl tried to find out about the relationship between Love and Lee. Unaware of anything, Love said that they had recently started playing together. The dark-haired girl said aloud that Love annoyed her. Before she could say another word, a tentacle grabbed her. Life left Love. All that remained of her was a belt lying alone on the clearing. It was delicious for Urakan. Suddenly, Lee Ji-woo, who was late, finally appeared. His old acquaintance was overly cheerful. Then Lee noticed that the dark-haired girl was standing on Love's belt. Love herself was nowhere to be seen. Lee raised his club above his head. With all his might, Lee struck the tentacled creature and the girl. The whole planet shook, but the girl stood unharmed, and not only her. Urakan himself was also alive and unharmed, her son. Lee didn't understand how he managed to survive the blow, but he simply dodged it. He counterattacked, but Lee's wounds healed instantly. Then Lee realized that all his previous blows had been ordinary, not at full strength. The activation of Lee Ji-woo's special skill began, the Spirit of the Swordsman. The swordsman could only be used once, and he was ready to use it. His opponent Urakan was also confident in his abilities. Remembering Love, Lee attacked the monster with all his strength and fury. The skill was Continuous Slash. It temporarily cuts the enemy. The Falcon Eye broadcast began. Insults rained down on him in the chat. The Eye discussed the identity of the person on the flyer and where he was going. He called on all the characters who had been deleted because of the monster to join him. Right now, Hawk's Eye is trying to track down this monster. He planned to expose everything today. Meanwhile, Urakan dodged all of Lee Ji-woo's hardest blows. Lee Ji-woo was completely baffled. Then Urakan introduced himself and said that he was the lost head of Urus. Now Urus understood why the sensations in the valley felt familiar, and he was certain that this was the one behind the disappearance of all the monsters. And for the death of the boss Love. Only now did Lee realize that the character Love had truly been deleted. He put his hand forward and gave Urakan a weak blow. Another one and another and another. Falcon Eye was watching the fight from nearby, and all his spectators. They all recognized the guy who had caused the end of the world earlier. Hawkeye had a score to settle with this bandit, because it was because of him that the leader had lost everything. And then he aimed his arrow at Lee and fired. But he hit the monster's horn, which split in two. At that moment, the chat participants began to write that their characters were coming back to life. The stolen souls were returned to their owners. Hurricane's level was reduced, as were his skill points. Now his level was 723. He slowed down. The energy he had absorbed was disappearing. As it turned out, the player's data had not been deleted, but moved to Urakan's horn. Mr. King was surprised that the developer had not known this earlier. But he was only the head of the design team, so it was no surprise. Delighted, Lee Ji-woo realized that if he finally defeated the monster, Love would return to the game. The battle continued. The stolen souls returned one by one, and Urakan's level dropped and dropped. The number of viewers on Hawk's Eye increased. Now the players' opinions in the chat about Lee were divided. After all, it was thanks to him that the players were coming back to life. One of the viewers of the broadcast was Love. She watched as her panties mercilessly destroyed this monster, and realized that he had deceived her from the beginning. In the game, Urakan was already exhausted. He was already at level 180. He had returned to his original state. It was time to wrap things up. Then Urakan brought his tentacle close to Lee Ji-woo's chest. The whole world froze in anticipation. He began to devour Lee, and it seemed like he succeeded. How delicious it was. Urakan was beside himself with happiness. But it wasn't enough. He would never be able to satisfy his hunger. The unfortunate Urus sat with his head bowed near his master's club. Hidden skill healing factor activated. Damaged body parts will be restored. Something burst out of Uruk's chest. Of course it was Lee Ji-woo who was resurrecting. Mr. King, who was watching this, did not expect such a turn of events. When the healing factor is activated, the absorbed cells return to their original owner. That's exactly what happened. However, most of them merged with Urakan's cells. Therefore, Urakan was also absorbed under the influence of the healing factor. A hidden skill was acquired by Lee Ji-woo. The skill of gluttony absorbs all targets upon contact. The dark-haired girl was still there. She hadn't expected this, but it was fun. As it turned out from her words, she was the same age as Lee. Summoning her staff, the girl created a huge clawed paw in the air. It hovered over Lee Ji-woo. The girl stood on her palm and, saying goodbye to Lee, disappeared. Mr. King revealed that her name was Luna. The players greeted Lee Ji-woo at the village gate. He had saved all their lives this time. He was their new hero. Lee's secret was revealed. His power was no longer a mystery. The Falcon's Eye broadcast attracted a record number of viewers. However, not everyone considered Lee a hero. People remembered how he had recently destroyed a planet and 3 million people at once. But to everyone's surprise, Hawk's Eye stood up for Lee. After all, taking a character's life and completely deleting them are not the same thing. Hawk's Eye approached Lee and greeted him warmly. Knowing that this guy was working alone, Hawkeye offered Lee Ji-woo to join the Justice Guild. Upon hearing this, players began to call him to join their guilds. There were so many people who wanted to be friends with Lee that he had to run away from them. He became insanely popular. Suddenly, Lee bumped his head into a wall that had appeared right in the middle of the square. As it turned out, it was a statue of Lee Ji-woo himself, standing at full height in shorts and a cloak. Behind him stood the former members of the Hulasan Guild, dressed in the same shorts and capes. Mr. Wang was now their leader. He had spent a fortune on this statue. Impressed by Lee, Mr. Wang built this statue in his honor at his own expense. He and his guild sold everything to build the statue for over 20 billion. So now they too are only wearing shorts and raincoats. In her room, Han Sarang cried bitterly. She was mad that Lee had tricked her. It was all so obvious with the brass knuckles and the missing bear cubs. Finally, people calmed down a little. Lee was exhausted from all the attention, and it seemed to him that on top of everything else, he had forgotten something incredibly important. And there she was, standing in front of him, his boss, Love. Lee jumped up with a smile, happy that she had come back to life. People wondered why the hero called this girl his boss, especially since her face was familiar to everyone. Lee had something for Love. He handed her the belt he had taken from the hill. Love's eyes were full of rage and her fists were clenched. The first thing Love asked was why he had lied to her. Lee Ji-woo tried to brush it off as a joke, which only made Love angrier. She was already on the verge of tears. Then Love asked if he was the one who had given her a gift at her apartment door. And then it dawned on Lee. Could it be her? Without fear of revealing her secret, Love declared publicly that she was Han Sarang. Manager Han was furious that she had revealed her identity in front of so many players. Now it was the most popular topic on the internet. Dozens of journalists were eager to interview Han, and unfounded rumors spread everywhere. On top of that, Han's appearance in the game was made to look as much like her real self as possible. Han herself didn't see a problem with being recognized. She had no intention of deliberately hiding her identity in the game. Playing a game isn't a sin. But her manager was worried that the image of the star Han Sarang would be destroyed. After all, she was already pretending to be a sweet little lamb in front of the public. But that wasn't Han's choice. She didn't want to wear that mask in the first place. Han had said from the very beginning that she wanted the truth. She hated deceiving her fans. Slamming the door to her room, Han Sarang lay down and re-entered the game. Han Sarang had loved the public since she was 5 years old. Even in kindergarten, she enjoyed reciting poems. She discovered her talent for singing at the same age. She made an amazing debut. She was recognized as a talent. She was called a singer from heaven. Her debut was the most brilliant. However, tragedy seemed to be waiting for the right moment. The bud of a beautiful flower was trampled by vile adults, by those who were supposed to protect her from the world, by her own parents. Strangely enough, money was to blame. Some may say that this is commonplace in the entertainment industry, but for a little girl, it was a tragedy. The girl seemed to have turned into the heroine of a tearjerker, and so Han Sarang was loaded with work. Various music programs, talk shows, and all kinds of other shows. Lots of advertising shoots and so on. She coped with a schedule that would be impossible even for adults, strangely enough because of her parents. They put moral pressure on her and forced her to be better. However, her little body quickly reached its limit. As a result, under enormous pressure, the girl vomited on stage in front of the audience at a very important event. Not only did Khan's parents not support her, but they also blamed her for everything. They were ashamed of her. That's how she got a deep scar in her heart. And now she has been betrayed again. Love sat and remembered her first meeting with Lee. He came up behind her. He had finally found her. She didn't want to talk to him and told him to leave her alone. For some reason, Lee couldn't understand why Love was so angry with him and what was wrong with her. Even Urus understood. He said that Lee would have to apologize for his lies, which Lee did. He apologized. He didn't understand why he had started hiding his power from Love in the first place, but one apology wouldn't fix anything. It wasn't enough for Love. Suddenly, a huge monster bird flew by and grabbed Love with its claws. The bird was controlled by a guy. He didn't want Love to lose consciousness, but the bird grabbed her too roughly. Then Lee Ji-woo demanded that the guy come down and explain himself. The guy said that there were people who wanted to meet Han Sarang and that they would borrow her for a while. Of course, Lee had no intention of giving up Love and used a vertical strike, but the guy activated his skill, Reflection, and the blow returned to the ground, creating a long funnel near Lee Ji-woo. The dragon Urus said that this was no ordinary person. His name was Habek, the god of water. He was a creature of the same kind as Urus himself. Lee's power shocked Habek. He was the only one who could break it, not counting that man. It will take a long time to repair. However, an ordinary man does not deserve to have a piece of a god. That was undoubtedly Habek's captive, the player Love, and he took her away. In the Western Forest, there was a hidden tower. It was there that the stolen Love awoke. Naturally, she had no idea where she was, who was in front of her, or why she was there. The kind-hearted Habek repeated that he did not want to harm her, but that someone else really wanted to see Miss Sarang. Love recognized the two people who entered immediately. They were her father and mother. Painful memories from her childhood flooded back. After that day on stage, Han Sarang decided to end her singing career. However, some people couldn't accept this. It was Han Sarang's parents. Her mother even resorted to physical violence. They wouldn't let her leave. And again, they took her to the stage. Han's parents explained all their actions by saying that they loved her and only wanted what was best for her. For many years, Han Sarang was unable to end her career. When her income completely dried up, Han Sarang's parents finally crossed the line. They sold her to wealthy men. These people did not deserve to be called parents. They had only one child and they sold her. It was a miracle that Han Sarang managed to escape. She ended up at the police station. Thus, Han Sarang was freed from the hell that had tormented her for many years. The guardianship authorities deprived her parents of their parental rights. Her parents wanted to appeal the verdict, but of course, it didn't work. Thanks to the law, Han Sarang was completely freed from them. However, unfortunately, this did not heal the girl's broken psyche. Han suffered trauma, serious trauma, because of vile lies. From that day on, Han Sarang did not leave her room. She escaped from the real world into a virtual one. She sat alone for days on end in a dark room. Han's eyesight quickly deteriorated as a result, and she was prescribed glasses. Because of her memories of those days, she became anxious about taking them off. The day she would step out into the real world will be told a little later. And now those terrible people were standing in front of her again, her parents. The court order did not apply to the game. They saw an article about Khan playing Chrono Life. And then, with the help of Habek, they found her here. Habek left the room and left them alone. Han's mother talked about how much they missed her and how happy they were to see her, even if only in the game. How they regretted that the guardianship had separated them. Of course, Han didn't believe a word. She wondered what they wanted from her. If it wasn't important, she would log out of the game. Her parents began to apologize. They claimed to regret being so cruel when they sold her. They wanted to be reunited with their daughter and live together again. Meanwhile, Haebyok, who was outside, saw a familiar character. Of course, it was Lee Jiwoo who had come for his girlfriend. Urus showed him the way, as the people there didn't know about this place. Lee wanted to fight to get revenge. Then Haebyok snapped his fingers and his monstrous bird soared into the sky, ready to attack. And then there were 2 birds. 3, 4, 5, 6. In a second, they filled the sky within Lee Jiwoo's field of vision. 4th panorama, photocopy, another of Haebyok's skills. The birds rushed to attack Lee Jiwoo. He barely managed to fight them off. Then Urus explained, this is the 8th panorama's skill. Each panorama has different effects. Hubuk was also a boss monster that had to be defeated. Then Lee tried a continuous slash attack, one after another. Suddenly, Hubak realized that his item had broken again. He hadn't expected Lee to be so quick. Lee demanded an answer as to what the peace of God meant and why he needed love. But the fearless Hubak refused to answer. His item was broken, but Hubak could use it one last time. Opposite Lee appeared his ghostly double, the photocopy skill. The copy attacked the real Lee, and he lost all his health. Habek himself did not expect such an effect. Then Urus asked Habek why he was doing this. Was it really that man's order? But Habek didn't even think of answering. Lee Ji-woo, who had healed himself, tried to attack the clone with a vertical strike. The 2 forces merged together in battle. 2 men, 2 clubs. They fought for quite a long time. While this was happening, Haebyok told Urus that he had no interest in Lee. His only goal was the particle of God. Urus thought he was talking about boss love, but an ordinary human being cannot be a piece of God. Han Sarang is the owner of that piece. Han's mother apologized and noticed that her daughter wasn't wearing brass knuckles, so she grabbed her by the arm. These brass knuckles were worth 10 million and were the piece of God that had ended up in Love's hands. The items in the game were divided into different classes. The first was the most shameful, ordinary class. The second was the rare class. The third was the unique class. And the last, divine class. Above all of these was the supreme class, which Haebyok had never encountered. However, Lee and Urus had seen it, but no one else knew about it. Even if you ignore strength and rarity, a piece of a god is especially valued by the gods. The dark-haired girl sat in the distance watching them and wondering why men couldn't keep their mouths shut. Haebyok told her everything. She wasn't the only one thinking about it. Sitting next to her was a guy with long golden hair who had once introduced himself to Lee as a creator. Luna had also collected god particles in the past. As expected, this creator knew everything from the very beginning. Everything that had happened before and everything that was happening now. The battle between the clone and Lee Ji-woo continued. Their characteristics and control were identical. But there is a difference between a user and a bot. Unlike humans, copies do not get tired. And that changed the situation dramatically. But Lee was thrilled. All his previous opponents didn't even put up a fight. Finally, a real fight. It was a lot of fun for him, and he didn't want to stop. But he had 2 ways to finish off the clone. Luna was sure he was bluffing. Unlike other bosses, Haebyok is not so simple, and he cannot be destroyed alone. His 8 panoramas are a very complex deception skill. In Luna's opinion, Lee would not be able to defeat him by any means. Lee's first plan was to destroy the planet again, but that was boring. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief. Even Mr. King, who was watching, hoped that Lee would choose the second method. Love's mother, completely distraught, demanded to know where the silenced brass knuckles were. Hubak was willing to pay generously for them. That was the reason they had appeared. But Love didn't know where the brass knuckles were. Her father was sure she had just hidden them. He hit her in the face when Love started crying and saying that she really didn't know where they were. A strange light appeared around Lee and his clone. It was the same purple aura used for the gluttony skill. But Lee's copy began to copy this skill as well. They were devouring each other. But Lee had a third way. To devour the one who created this clone. And Lee succeeded. Haebyok no longer existed. Or so Lee thought, but he was wrong. Haebyok survived, but he was cornered. He decided to give up his attempt to seize the silenced brass knuckles. In fact, this particle of God was absorbed by Urakan, but Haebyok did not know this. Luna did not tell him, and now she was having a lot of fun with it. Practically defeated, Haebyok ran away, and he threw his mysterious object at Lee, his mirror. It contained one of the skills of the 8 panoramas. Neither Lee nor Urus could believe that Haebyok had given away the mirror voluntarily, supposedly as a reward for clearing the raid. In return, Haebyok asked for mercy. Now all that remained was to find Love, the main target, the one his father had been beating in the tower all this time, for allegedly preventing them from getting their money, and allegedly blaming Han for their suffering. Since they failed to get the silenced brass knuckles, they now wanted to get the money from Han Sarang for free. In the game, she couldn't escape from them, and the court had no jurisdiction here. Exhausted and depressed, Han prayed in her heart that someone would save her from this hell, and Han Sarang's prayers were answered. Han's parents began to insult Lee and try to chase him away. But Lee Ji-woo would not tolerate this and hit Han's father with a club. Not hard yet. Lee respected his elders, but these selfish old men were an exception. Han didn't want to believe that these were his parents. Normal parents don't beat their children and extort money from them. On top of everything else, Lee didn't understand why Love was just sitting there while she was being beaten. He asked her about it. After all, she was of a higher rank here. Lee tried to stir up her anger, but he didn't know how Han had lived before and what emotional trauma she had suffered. Her mother came over again and hit her in the face. She believed that they were the victims. Remembering her childhood, all her resentment and humiliation, all her pain, Love gathered herself and rushed at her parents, and she won. In real life, Han Sarang no longer hid her passion for games and gave interviews. Han told her fans that beating up and destroying monsters was a good way to relieve stress. Now Han Sarang has finally overcome her trauma and is living a peaceful life. The anxiety that had been troubling her has also disappeared, and she no longer needs glasses. Not wanting to deceive anyone anymore, Han Sarang admitted that it was in gaming that she could be her true self. A satisfied Lee also watched the interview. He was proud of Han Sarang and her courage. Everyone supported her. Her courage and honesty. She gained even more fans. Idol Han Sarang overcame her trauma and truly escaped the gaming world. Lee will support her. Han's real life also became happy. As usual, Trusiki was late again, for which he was scolded by Love. But he had been watching a music show featuring her. After overcoming her trauma, Han Sarang didn't give up gaming. She even started playing more often. Her schedule was even cut by a third. After calming down, Love announced that she wanted Lee to teach her. This time, she called him Sensei. Due to the huge number of players, there are many guilds in the game. The best of the best are in the top 5. Their reputation is well deserved. They have sufficient resources and distinctive qualities. However, one of these guilds took a completely different path. They collect data more valuable than the World Guild. Their comprehensive information network covers the entire continent. All members of the guild belong to the Thief class. The Robin Hood Guild, but even they were destroyed in a single night. Not all of them ceased their activities, however. One of the masked players was caught by another who took his life, just for fun. The passengers were almost there. Soon they would arrive at the Stone Mountain dungeon. The passengers of this cat were Lee and Love. 5 minutes later, they arrived at their destination. Meow carts were a popular form of transportation in the game. The demon cat had been transported from the demon world and trained. He was then trained to pull the carriage. He was level 130. Surprisingly, the founder of this service was an ordinary monster tamer. They were heading to the Stone Mountain. This dungeon was made of giant stones. The highest point was more than a kilometer above sea level. On average, the monsters there were level 30. Because of their large numbers, many beginners came here to raise their level. The reason Love and Lee Ji-woo were there was for training. Lee had a gift for Love. They were excellent brass knuckles. They were of an even higher rank than the ones Love had before. It was the first gift Love had ever received, and it moved her to tears. This surprised Lee, as she was an idol and Han had many fans. But Lee was different. Love sincerely thanked Lee for such a wonderful gift. Suddenly, the cat went berserk and nearly overturned the cart. Love fell on Lee. The cat didn't stop for no reason. Someone was standing in front of the carriage. It was a man in a mask from Robin Hood's guild. The masked man asked for help. He seemed to be injured. He was put in the carriage next to Lee and Love. There he said that he knew almost nothing about his attacker, only his name, and also that he was an unusual user. He could copy objects. His name was Trophy Guy. None of the people in the cart had heard of him before. Lee asked the guy who he was, but Love knew that he was Hong from the Robin Hood Guild. When Hong took off his mask, it turned out to be a girl. A very beautiful one at that. Lee suddenly felt a strong desire to help her, although he hadn't felt that way before. This behavior caused a surge of irritation in Love. Hong was glad that Lee agreed to help, because this matter had something to do with him. At the Chrono Life headquarters, the workday was coming to an end. Some people had to work overtime. Then Timlid So Sung-won said he was willing to work for everyone. He was the same man who had attacked Hong. His appearance in the game was the same as in real life. When everyone left, Timlid sighed calmly. Now he could play alone. It was time to earn some extra money. The Trophy Guy was back in the game. He had an executioner's sword. It was a unique weapon. There was only one of them in existence, and it possessed amazing destructive power. As it turned out, the Trophy Guy was also a master and had the highest level in the game. When Love finally put on Lee's gift, the excellent brass knuckles, something strange happened. They looked very shabby and worn out. Due to Love's low level, the weapon's full potential was sealed. A unique item would have been better in this case, so Love's level needed to be raised urgently. But when Love placed her hand on the stone, fire burst out in all directions, and she had barely touched it. This was despite the fact that it was only a small part of the brass knuckles' power. Discussing with Urus, Hong Lee thought that he would have to help her after all. According to her, it all had something to do with him. According to Hong, the Trophy Guy's only goal is money. He copies items and sells them. According to information from the Robin Hood Guild, Lee is also a merchant. That means he has a lot of money. By carrying out various financial transactions, Trophy Guy is creating problems for the game. And now only Lee can defeat him before he destroys the game even more. It turns out that Lee had no choice. It will be more difficult to sell if Trophy Guy is left alone. If it was impossible to report Trophy Boy to support, there can only be one reason: a conspiracy by higher-ups. In the real world, Lee dialed the president's number and ordered him to go to the restaurant Dam Gukbap before he broke the server again. Leaving his apartment, Lee Ji-woo ran into Han Sarang. She wanted to go with him to meet the president. Han also warned her manager that she would be out for a short walk. Out of his mind with rage, the president burst into the restaurant. How dare Lee call him and give him orders? He saw two people at the table. Of course, Lee and Han Sarang were already having lunch at the table. Furry started yelling wildly at Lee. Han interrupted him and said it was time to get down to business. Mr. King listened with particular attention to the story about the Trophy Boy and his work. He thought it was something important, but the government had approved in-game money transactions for a reason. No genius hacker could hack into the national security system. Lee claimed that someone had seen it with their own eyes, to which Mr. King replied that Hong was mistaken. The probability was less than 1/10,000%. Then Han pointed out that if hacking from the outside was impossible, then it must have been from within the company. Mr. King thought about it for a second, but then said that was also impossible. Even with administrator privileges, it's useless to add item copying skills. On that note, Furry left and told the guys to enjoy their date, which embarrassed Lee greatly. Leaving the restaurant, Furry turned to Timlid. They needed to find 5 people who could keep secrets. Lee, Love, and Eurus returned to the beginning. Furry's conversation had yielded nothing. Love was curious about the Trophy Guy's true goal. After all, he hadn't attacked the Robin Hood Guild for no reason. Suddenly, an explosion rang out in the distance. It sounded like one of Lee's attacks. It was unclear what it was at that point. Lee rushed over. Trophy Guy stood over the wounded Hubek with his sword. Hubek realized that the manager would hardly turn a blind eye to such behavior. The Trophy Guy grabbed Hubek by the throat. He knew that unique bosses could not be revived. Until he destroyed Habeck, the trophy guy tried to find out where his master was, but he remained silent, and the trophy guy raised his sword. But he was stopped. He thought about visiting her later, but she showed up herself, the goddess of life, Luna. The self-confident trophy guy was going to deal with Luna after Habeck. She smiled and said it was useless. Logging into the manager's account, he behaved like an idiot. Then Luna and the trophy guy started insulting each other in a rude manner. Approaching Luna, Trophy Boy began to interrogate her about where Master Habeck was. Remembering Lee, Luna noticed that Trophy Guy had a similar personality to him, but at the same time, they were complete opposites. A second later, a huge clawed paw was pressing down on Trophy Guy. But somehow the trophy guy managed to escape. He realized that Luna was the owner of this thing. That's where her arrogance came from. This is going to be trouble. The ground beneath them turned red. GM zone? The game manager's zone. Trophy guy yelled at Luna to stop turning the game into real life. Lee and Love ran to the scene as fast as they could. They assumed that the explosion was caused by the trophy guy, and that he was someone from the company's management, someone from their own side. Lee was also almost certain that the trophy guy had created a super account for himself and was now at work. When they arrived, all that remained was a trace of the trophy guy's portal, as reported by Habeck, who was sitting under a tree nearby. Habeck also reported that the trophy guy had attacked him and moved Luna to the game control area so they could fight at full strength. Although Lee didn't know who Luna was, according to Habeck, she constantly talked about him. That he was deeply in love. Habeck briefly described Luna's appearance. Lee understood immediately who he was talking about. In front of Lovely, he began to justify himself, saying that he didn't like Luna. This scene seemed very powerful and romantic to Urusu. The wounded Habeck was in bad shape. He hoped that Lee could heal him. After all, his mirror would disappear if Habeck died. Love didn't know how to heal Habeck, but Lee wasn't worried about that. His unique skill, the spirit of revival, worked perfectly. Lee managed to restore Habeck's physical strength, but not his arm. Lee also learned that Luna was a unique boss. She was now alone with the trophy guy. She wasn't afraid of him at all. So far, none of his attacks against her had been successful. The goddess of life, Luna, was very powerful. She was confident that an ordinary human could not destroy a deity like her. But Trophy Guy, as an employee of the company, knew about her hidden skill, creation of existence. Attacks worked on her, but Luna recreated herself when she died. This skill was the subject of much debate during the design phase. Uricon was created using this skill from Urus's second head, thanks to Luna. And then, when Luna finally attacked Trophy Boy, she began to change unexpectedly. He had lured her into this space for a reason, so that Luna would return to her original state. And then the Trophy Guy wounded her. He hoped that if he destroyed her, Master Habeck would definitely come out of the shadows. After work, the company employees were sitting in a nightclub. And of course, Timlid was there with his girlfriend. His colleague asked if Timlid had finished his business. But Master Habeck still hadn't shown up, even though Luna was dead. But Timlid reported that he hadn't been able to destroy her. But he didn't say who exactly had stopped him. There are other ways to summon Master Habeck. The employee finally asked who this master was and why they were looking for him. In simple terms, he was one of the bosses related to the main plot of the game. The best merchant, Laziness Ryo, laziness. And Uricon was gluttony. These were the 7 sins. They are often used in movies, games, and so on. Pride, greed, sloth, gluttony, envy, wrath, and lust. These are the sins that gave rise to all the others. The concept of the bosses in Chrono Life. Pride is Urus, gluttony is Uricon, sloth is Rayot, and lust is Luna. But she is not an NPC. As it turns out, even a regular user can become a boss if they want to. The freedom in this game is much greater than it seems. Lee Love and Habeck discuss the same topic. So Luna is something between a regular user and a non-player character. But they didn't know that for sure yet. The trophy guy knew though. But why did Trophy Guy want to meet laziness so badly? Habeck only had a guess. Particles of a god. An item of divine class. Hong appeared in the clearing. She suggested that everyone take a walk since she had found Trophy Guy's hideout. A wooden house in the middle of the forest. A fairly ordinary place. Hong checked the owner of the house using judgment. It was her skill. But Hong couldn't see inside. No one could enter except the owner. But Lee calmly broke through the wall with his club, making a huge hole. They didn't even have to go inside to see what was in the house. There was a huge mountain of gold, trophies, and so on. Everything was covered in jewels. And according to Hong, none of these items were copies. Moreover, all of the items were of divine quality. According to rough estimates, there was about 5 billion worth of items. The trophy hunter left it there because of limited space in his inventory. As expected, his goal was divine items. They can be sold so that the company doesn't notice the fraud. And there is someone who constantly buys these items. Master Habeck. The best merchant in Ryo. That's why he's needed by the trophy guy. For money and divine items. Since Ryo is the best merchant and not an ordinary user, there is no risk of information leakage. And so that the economy doesn't suffer too much, he would sell them separately. As a result, there is almost no risk of getting caught. Hong told me all this. If all this is filmed and sent to customer support, the case will definitely move forward, since the manager was hiding all these items. But Lee thought that would be too easy. First, he needed to teach the trophy guy a lesson, so he put on a mask. They met him in the village square. Even with a mask on, trophy guy recognized Lee Ji-woo. The Robin Hood Guild was on duty on the rooftops. Hong was surprised that Trophy Guy showed up as Panties had predicted. He called him to carry out his plan. First, they gathered all the jewels in the house and took them away. When Trophy Boy returned home, he saw that the wall of his house had been destroyed and the inside was empty. His personal hideout, protected by a security system, had been ransacked. But there was something there after all. A note lying alone on the floor. It was a message from Lee saying that if he wanted his things back, he should come to the village at a certain time tomorrow. When they met, the Trophy Guy started harassing Lee and asking for his money. Then Lee took one of the items out of his bag, a divine class fire dragon dagger. If the trophy guy took even one step, Lee promised to sell him to the bots. Using one of his skills, the trophy guy suddenly appeared behind him, transgressing. He took Lee into the control zone with him. In a rage, the trophy guy yelled about how Lee dared to mess with the administrator. They started a fight. The mask flew off Lee Ji-woo and split in two. He didn't like that. In an insane state, Trophy Guy yelled that all players were the same and had no respect for developers. All they got was criticism and humiliation, and so did he. At that time, he was too. That was about 7 years ago. Timlid was still a naive young developer. But for Lee, this did not change Trophy Guy's criminal intentions or justify his actions. As it turned out, Trophy Guy also had a healing factor and a hidden power skill, the Spirit of the Titan. Lee Ji-woo did not expect such a turn of events. The user gained the power of a Titan with this skill. After using it, Trophy Guy instantly transformed. The Spirit of the Titan burst out of him. His damage and attack range were increased by 1,000% during execution. Lee loved this skill and asked Trophy Guy to give it to him. He then activated the Gluttony skill. With this skill, all of his stats were consumed and transferred to the new owner. But it wasn't that simple. Activating the Agility skill, Trophy Guy slipped away at the speed of light. The Trophy Guy now had a clear advantage over Lee. However, at the same time, Lee had more control over the process and thought with his head instead of his emotions, and was able to hit his opponent with his club. He turned off the recoil control option in the game settings. Lee then suggested they stop fooling around and end this already. After all, he had a plan. How to defeat Trophy Guy. Raising his hand, Lee said goodbye. His hand glowed purple. In the village, Love was worried about panties. After all, it wasn't easy to defeat the manager. Did Lee have a plan, and if so, what was it? He didn't tell anyone. One thing bothered Hong, the reason why Mr. Panties left a note, and postponed it for a day. She thought that the reason was somehow related to defeating Trophy Boy. A purple glow enveloped the entire space around them. Lee used his summon skill. This amused Trophy Guy because it was very weak and meant nothing. With low charisma and intelligence, this skill was useless. At Lee's level, a very weak character should have appeared. It was worth it. Trophy Guy's mouth opened in surprise. Lee summoned Mr. King himself. Last night, when Timlid was leaving the club with his friends, he met this very Mr. King. Under some pressure, this friend told Furry about all of Tamlid's plans to sell his belongings and go abroad once he had earned enough money. For all this valuable information, Mr. King thanked none other than Lee Ji-woo. Thanks to him, the criminal was caught before the case gained serious momentum. And now the president is here to teach Trophy Boy a lesson, then fire him and take everything he can legally get. Frightened, Timlid tried to leave, but it was impossible during the battle. Then Timlid canceled the control zone. Lee was afraid that he would run away, but Furry opened the presidential zone. This zone was green. Trophy Guy was beside himself with rage and despair at the same time. He had no choice but to rush at the president with his weapon, but when he struck, he hit an invisible shield. All of the president's stats and skills were naturally infinite. After informing Timlid that he was fired, President Furry punched him in the face and incapacitated him with a single blow that stunned Lee. In any case, that was the end of it. All the divine items were returned to their rightful owners. It turned out that other guilds besides Robin Hood's had also been looted. Lee later learned that Timlid had been fired that same day. Even in reality, the old man beat him like a dog and kicked him out. The foolish man wanted to sue the president for compensation for the beating, but only got himself into trouble. Because of the counterclaim, the president entered the second round angry, and the team of lawyers fought off all the charges. It would take a lifetime to pay for the damage caused to the company. They say that Timlid's path to the industry is now closed forever. After that, Lee's business life returned to normal. Everything is back to the way it was. After leaving the game, Lee realized that what was bothering him was the fact that he never got to ask who Luna really was. Then Lee realized that there was a girl sitting on the couch next to him whom he had never seen before in his life. But he knew her well from the game. It was her, Luna. And now Lee and Luna are sitting together eating instant noodles. Now he no longer had any doubts that she was a bot. She was a real user. Now Lee remembered the hurtful words she had said about him and his parents when they first met. Now Lee demanded an explanation of who she was, where she got his address, and house password. She didn't answer. After that, Lee decided to find out what her real hair color was. On the first day of the game, it was light pink. She said it was black. Next question. Since Luna was a unique boss and had been defeated by the Trophy Guy, Lee was interested in whether her character had been deleted. The girl said that although she had died, her character had not been deleted. Essentially, her human form had been destroyed. When the manager attacked in the red zone, her divine power disappeared. Otherwise, she would have died as a unique boss, and the character would have been deleted. Lee asked if she planned to kill 1,000 players again to become a goddess of life. But it wasn't that simple. That was only one of the conditions. There were several conditions, and they were more complicated. Next, Lee Ji-woo wanted to hear the answer to his first questions. Who was she, and why did she keep appearing in his path? Again, no answer. Instead, Luna made him an offer. She asked Lee to become her. Not understanding what that meant, Lee even panicked a little. Then the doorbell rang. Who could it be? Han Sarang's voice came from behind the door. She was calling Lee. She needed to discuss something with him. Lee didn't know what to do. It wouldn't be good if Han caught him alone with Luna. But Lee didn't have much choice, so he had to open the door and let Han Sarang in. She noticed the noodle box on the table, but there was only one. Han Sarang had come to find out what time Lee was going to log into the game tomorrow. Since it was a day off, they had agreed to meet in the morning to continue Love's training. After threatening Lee not to be late or oversleep again, Han Sarang left his apartment. Stepping outside, Han exhaled. She was embarrassed. Before leaving, she had taken Lee's phone number, and now she was worried that she hadn't acted natural enough. She needed to text him right away. Luna returned to the table with her noodles. She didn't understand why she had been told to hide. After all, they weren't doing anything wrong, but her presence was strange enough in itself. And then Luna announced that she intended to spend the night at Lee's place. But it was a joke. She was ready to leave as soon as she heard his answer. Since Luna's request sounded too ambiguous, she explained. Simply put, she just wanted Lee to team up with her in the game. Meanwhile, Habek arrived at his master's place, Mr. Rayet Laziness. He was sitting in his palace, on a huge throne, the unique boss of the 7 deadly sins, the great merchant Ryo. The master asked about Habek's hand. Habek apologized for failing to preserve the body given to him by his master. Then Ryo silently waved his hand and Habek instantly gained a second hand, whole and unharmed. Next, Rayot wanted to know who had wounded Habek. He thought it was Lee's fault, but as it turned out, Lee had saved his life. According to Habek, Lee was the most suitable candidate to replace one of the 7 deadly sins. The Silver Coast on the ground was a training ground for players of level 30 and above. The slime, a liquid monster that lived there, was very popular with beginners. The slime was level 33 and would destroy a player's body with a single touch. However, a beginner would not be able to handle the monster there. The huge octopus Kraken, level 85, a summoned boss. It has tough skin that can only be scratched by the sharpest blade, and limbs that allow it to move freely both on land and in water. The strongest character with a very fierce temper. This boss leaves newbies with irreparable injuries. But luckily Lee Ji-woo wasn't a newbie and was super confident. He landed a blow and let Love finish it off. A clean finishing blow. Love was good at what she did and easy to teach. But unfortunately, due to the difference in level between the boss and Love, she didn't gain any experience. Thanks to her excellent brass knuckles, Love's diving dragon strike became more powerful than before. The higher the level, the better they work. With a certain jealousy, Luna watched Lee and Love from nearby in the sky. After all, Lee had refused to join her because, among other things, he was on Love's team, and she would never forgive him for that. Luna began to envy Love and felt a desire to destroy her, but not now. For now, it was best to let the situation be. Soon, Lee would do everything himself because she would become his property. Luna was sure of that, for the sake of the ending of Chrono Life. Well, Eurus tried to prove to Lee that he couldn't help Love because of the difference in their levels, but Lee didn't care. He liked being around her. It wasn't the first time Love had noticed Lee talking to himself. She couldn't see Eurus. Lee had forgotten about that, but there was a way she could. If Lee shared his mana with the little dragon, Urus could take on a physical form for everyone to see, but Lee's stats were practically 0 in all the main parameters. But in principle, it should have been enough, and they did it right then and there. The materialization of Urus's soul. Urus's soul was materialized. Lav was wildly excited by the cute little dragon and immediately wanted to cuddle it. Urus himself was in shock. He was a strong boss, ruthless and merciless, and now he was being squeezed like a soft toy. Then Habek suddenly appeared with his bird. The situation became complicated, and Habek hurried to find Lee. While Lee was admiring how Habek's hand had been restored, Habek said that there was no time to waste because this man was about to do something. But Lee didn't let him finish. Hubek tried to say something again, but suddenly the ground shook as if from a violent earthquake. That meant the man was already there. Master Habeck had arrived, the master of the Great Throne, and he was not alone but accompanied by a crowd of guards and servants. Soldiers in angelic armor accompanied Len Rayot. Lee thought it would be a great monster because he was called the boss. Lazy Rayot himself descended from his huge throne to meet Lee, who opened his mouth in wild surprise. Meanwhile, Luna came to the strongest man of her time, to the first hero, Mr. Yopi, who died 100 years ago. No one knows whose idea it was, but Luna knew it would happen. But the story of this game is childish and cliched. That's what makes it special. With her staff, Luna summoned a pillar of fire and directed it at the hero. Laziness is one of the deadly sins. His entourage is from the strongest angelic tribe. He is also called the Great Merchant. His throne is made of pure gold. But his appearance impressed Lee Ji-woo and Love the most, but not the little dragon Eurus. On his throne, this boy looked like he was in the middle of a huge room, but he was very charismatic. Approaching Lee, Ryo asked if he was the hero everyone was talking about. Lee was shocked. He felt like a child was mocking him. Lee flew into a rage at these taunts, but Ryo instantly stopped him with a kick to the face. No one, including Habeck, understood why Ryo had attacked. But Len reminded Habeck that they existed precisely to oppose humans, and that it was very foolish to get close to them. Lee suddenly agreed with him. After all, a user and an artificially created character cannot be friends. He tried to attack in response. Riot then began to explain that by defeating the strongest boss in the game, Eurus, Lee had hastened their meeting. He had a role to play in the raid at the end of the game, but Lee destroyed Eurus and ruined everything. Urakan's gluttony also shouldn't have been devoured so quickly and easily. They were supposed to be defeated in 10 years. Then Love tried to defend Lee and said that Urakan had attacked first. Ryo only looked at her contemptuously, and Love fell under an unknown pressure. Uru's and Ryo's eyes met. Ryo continued to say that Lee was the cause of all the problems, like a tumor destroying everything around him. The strongest man of all time, Yopi, was soon to be resurrected. Luna knew it was too early for him to awaken, so she came to share her power. It was Yopi's resurrection that Lee remembered. If he was a hero, he should be on the side of the people. But Ryo thought Lee was smarter. Yopi would not be resurrected as a human, but as one of the deadly sins. And his main and only goal would be to destroy the people who had betrayed him so viciously. And Yopi had his own army. Skeletons emerged from the ground, ready to serve their master. Luna succeeded. Yopi was resurrected and became one of the 7 deadly sins to take revenge. He had not only an army at his command, but also a huge, ferocious monster in the form of a dragon. The first hero of Yopi is now the Sin of Wrath. His eyes burned with rage and confidence. A continent that had existed since ancient times. Chrono. It was a place where there was no enmity or battle. A blessed world full of peace. However, one day, the devils appeared. The continent was turned into hell in an instant. They destroyed everything in their path. These monsters destroyed entire villages, burned houses, and took the lives of ordinary people. At that time, a ray of light pierced through the darkness of despair. Later, Yopi began to be called the first hero of the game. It turns out that the dark hero will be resurrected. Lee didn't understand why he should be afraid of him. After all, he was able to defeat even the strongest boss with a single blow in his time. Lee's stupidity annoyed Rayot immensely. The player should be afraid, even if Lee doesn't want to understand it. Then Rayot turned around and was about to leave. He looked at Lee, but then lost interest. He had once fought alongside Yopi, and he was the only person he recognized. But Lee Ji-woo couldn't let Ryo leave without striking back. Habeok tried to stop him. Somehow, Habeok knew that Lee earned money by selling items, and he learned from Habeok that all of Lee's items had been bought by Ryo. The hero Yopi knew that he was supposed to come back to life later, but Luna explained that the story was developing faster than it should have. Yopi promised to repay Luna for sharing her energy when he could. Once upon a time, Yopi defended this world. Now he intended to destroy it completely, and he teleported. Now her work was done. Luna was very pleased with herself, as always, but she wasn't entirely sure she had done the right thing. The guy calling himself the creator asked her not to think about it and to enjoy cleaning up this world. After buying Lee Ji-woo's items, Ryo sold them for even more profit. Lee asked him to teach him the business. He had no pride. Suddenly, they all heard something. Only Ryo understood that he was here, Yopi. Thus, the great decisive battle began suddenly. Yopi's monsters burned and captured villages, destroying residents and players. All players received a notification about a general quest: protect the world from the wrath of Yopi. The reward was still unknown. Only now did the players learn that there was a main quest in this game. The monsters were already everywhere. The players had very little chance of winning. And then she appeared using a fiery tornado to destroy some of the monsters. The most powerful mage in the kingdom of Abracadabra. By order of the kingdom, the Holy Land Guild would defend this place. The people's response was quick and precise. They learned their lesson from the events with Urakan and reacted to the attack in a timely manner. There was only one reason for their defeat. They were simply not ready. Originally, this main quest was supposed to begin years later. They had no chance of winning with their current stats and items. On the hero's mountain stood Yopi in front of 3 slabs. On one lay a wing, on another a musical instrument, and on the third a hat. These were once his friends. The first played the instrument and gave his music to people. The second was a messenger of God and always prayed for Yopi and the whole world. The third friend, who owned the hat, simply loved to have fun and was more carefree. Tears of blood welled up in Yopi's eyes as he remembered his best friends who were no longer there. Raising his burning hand, Yopi ordered his dead friends to rise. The earth above the graves opened up and they appeared, but they were no longer the people they had been before. All 4 of them had the highest level in the game and planned to finally finish the story once and for all. The level of the main quest increased. The difficulty level was catastrophic. Lee Ji-woo wasn't worried about this at all, even though Ryo tried to convince him that nothing would work without using holy powers, and the great destruction of the planet would also be useless this time. Even if the server was restarted after restoration, Yopi's army would not go anywhere. It no longer mattered how strong Lee was. One man is not an army, but the stubborn Lee Ji-woo was determined to try to handle it on his own. The frontline village was where everyone's journey began. Now it was almost completely destroyed. This once peaceful place had become a city of death in the blink of an eye. Users were starting to lose patience. Playing under such conditions was practically impossible. Some players quit the game and found simpler and safer activities. Others, on the contrary, believed that it was more fun than just mindlessly earning points, and that it had even become better. A new announcement was posted on the official Chrono Life website that shocked everyone even more. If everything written there is true, the game will soon cease to exist. Even the office staff understood that it was impossible to complete the current quest with the players' levels and equipment. Users from all over the world will be killed by Yopi. The developers believe that President King himself should step in and intervene, as he did last time. But King himself noted that the company's policy had always been non-interference in the game. The trophy guy was an exception. In the village engulfed by evil, Lee Ji-woo had already appeared. He was immediately surrounded by Yopi's army. Fighting them was not as easy as he had expected. It was time for Lee to use his gluttony skill. It worked, and his skills and stats increased after the absorption. Thanks to this, the points were recalculated and all skills were increased in points. Now Lee Ji-woo could wear armor. The undead, neither living nor sleeping. They had lost everything except their instincts. Even the strongest army was not afraid of death, but their instincts forced them to flee the battlefield out of overwhelming fear. The frontline village was attacked by about 2,000 skeletons. Even the strongest undead, the bone dragon who led the dragon tribe after Urus's disappearance, was devoured. When there was no one left, she appeared. The moon. She canceled the god's regime. And she appeared in her usual form. Then she did something completely unexpected. Approaching Lee Ji-woo, Luna threw herself at him with kisses. Lee had no idea what was happening. Pushing Luna away, Lee began to wipe his mouth. Luna said it was an accident and that she had simply slipped. With a sly smile, she raised her staff. Of course, Lee didn't believe her, but she noticed that his speed had already reached its maximum, and that if Lee wanted to, he could dodge her. But Luna had come here to give Lee something. She handed him a small golden ball. It was a precious stone of divine quality. Luna asked Lee to keep it a secret that she had it, and then gave it to him. That was why she had canceled her god mode. Since Luna was more serious than ever this time, Lee accepted her gift, although it was unclear what it was. Finally, Love reached the village. He had left so quickly that she had to run to catch up with him. Seeing Luna next to Lee, Love was taken aback. They were standing very close to each other. Love's female intuition told her that something was wrong. She approached and asked who she was. Love had already seen Luna, but in a different guise. Then Luna activated God mode and transformed. Luna then informed her that Yopi had already reached his maximum level due to the energy she had given him, so it would not be easy to fight him. By this time, he had probably already arrived at his destination, in the very heart of the demon world, the castle of the Demon King. It was located deep within the rocks. Yopi arrived not alone, but with his resurrected friends, if you can call them that now. Yopi was met by the assistant to the great Demon King, Doom. It was the Demon King who had originally destroyed the hero Yopi in the past. The assistant asked about Yopi's purpose for visiting, but it was obvious. He had come to retrieve his sword, a two-handed sword of divine class. The strongest sword that only a hero can wield. The energy of the Demon King was sealed within this sword, and if Yopi took it, something might happen. But Yopi didn't care. He was better than anyone else, and Yopi took the sword in his hands. Everything around him lit up with a poisonous green light. The condition was fulfilled. The hidden class job change would now begin. The job change is complete. Hidden class, Demon King. Professional privileges will be granted. All stats are increased tenfold. The first order as king was to summon the entire demon army and destroy the human world. The spatial gate was opened. The human world and the demon world are two dimensions that are not connected to each other. Not everyone has access to spatial teleportation like Yopi. The king's assistant, Death, also possesses this skill. He can open interdimensional gates with his mouth. Demons poured out of these gates in droves, thus began the invasion. Yopi's anger toward humanity was too strong. Li Ji-woo was ready to fight the demons. But then Luna told him that the demon race possessed unique layers and abilities. Their horns contained an endless source of magic. Already powerful, the demon army gained eternal bodies thanks to Yopi's energy. Combining the qualities of demons and the undead would create a truly powerful tribe. Even gluttony wouldn't be enough for such a large number. Then Li activated his basic priest skill. The holy item is perfect for the undead. Li Ji-woo performed a sacred ascending strike. The demon tribe. This tribe of reborn demons has strong bodies and endless magic. They gained even more power from Yopi. Li Ji-woo's divine sacred strike worked against the demons. But there was a catch. After being destroyed, the demons regenerated and revived in just a few seconds. And as long as the hero Yopi had enough mana, the demon army could not be destroyed. Li Ji-woo planned to continue using the sacred strike to reduce Yopi's mana, but Luna stopped him. It was a waste of time. It made more sense to try to destroy the hero Yopi himself. But to get to Yopi, they had to enter the demon world, and Li Ji-woo didn't know how. Then Love pointed to a hole in the sky where the demons were coming from. Then Luna noticed that the portal was a one-way hole and that if you went through it, you would be torn to pieces. To get back at Love, Luna suggested that Li Ji-woo use her magic to transport him to the demon world. Surprisingly, Li took her hand and asked her to take him to Yopi. Love was disappointed and hurt. Unfortunately, Li Ji-woo had no other choice because otherwise there was no way to get to Yopi. Love wanted to go with them, but that wasn't part of Luna's plan. Mocking Love even more, Luna said that they would return soon after their date, and they teleported away. Love realized that this woman was now her rival. Less than a minute later, Li and Luna were already standing in the Demon King's palace. The new Demon King, Yopi, sat on the throne. He had heard about Li Ji-woo and was waiting for him. Without further ado, Li Ji-woo delivered his most powerful blow. He was sure he had won. But the Demon King was unharmed. The curve of his wrist, his opponent's gaze, and his breathing all allowed the king to predict attacks and dodge them. But Li Ji-woo also understood something about this game and had some good skills. He managed to catch the king off guard and strike. Moreover, Li Ji-woo moved so quickly and deftly that the king couldn't keep up with his movements. Li Ji-woo enjoyed fighting at high speed much more than he had before. Left alone with the demons, Love was angry at Trusiki for leaving her here alone. The demon's level was at least 100, which was much lower than Love's. But Love was greatly helped by the divine brass knuckles, which completely closed the level gap. In addition, they have a hidden ability to automatically change the attack attribute of the weapon to the most suitable one. As she gained experience points in battle with the demons, Love's level rose higher and higher. The level of the demon army's creatures is enormous. From them and the main quest bonuses, you can earn much more experience than from bosses. However, the main problem was the size of the army. There were too many demons. The Demon King acknowledged that Li Ji-woo was stronger, and faster than Yopi. In the past, all his battles were the same. He had no chance of winning, but they always won. Yopi and his friends, their invincible foursome. And then Luna suggested that Li do it together, unite and defeat Yopi. Hong from Robin Hood's guild helped fight the demons. This time, Love was very happy to see her, but there was no end in sight for the demons. Apparently, only rare types of demons had appeared on Earth before. After turning off their invisibility mode, the entire Robin Hood Guild joined the battle. The Justice Guild, led by Hawkeye, also joined the battle, and that wasn't all. The Holy Guild, the White Cross Guild, the Holy Land Guild, and many others also joined the fight for humanity. The Bard's skill was activated. The Song of Seraphim began to play. The hidden effect was activated after the second verse of the song. A song in time with the rhythm is one of the main skills of a singer. The group of heroes began their raid. Luna repeated her offer to Li to join forces before it was too late, but Li Ji-woo refused again, making an indecent gesture. Luna's hidden motives confused him. No one could keep up with Li Ji-woo's stunning speed. However, Yopi managed to react in time. The hero turned his sword to deflect Li Ji-woo's attack. Everyone recognized that Yopi's abilities were something special. The skill of perfect reflection completely changes the direction of the enemy's attack. But total control was needed. A split second of distraction was enough for the skill to fail. If you attack continuously, you can win. The Song of Seraphim was activated again. Due to the vibration, the speed of the team members increased dramatically. In addition, Yopi activated his secret skill, Glory of the Hero. Beams of light poured from his crown. His strength was greatly reduced in exchange for doubling his other stats. Yopi's skeleton ally in a hat raised his staff, which lit up. A spell. A huge rock flew toward Li. This spell was called Meteor. The sight was mesmerizing. Li sliced the rock into pieces with a single blow. After repelling this attack, Li Ji-woo waited to see what Yopi and his team would come up with next. The second verse of Seraphim's song began. The hidden effect was activated. All of Li's stats were halved. At that moment, it was Li Ji-woo's opponent's main trump card. And a pretty serious one at that. Now Li Ji-woo could only rely on his gluttony, but he shouldn't forget about his perfect defense. Yopi wondered if Li had any more tricks up his sleeve. Dragon Eurus thought that these were the trophy guy's hidden skills, but Luna noticed that Li had not fulfilled all the conditions for their activation. From the inner pocket of his cloak, Li Ji-woo took out the magical mirror of Heibek. The hidden skill of 8 panoramas was activated. The second panorama was Lupa. It increases the size of the user depending on their mana level. One of the differences between the human world and the demon world is the black sky. But it suddenly turned white. Yes, Li Ji-woo had grown to an incredible size. The demon army was fighting against the 5 best guilds in the world. The battle was in full swing. Even Love had already adapted to these conditions and was continuously scattering demons in all directions. Her level continued to rise, but there was no end to the demons. The mage Abracadabra believed that there was only one way to complete the task. They had to subdue Yopi's sin of anger, and that was true. Based on the data received, Furry decided that it was time to shut down the game. Not only the best guilds, but also ordinary novice users went to the front lines to fight the demons. As before, all players fought shoulder to shoulder for universal peace on the planet. King Yopi and his comrades were in shock. Lee Jiwoo rose hundreds of meters into the air. Now, Seraphim's song did not even reach his ears and had no effect on him whatsoever. Up there, Lee Jiwoo raised his hand to strike down. Yopi was terrified. Sweat rolled down his face. And Lee Jiwoo struck. The time limit had been exceeded. The mirror effect ended. The mirror broke and time had to pass before it could work again. Once again, Lee Jiwoo destroyed the planet, but the servers did not fly away because they were in the demon world. Lee returned to his normal size. The dragon and the moon remained alive. There was a chance that Yopi had been destroyed. But the Demon King had not been defeated either. Not only had he not died, but he had also survived in space. According to Luna's observations, Yopi didn't have much time left. Life was slowly leaving his body, and the rest of his comrades had already disappeared into oblivion. Delighted, Lee hoped that their mission was almost complete. The defeated king was surprised by Lee's arrogance, but admitted that he had never met anyone stronger than him. He acknowledged his defeat. Things were difficult on the ground. The demons had cornered the players, making it extremely difficult for them to fight back. Even Love was wounded and exhausted. The demon's last blow to her was too strong. Hong saw that the girl was in bad shape. The other players weren't much better. Suddenly, Hong herself was grabbed by a monster. She thought her end had come, but then the demons began to dissolve into thin air. It was hard to believe they were saved. Love knew for sure that it was Trusiki who had saved them all. Yopi's time was coming to an end, and Lee had a question. Yopi was the hero who defeated the Demon King. Why did he now hate humans so much? The story was old and rather ordinary. People loved Yopi, but then they hated him for his power. In the past, the hero Yopi loved people like no one else, but they betrayed him. And with that thought, Yopi disappeared forever. The main quest of the game was complete. Lee received a reward for defeating the final boss, a richly inlaid chest with unknown contents. Before Lee could figure out what was going on, a guy appeared in front of him. The same one who called himself the creator. Lee surprised him greatly. The guy didn't believe until the very end that Lee Jiwoo could win. He congratulated Lee and said he would give him an additional reward. Lee Jiwoo was faced with a choice: remain human or become one of the deadly sins. The choice had to be made immediately. Without a moment's hesitation, Lee Jiwoo chose to remain human. The creator was curious about the reason for his choice. The next day, Lee was lying on his bed when he received a message from Han Sarang. She suggested they have dinner together. Luna, who was lying next to him, noticed that Han was flirting with Lee Jiwoo. Lee jumped up in a flash. Once again, Luna appeared out of nowhere in his apartment. Once again, she had somehow managed to get in. Lee threatened to call the police. Without embarrassment, Luna said she had come to return the shirt she had borrowed from him. Now she was interested in what Lee would say to Han Sarang about dinner. Moreover, Luna said that she also wanted to go to dinner with him, and Lee completely messed up. In the end, Lee took Luna to dinner with Han, which greatly angered the latter, which was quite logical. Out of rage, Han Sarang demanded an explanation from Lee Jiwoo. They were supposed to be alone. Not understanding why he had to justify himself, Lee Jiwoo tried to defuse the situation, but to little avail. Luna only complicated matters by telling him that she had recently slept in the same bed with Lee. Then Luna asked Love why she was pressuring Lee since they weren't dating. Han Sarang explained that she was worried about him as a friend. Moreover, it looked as if Luna was following Lee Jiwoo everywhere he went. In response, Luna told Han Sarang about her kiss with Lee Jiwoo, which finally drove Han Sarang to hysterics. Upset, Han Sarang got up from the table and was about to leave. No one stopped her. Lee simply told Luna that it was time for them to end their meeting as well. Outside the restaurant, Luna thanked Lee Jiwoo for the wonderful dinner. Finally, Luna asked why Lee chose to remain human in the game, and whether it was because of his love for Han Sarang. Naive Lee didn't understand what she was talking about and said goodbye before going home. Finally, Urus waited for Lee all day and was crazy to see him. Suddenly, out of nowhere, Urus disappeared and Lee was left holding a completely useless bat. Standing in front of him was the guy who had given him the bat on that very first day. The guy smiled warmly and waved to Lee. Something was clearly not going according to plan. President King himself was watching this scene. He realized that the time had come for their meeting. At the same time, Lee Jiwoo was overjoyed to see the little boy. It seemed that the boy didn't remember him and didn't understand what Lee was talking about at all. The dragon appeared again. He didn't know who the boy was either. The boy liked the dragon, but he didn't say a word. Picking up a regular club, Lee Jiwoo felt nostalgic. Once upon a time, one just like it had completely changed his life. Lee told the boy the whole story, everything he had gone through during that period of time. After the story, Lee Jiwoo said he had a gift for the boy. He summoned a high-level weapon. Lee wanted to give the boy everything he had, but the boy refused. The boy took out a pencil and a piece of paper. He wrote something and handed it to Lee. On the piece of paper the child gave him, Lee found an address. When he arrived there, he saw something he never expected. The only person to whom Lee Jiwoo had told the whole story and opened his heart would leave this world in 2 weeks due to illness. The boy gestured for Lee to sit down next to him. The boy began to write again. He wrote that he really wanted Lee to come in person. As it turned out, it was a girl from his life. At first, it wasn't entirely clear because she had no hair, and she wanted to tell him her story, just as Lee had told her his. In Chrono Life, there are many roles to choose from. She is a merchant. Merchants constantly interact with people selling and buying items. This role was very interesting because in real life, she couldn't make friends due to her shyness. But in the game, everything was different. Thanks to how people treated her in the game, the girl always had a great time. President Furry lit a cigarette and thought about the girl. Such a bright child. In her free time, she gives potions to newbies. Even though she knew she would lose money, she always sold everything at the lowest prices. Everyone loved her. She didn't literally shine, but her smile lit up the whole world like a star. One day, she stopped coming to the game. Everyone had different thoughts about it. Maybe she went on vacation or was busy with school, but everyone missed this little girl very much. Time flew by unnoticed. It was so long ago. Everyone who started playing with her had long since advanced to higher levels. They left the city to travel. New players joined the game. Few people in the city remembered her. Suddenly, she logged back into the game. However, the girl had changed a lot. Her long hair was gone, and her clothes were now very simple. She gave all her remaining belongings to the new players. She replaced words with emojis. She gave away her gold and almost all her items, except for the batons that players receive at the beginning of the game. No one wanted to take it because it was considered useless by almost everyone, until she saw Lee Ji-woo in the corner, crying and wearing only his underwear. That's the whole story. It will probably end soon, but it will mark the beginning of a new one. Over time, she came to terms with her illness. She just needed someone to remember her. When he got home, Lee Ji-woo immediately went into the game and rushed to the Valley of Death to destroy monsters. Urus saw him so angry for the first time. While still in the hospital, Lee asked the girl if there were any options. But her illness was very rare, and the operation was outrageously expensive. Her parents did everything they could to find the money, but now Lee Ji-woo was ready to do anything to find the money. She would get the surgery. After destroying enough monsters, Lee earned a lot of rare items that could be sold. Plus, Luna was back. Urusu was curious why she had been visiting Lee so often lately. Earlier, Lee had asked her to do something, and she had come to report back. And they left. She was very scared. She didn't want to die. She didn't want to be forgotten. This time, Lee Ji-woo didn't come alone. It was the players she had helped in the past. No one would forget her. A few days passed, and the operation was soon to take place. She promised to return after it, as radiant as before. It was Luna who diligently found everyone so that meeting them would give the girl the strength to move on. The chances of a successful operation were only 30%. A human life was at stake. The little fragile girl turned out to be stronger than anyone else. Even though she was unhappy inside, she was always cheerful and radiant. However, because of her kindness and naivety as a merchant, she suffered huge losses. This girl to whom Lee told his story and opened his heart. Her character's name is Luhua, and she returned. The demon world is a dimension cut off from the human world. After the battle with King Yopi, it evaporated. But after some time, it was completely restored, and the resurrected demons began a bloody massacre, all because the Demon King had disappeared again, and there was nowhere to vent their anger because they couldn't conquer the human world. These upheavals were the last straw for them. In the end, it all came down to the destruction of their own kind. But there were still some who sincerely cared about the demon world. The assistant to the great Demon King, Doom. There was only one way to quell their anger. The essence of the Demon King. A precious stone containing the power of the Demon King, whose absorption could grant the hidden title of Demon King. All that remained was to find a candidate. Meanwhile, this very candidate was collecting the teeth of the destroyed bear rabbit. When crushed, they were very helpful in restoring health. When Lee Ji-woo entered the city, he was surrounded by people eager to get to know the hero. There she was, Lu Hua. Lee had come specifically for her. Now she called him her older brother. He brought her the material she had requested. Now Lu Hua could prepare a health-restoring potion. There was a lot of potion. Lee thought that Lu Hua would get a lot of money for selling it, but she didn't make it to sell. People called her Star. She distributed the potions to people who had suffered greatly after the demon invasion. Lee decided to bring her more ingredients for the potion. At the same time, Han Sarang was in a very depressed state. She couldn't believe that Lee had a relationship with Luna. She couldn't forgive him or accept it. Han Sarang's manager even saw that something was wrong with the girl and guessed that it had something to do with the guy in his underwear. Not wanting to admit her feelings, Han told a story about unrequited love, pretending it was about her friend, but the manager immediately told Han that lying was useless. She asked if she was talking about the guy in his underwear from the love team. Han confirmed it. The manager was more concerned that most of the fans would turn away from the idol if she revealed her relationship. But she had no plans to stop Han Sarang. She said she would be on Han's side no matter what. Han wanted to make Lee hers. The manager even liked her confidence. And now Han Sarang was ready to listen to the manager's advice, but she still needed to think about the best course of action. Encouraged, Han logged into the game and asked her friend to send her messages with hints in case she needed them. When Han Sarang started working with their company, she became her manager, this talented and famous artist. She had built a successful career, but had never been in a relationship in 27 years. GB's death was difficult. He rushed into this world unprepared, and where could he find this guy now? And the demons wouldn't help him in his search. Suddenly, something exploded loudly in the distance behind him. The sky lit up with a flash. Death immediately realized he had found him. It was Lee gathering materials for Zvezdoshka as promised. Luckily, many items had already been found, and there were only a few left to collect. Lav ran out of the forest toward Lee and Urus. She attacked the nearest rabbit and gave Lee the teeth she had taken from it. Lee immediately apologized for what had happened at the restaurant. He really shouldn't have taken Luna with him to dinner. He didn't know that she and Khan were on such bad terms. Of course, Lee understood that he should have done this earlier and offered to take Love out to dinner again. But this time, just the two of them. Love said she would try to find time in her busy schedule. But Love still wanted to know why Luna had said that night that she and Lee Ji-woo had slept in the same bed. And what about the kiss? Sweating, Lee Ji-woo tried to prove that nothing had happened between him and Luna, but Love insisted and didn't really believe him. Giebel caught Lee and Love during this interrogation. Giebel didn't know much about the human world, and thought that Love was stronger than Lee since she was able to knock him to the ground, and her angry grin mesmerized him. Flying up to Love, Death immediately offered her a magical item. He believed she deserved to become the Demon King. Not knowing what the sphere was, Love mechanically took it in her hands, and instantly received the essence of the Demon King. Her body absorbed the essence of the Demon King. The creator was overjoyed that it had finally happened. The last item, it was supposed to be Yopi, but it would be Love. This was the final chapter of the story. No one understood what that light was. Love's transformation was complete. She was lifted into the air. All her characteristics increased tenfold. All the privileges of the profession were granted. In a rage, Love screamed and demanded that Death return everything to the way it was. She did not want to be the Demon King. Urus and Li Ji-woo sat with their mouths open watching what was happening. The hidden ability of the Demon King's arrival had been obtained. Love did not know what this ability was. The demonstration of the ability was launched. The arrival of the Demon King. Love began to change her appearance. Her hair color and clothes all changed. Lav herself was in shock. Her hair had turned white. She hadn't given any consent to become the Demon King. The indignant Love was explained by Death that this ability gave her the appearance of the Demon King and a huge supply of mana. Only in this form were certain abilities available. When Love wanted to know what these exceptional skills were, the demonstration began again. The Demon King's essence was unleashed. Bright red wings burst from Love's back. Synchronization began. Horns also appeared. Love's eyes turned red. The Demon King's essence was activated. Li Ji-woo and Urus sat in complete shock. Lav's power was astonishing. The destruction skill was incredible. A concentrated mana shot was fired. The demonstration was complete, and Love herself was shocked by her new abilities. Not knowing what to do next, Love asked Li Ji-woo for advice. After all, she would now have to fight humans and even him. Grabbing Death, Love demanded an explanation and asked for everything to be returned to the way it was before. But that was impossible. The essence of the Demon King would not leave the body of its host until its death. Then Lee suggested simply canceling the Demon King's arrival. If Love wanted to look like she did before, it was time to go. Zvezdochka was waiting for them. Arden Castle is one of the 3 largest castles in the game Chrono Life. With its huge, majestic walls, it has recently been called the most impregnable fortress in the game. Someone was rapidly approaching the castle walls. The guards sounded the alarm. A huge wolf with red eyes jumped onto the wall. The monster knocked out both guards with a single blow of its paw. The monster looked like a werewolf. What's more, it could talk. A second later, it was no longer alone. Besides the wolf, there was a bear and a lizard. All 3 were insanely huge. They weren't just monsters, they were beastmen. A moment later, the beastmen were surrounded by a crowd of the kingdom's guards. According to Hawkeye, no one had ever dared to attack the castle so brazenly. The lord of the castle, Arden, ordered the guards to deal with the beastmen. While Hawk's eye was preoccupied with his broadcast, he didn't notice how suddenly it had become very quiet. His entire army had been defeated. At that moment, almost 40,000 people were watching Hawkeye's stream. They advised him to run while he still could. Hawkeye completely agreed with them, so he immediately took off like a rocket. However, even the elf's swift legs could not save him from the beastmen, and so, in a matter of seconds, Arden Castle was empty. This is how 3 previously unknown beastmen introduced themselves to the world. At that time, Doom summoned Love to gather all the demons and begin the destruction of humanity. She refused, disappointing her assistant. When Doom learned that Love was only at level 92, he was taken aback. Lee explained to him why he called Love the boss and everything that followed. Doom realized he had screwed up. The sky above their heads suddenly cracked in the literal sense. First, a clawed paw appeared. Then a huge monster eye appeared. Standing on the monster's paw was none other than Luna. When Love saw her new form, Luna turned even whiter with rage. The girls began to glare at each other angrily, until Lee stopped them. He realized that Luna was on the verge of destroying Love. Listening to him, Luna stepped aside. In any case, everything was going as it should. With a sarcastic smile, Luna congratulated Love on her new role in the game. Lee didn't know if Luna was being nice or not, but she had been so helpful in the story with Star. Luna didn't come for no reason. She announced that the final chapter of the game had begun, and would soon come to a logical conclusion. Lee didn't believe her because how could an online game have an ending? It was constantly being updated. Luna used to think so too, but soon they would all find out for themselves. The main quest that Lee had completed in a day was supposed to take a year, and everything had gone off course. Now a new Demon King had appeared. Everything was happening too fast, not as it had been planned. Then Luna pointed her staff at Love. Lee shielded her with his body, but Luna had no intention of destroying Love. She was opening a teleport, and Love disappeared in an unknown direction. Luna confessed that she had sent her to the last chapter of the story. Love found herself on the wall of the palace where the battle with the beastmen had just taken place. According to Luna, this was the first trial of the last chapter of the game. Arden Castle. An ancient race had come from the northern continent. Beastmen. Lee wasn't worried about this. After all, Love was now strong. Indeed, Love did not lose her composure and began to fight the beastmen. But the monsters were not easy to defeat. They did not fall from the first blow. These were no ordinary beasts. According to Luna, beastmen were 10 times stronger than humans from birth. And according to the script, they were supposed to appear in 10 years. It would be very difficult for a newborn demon to deal with them. Love herself understood this. Lav knew that if she was hit, she would die from a single blow of their claws. Beast hunting skill, one of the Demon King's abilities. Another powerful explosion rang out. All this happened for one reason, Urakan Yopi Ryo and so on. The reason for all this was Li Ji-woo. Lee didn't want to listen to Luna any further. He asked to be sent to Arden Castle. It was time to come to the aid of his boss, Love. Luna didn't want to do that and suggested they just wait. Then Lee himself remembered a wonderful method. He sat down on the ground and ran on all fours in a circle. He ran around and around. And just like that, by running in circles, Li Ji-woo created a tornado. A huge tornado. Love's powers were running out. The beast was determined to finish her off. Help was needed. The tornado Lee created was not meant to fly on, but to activate the speed of light skill. After running for a minute, Lee activated the skill. In an instant, he was next to Love. She was overjoyed to see him, and the support came just in time. The beasts were rude and insulted Lee and Love, but everything was going according to plan. The main thing was to strictly follow their master's orders. Swinging his stick, Li Ji-woo knocked the wolf dog off its feet and it fell. Love stopped him and said she wanted to finish them off herself because she had become stronger. Lee said he didn't mind and would leave one for her. After resting a bit, Love got ready to fight. The wolfhound wasn't afraid of Love, but he was confused by this kid in shorts who had appeared out of nowhere. Performing her signature jump, Love attacked the wolf and hit her target. Love had definitely become stronger and faster. The wolf noticed this too. Everything was going exactly as she had imagined in her head. Activating the essence of the Demon King, Love activated her destruction skill. A fireball flew at the wolf. The monster was destroyed. Love immediately deactivated the demon's essence. Love's level immediately rose to 139, 40 levels up at once. Probably because these monsters were supposed to appear only in 10 years, they gave so much experience for them. In the forest near Arden Castle, Hawkeye tried unsuccessfully to hide from the Beastman Griffin. Apparently, the Beastman's target was not Arden Castle itself. Their target was Hawkeye himself. Griffin wanted Hawkeye to use his stream to send a message to all players, to everyone on the southern continent. The broadcast began. Hawkeye valued his reputation on YouTube very highly. It was his pride that prevented him from showing his defeat at Arden Castle. Griffin appeared on the screen. He wanted to make an announcement. He was amazed that humans had recently defeated the demons. After all, the feud between demons and beastmen had been going on for a long time. And to repay the humans in exactly 30 days, the beastmen would invade the lands of humans. Humans would become slaves to the beastmen. A new main quest for the game appeared. The invasion of the ancient beastmen from the northern continent, immediately after the demon invasion. Of course, this quest is of a higher difficulty level. Unless a miracle saved them from the demons, completing this quest is an impossible task. Thanks to the latest broadcast, the number of subscribers to Falcon's Eye has increased several times over. The upcoming battle has become a hot topic, not only in the gaming industry but also around the world. And of course, the company that released Chrono Life became the target of criticism. The game's reputation was in tatters. After delivering his message to the people, the Griffin told Falcon Eye that he would not take his life now, but would leave him for dessert in 30 days. And he flew away. In the center of virtual reality, Hong was ready to enter the game. She had also watched the video about the Beastmen. A guy approached her. The guy decided to hit on Hong and started a conversation about beast people, a topic that was on everyone's mind at the moment. But Hong was too angry and asked the guy to leave nicely. In the game, people relaxed and felt powerful, but now she made them feel like useless losers. The anger only made people want to develop even more in order to win. They could have attacked the call centers again, but no one called, because they knew the company would do nothing again. It wasn't the first time President Furry had been the worst, but this time he was sure that the players wouldn't be able to complete the quest. The game's rating hit a record low, but ironically, the number of players connected at the same time reached an all-time high. Shocked users tried to level up as quickly as possible. Love told Lee about this. Crowds of players gathered in the hunting grounds. With great difficulty, they destroyed a couple of beastmen. What would happen when an entire army appeared? The confident Lee could no longer listen to this whining. He thought it was cool and couldn't wait a month. Lee intended to head to the northern continent right away. Activating his lightspeed skill, Lee Ji-woo did just that before Love could even utter a word in response. Rising into space, Lee tried to determine where he needed to go. Where was the right continent? But Lee couldn't get there. He ran into a barrier, some kind of protective dome. A message popped up informing him that the northern continent was currently inaccessible. Truxie was predictable, and President King blocked everything, now mocking Lee Ji-woo. Previously, the president had planned not to interfere, but now he was an enemy of the people anyway. There was nothing to lose. Lee's freakout was very amusing to Love. Everyone would have to wait a month, and then Luna appeared, as always unexpectedly. She came to find out who had won, the new Demon Queen or the Beastman. Tired of Luna's sarcastic remarks, Love flew into a rage and challenged her to a one-on-one fight. The rivalry between the two was already at its peak. Love was angrier and more provoked by Luna's taunts. And then Luna noticed that she was 21 years old and Love was 17, so the adult Lee Ji-woo had a better chance. Finally, Death found his mistress, Love. But of course he already regretted his choice and wished that Love would die so that he could choose a better king. While Love was dealing with Death, Lee went in search of ingredients for the star, and Luna followed him. But Love herself decided not to be left behind and ran after them. The spirit of rivalry grew stronger between the girls. Lee himself didn't like the situation very much, because these two furies, once they got into a fight, could destroy the village. Somewhere in the west of the game world, the sand opened up and a huge monster emerged. The boss of the desert, the king of sandworms. The players of those places rushed to attack. A little further away, watching all the action, were Falcon Eye, Hong, and Abracadabra, the leaders of the strongest guilds in the game. Because the Beastmen had made them look like fools in Arden, the players now fought even harder to prove something to themselves first and foremost. But that was unlikely to help them win an event that was supposed to take place 10 years later. One Beastman was as powerful as the main boss in the game. Strangely enough, although the guilds were preparing themselves, they relied heavily on the great warrior Lee Ji-woo. At some point, Hong came up with an idea of how to fight the Beastmen on equal terms. It was unlikely that they would be able to close the 10-year gap, but it was worth a try. However, there was a catch. They needed Lee Ji-woo's help. The merchant Zvezdochka was tired of waiting for Lee Ji-woo. She had looked everywhere for him. Star didn't know the girls who were with Lee Ji-woo, but she guessed who they were because Lee had mentioned them both when he opened his heart completely. Unlike Luna, who had seen the girl in real life, Love knew nothing about Star. After briefly recounting the girl's medical history, Lee reduced Love to tears. And then Zvezdochka asked Love an extremely uncomfortable question. Who was she or Luna, Lee Ji-woo's girlfriend? Interrupting her and saying that she was no one, Lee handed Star a bag of bear cub teeth. Even though she was just a little girl, Zvezdochka could see that both girls, Love and Luna, were interested in her brother. The curious little girl didn't give up and asked Lee himself who he liked, Luna or Love. Or maybe both. Embarrassed, Lee Ji-woo was starting to get angry. He didn't want to discuss it. He was more concerned about having to wait a whole month before the battle with the Beastmen. Hong arrived looking for Lee Ji-woo. She wanted to ask him for a favor. It was strange. The Beastmen had reported the attack 30 days ago, as ordered by the Great Lord Adventador. The Polar Dragon Adventador listened to Griffin's report. He ordered Griffin to double-check everything to make sure everyone was well prepared. Their plan was to capture the entire southern continent as soon as possible. The ancient Beastman Urus finally arrived at the meeting with Griffin. They had not seen each other for a long time. According to Hong's plan, they would all have to rely completely on the great hero Lee. When Hong explained his plan to everyone, most agreed that it was excellent and could work. Defeating the ancient Beastmen would not be easy, but preparations would not be superfluous. As always, Luna disagreed. She rarely liked anything that wasn't her own idea. She believed that everyone was relying too much on Lee and that this plan could cause problems with the game company later on. If something went wrong, Lee Jiwoo would be blamed. But as usual, Lee didn't care much and wasn't afraid at all. He agreed to Hong's plan. As always, unwilling to wait a second, Lee decided to set off right away. Activating his light speed skill, he departed. Little Star didn't quite understand Hong's request and asked her to repeat the plan. In 30 days, the players will be attacked by beastmen. The players need to become stronger to defeat them. Right now, all users are working hard to raise their levels. However, there was something that would allow them to raise their levels much faster, namely clothing and ammunition. And then Zvezdochka realized that her brother Dubinka had gone to the highest hunting ground in Chrono Life, the Cave of Urus. The Great Warrior would obtain all the necessary items there and sell them to all users. Of course, this carried enormous risks. The game's economy would simply collapse. Items belonging to ordinary users would simply lose their value, and those obtained in the Cave of Urus would no longer be scarce goods. It is unlikely that the company would simply ignore such a situation. It would collapse the game's economy, and Lee Jiwoo would most likely be punished. Everyone understood this perfectly well, but unfortunately, there was absolutely no other way to defeat the Beastmen at that moment. A couple of hours later, after gathering the necessary items, Lee was already selling them at a very low price to anyone and everyone on the village street. Shocking all users, Lee Jiwoo sold unique items at ridiculous prices. Even on the third day of sales, the excitement did not subside. People came in crowds and bought weapons at low prices. Pushing through the crowd, a huge guy approached Lee and demanded a unique sword. When Lee asked for 10 million gold, the big guy flew into a rage. After all, they had only charged 10,000 gold for the same sword from a boy. Lee was not averse to resolving the conflict in a fair fight. The big guy was 3 times bigger than Lee Jiwoo. Benedict, ranked 38th, was famous among the rankers. If he was in a bad mood, he could take his opponent's life without a second thought. But this guy knew all about Lee Jiwoo and his abilities, so he calmly handed over the money. Benedict even had to listen to a lecture about his behavior. After becoming the Demon Queen, Love reached level 210, even though just a couple of days ago, she was literally at level 139. Hong was shocked. Lately, Love had often hunted with Lee Jiwoo in the Urus Cave. That's how she gained experience so quickly. It takes an average user at least 2 years to reach level 200, but things were different for the Demon Queen, of course. Today, Love and Lee went back to the cave for a new batch of items to sell. Thanks to the essence of the Demon King, Love easily defeated the strongest monsters, literally with a single touch of her finger. As always, Luna secretly watched Lee and Love hunt. Seeing their joy and unity, she felt very jealous. Time flew by in an instant, and the decisive day arrived. The Beastmen army was ready to march. At the head of the monsters stood Urus, 1 million beastmen from the northern continent. The ancient beastman dragon Urus took on his true form, and they set off. The players were also ready to fight, even though they were very afraid. The great battle began. Arden Castle was the first and last line of defense of the southern continent, but the beastmen did not expect that their rivals were already waiting for them on the other flank. There stood a squad of mages led by Abracadabra. They were ready to attack immediately. Streams of magic rushed toward the beastmen from the hill where the mages stood. They were not afraid and began the battle outside the castle, surprising the beastmen. As it turned out, the players had not originally intended to fight in the castle, but had devised their own battle tactics. The Falcon Eye archers attacked from the other side. The castle gates opened, and the main part of the human army emerged, led by the master of the White Cross Guild, Suko, and the master of the Holy Sentry Guild. Once again, the 5 strongest guilds in the game world united against a common enemy and rushed into battle. 25 million users entered the battle. In the future, this battle would be recorded in the Guinness Book of World Records as the largest event in the gaming world. However, thanks to one man, this terrible battle would end in the blink of an eye, and that man was Lee Jiwoo. Tired of waiting, Lee Jiwoo could no longer restrain himself. He was about to attack. He didn't care that his comrades would die because they would simply be resurrected. Swinging his club, Lee lowered it to strike, but suddenly found himself in a different place. He had been here before. The zero space he found himself in after the destruction of the planet. And the creator was here too. The creator ignored all of Lee Jiwoo's questions and mocked him a little. Having waited too long for this battle, Lee Jiwoo was beside himself with rage. Then the creator declared that he could not bring Lee Jiwoo back. Ending it all with one blow was not an option. The ending of this story had to be completely different. At that moment, Lee Jiwoo began to suspect that this so-called creator was President Furry's spy, but that was not the case. Before revealing everything, the guy said that he was not connected to the company in any way. He had summoned Lee here for one reason only, to accumulate sins. The battle was in full swing. The players used all their abilities and items to the maximum. 30 days of preparation for the battle had paid off for the desperate users, leveling up, developing strategies, group training, and weapons from the Urus Cave. Thanks to these things, they significantly surpassed themselves. This time, the forces were at least equal, and everyone had a chance. And then he appeared, a huge beastman dragon, and then the forces were no longer equal. Attacking from the air, the dragon scattered the players like ragdolls. No one could do anything to him. At the same time, Lee demanded an explanation for his sins and to be sent back. The creator said he couldn't tell Lee the details. Instead, the creator created a flame on his hand and threw it at Lee, his new skill. It is called the Omnipresent Flame. With it, one can see anything one desires. In this way, Lee Jiwoo learned what was happening on the continent and how the battle was progressing. There was no escape from the dragon. It destroyed everything in its path, killing everyone in its way. The dragon's breath was one of its most powerful skills, mowing down everyone who came within its reign. The dragon Urus recognized the northern dragon Adventador. He couldn't believe that he was the king of the beastmen. Adventador was one of the 3 greatest dragons. One of them was the 2-headed Urus Adventador, and the third was the huge dragon Gayard. According to the plot, they should also appear much later. But what was important was that Adventador was also known as one of the deadly sins, greed. Appearing in his human form, Adventador was ready to destroy the leader of the humans. And he did not expect to hear from her lips the name of his dear brother Urus, who had settled among humans. Thanks to the fact that Adventador had transformed into human form, there was a chance to defeat him. The leader of the United Clan attacked the dragon, trying to reach his throat with her spear. She succeeded, but the spear failed to pierce the dragon's skin. He did not even bother to dodge the attack. The dragon released tentacles from his back. The sin of greed and gluttony had the same ability as Lee's gluttony, and could devour its victims and their powers and abilities. Watching this through the fire, Lee was shocked. How could Adventador have two sins and powers at once? Considering that Lee had destroyed the sin of gluttony, then Lee decided to ask the so-called God about it. He reminded Lee that he had already told him 5 minutes ago that he had summoned him here to accumulate sins. With a snap of his fingers, a huge hourglass appeared behind God. The main quest of the game is to defeat the 7 deadly sins. It is their duty to accumulate these very sins. Urus, pride, had long since accomplished this task, and Yopi, anger, perished as soon as he succeeded. But Urakan, gluttony, was unable to accumulate sins. Lee destroyed him too quickly. That is why the sin of gluttony was passed on to Adventador. As the creator explained, behind him is a clock of sins. When the lower half is filled, it means that all sins have been collected. Each grain of sand is equal to a human life. The creator was surprised that Lee did not understand such obvious things. All the troops were preparing to defend themselves. Adventador stood still while his tentacles attacked everyone indiscriminately. The players did not even have time to retreat. The tentacles were fast and merciless. Falcon Eye was angry at his comrades, but he himself did not notice how a tentacle had reached him. The leader of the mages, Abracadabra, did not have time to save him. The tentacles reached the mages. The beastmen proudly greeted their leader and surrounded him, intoxicated by their victory. Among the few survivors were members of Robin Hood's guild, including their leader Hong. The balance of power achieved through immense effort was destroyed in the blink of an eye with the appearance of Adventador, and the advantage of the ability to resurrect was lost. After all, it didn't work after being absorbed. Hong took on the duties of military commander after the death of Hawkeye, and the players continued to attack. They still slightly outnumbered the beastmen. The most important thing was to avoid being absorbed. Hong cut off one of the dragon's tentacles, but there were too many of them. The maximum number of tentacles that the inventor could release was 100,000. His abilities far surpassed those of the previous sin of gluttony, and his sin of greed only intensified this effect. But for the users, this news did not bode well. The desperate level increase resulted in the creation of the strongest enemy of level 3,890. Love also tried to intervene using her demonic ability of destruction. This ability of the Demon Queen was incredibly powerful, but this attack did not inflict any damage on Adventador. But Love planned to continue the battle with the dragon. She was confident and bold as never before, even though she understood that her chances of victory were practically zero. On behalf of the demons, she informed her assistant as queen that the gates to the demon world would be opened, and the demons would fight against the beastmen. The queen's assistant, Death, was incredibly happy that the queen had finally revealed her potential, and that there would be a real battle. But the opening of the spatial gate was accidentally prevented by Trusaki, who appeared out of nowhere. His appearance crushed Doom. The whole world was delighted by Lee's appearance, and only President Furry was disappointed. He just didn't understand where Lee had been the rest of the time. In reality, when all the sins had been gathered, the creator simply let Lee go to battle. For his unexpected disappearance, Lee had already been punished by the enraged Love. Moreover, Lee had rendered Death incapacitated, making it impossible to summon demons. And yet, there were no fewer enemies. Then Lee Ji-woo asked Love not to worry about anything and just enjoy the spectacle from the sidelines. Approaching Adventador, Lee Ji-woo struck him in the face with his club. The blow was powerful. This blow brought the monster to its knees and left it with almost half of its body missing. Everyone was in shock, both in the game and in the real world. There were many who witnessed it. Enraged, Lee Ji-woo was extremely pleased that the adventurer had fallen into his hands. Another punch sent the dragon flying into the air. This revealed Lee's dark side. The beastmen realized that they had to save their master urgently. The moment Lee had been waiting for had arrived. The beastmen rushed into the attack, trying to protect their leader. One powerful blow with his club, and as always, most of the enemies were defeated. Lee continued his attack. Realizing that they could not win, the beastmen offered Adventador to devour them all, thereby greatly increasing his strength and power. Since this was their last option, the dragon listened to his people. Adventador's strength and body were restored. The polar dragon was no longer hungry. His level was now 9,999. The strongest player and the strongest boss of the game clashed in battle. Everything around them was destroyed by this incredible power. Adventador devoured about 1,000,000 beastmen. Now he was recovering quickly and was practically invincible. All the skills of the beastmen that were possible were concentrated in him alone. In addition, he himself was the oldest and strongest predator. But Lee Ji-woo also had enough skills and strength. He attacked the dragon with no less force than the dragon had attacked him. When it seemed that victory was very close, the dragon took on its true form. It used its ice breath skill. If the dragon finished him, the continent would be doomed. President King was terrified and even wanted to shut down the server to stop the process. But he was too late. Seeing that things were going badly, Lee Ji-woo activated his Titan power. All his stats and strength increased tenfold. Lee Ji-woo's flames and the dragon's ice breath collided. It was incredible, but the dragon Adventador was defeated by Lee's power. The last sin remained to be defeated, the sin of envy. The defeated dragon landed nearby. He was almost destroyed. He admitted defeat. An unexpected turn of events occurred when Lee told Adventador that he would become his sword, just like Urus. But Adventador considered this a humiliation and did not want to serve humans like Urus. The agreement was rejected. Unexpectedly, Lee decided to play on the dragon's feelings and announced that he would go to the northern continent to finish off the remaining beastmen. Lee Ji-woo's threats greatly angered the dragon, but he loved his people and did not want to let them down. Therefore, he agreed to the deal in exchange for the peace of his people. All that remained was to figure out where to place Adventador's soul. One soul, one weapon. He couldn't think of anything better than to make his underwear the vessel for the dragon's soul. The deal was done. His underwear became the new home for Adventador's soul. The main quest of the game was complete. Each player received a reward for completing it. Inside the chest, Love saw a consumable item, a snow crystal of 10,000 years of frost. After absorption, it gives the power to withstand the cold of the northern continent. The northern continent, hidden from everyone, became accessible to users. The level cap for high-level users was broken. Adventures in uncharted lands sparked users' interest in the game. Without hesitation, Lee Ji-woo swallowed his snowflake. The adaptation to the cold of the northern continent began. Lee had wanted to go there for a long time, but on his last visit, the servers were closed. After finishing this difficult battle, Lee Ji-woo finally logged out of the game to get some rest in the real world. He was hungry. In the kitchen, Luna, who had appeared out of nowhere, was already busy cooking. She called him to the table. Hungry, Lee Ji-woo sat down at the table without asking any questions. Luna was a good cook. But it was all an act for Luna. In reality, Lee was extremely angry. It infuriated him that the girl was constantly sneaking into his apartment like a thief. He had even considered calling the police if Luna didn't admit how she was doing it. Ignoring all his questions again, Luna told Lee that she had something important to tell him. As it turned out, under the guise of this important business, Luna asked Lee out on a date. In her apartment, Han Sarang was thinking about Lee, what he was doing and everything. She received a call from her sister. Han's sister and her manager were watching the sweet scene of Lee and Luna getting into his car together. From the dark-haired girl's description, Han immediately knew who they were talking about. She asked her sister to stop them at all costs. Han Sarang rushed down the stairs. She was overcome with resentment and anger. How dare they? He betrayed her, and she was groveling in front of him. Her sister couldn't stop Lee and Luna, but she started the car to chase after them. It seemed to her that they had turned toward the sea. Lee Ji-woo and Luna were speeding away in a fancy sports car. In fact, Lee had not planned to go with her, but Luna had lured him by knowing something about his latest sin of envy. So Han was worried for nothing when she thought Lee had betrayed her. It was just pure interest in the game and nothing more. The car pulled up to the beach. Not wanting to be distracted by nonsense, Lee immediately began to question Luna about what she knew about the last sin. Suddenly, she burst into tears and asked him to grant her one request. Luna asked him to save Lee and her too. Lee was stunned by this sight. The always proud and arrogant Luna was crying. He didn't know how to behave in such situations. Before Lee could finish saying that he didn't believe Luna and that this was some kind of plan, she was already sobbing in his arms. She apologized continuously. For the first time, Luna looked so weak that Lee froze in confusion. Han Sarang and her sister, the manager, were already rushing to the scene of the drama. From a distance, they saw the couple embracing. Suddenly, Han stopped nearby and her gaze did not bode well. At that moment, Lee asked Luna to explain what had happened. Suddenly, it dawned on him. What if Luna had a good reason for acting the way she did all this time? And then Luna pushed Lee away and started laughing. He fell for it. She said she was just playing so that Lee would believe her. But now Lee didn't really believe she was lying. Something was wrong with her smile, and those tears looked too real. Before Lee Ji-woo could say anything else, the wild Han Sarang stopped next to him. She demanded an explanation from Lee for the hugs and everything else. Then Han ordered Lee to raise both hands and hugged him tightly around the waist. She ordered him to put one hand on her head and the other on her shoulder. A little frightened by her behavior, Lee did as he was told. With a sly smile of victory, Han Sarang turned her head toward Luna. Then Luna told Lee that she had two pieces of news. The first concerned the item, the chest that Lee had received as a reward for Yopi. Inside was a middle-ranked angel earring. Speaking in riddles, Luna said that this was the first clue and the second was a quest. The Master of the Sky could not be replaced. With that, Luna finished and took her bag and left. She said she enjoyed the date. In turn, Han Sarang said that she also wanted a date by the sea with Lee Ji-woo. He, of course, agreed. Walking alone, Luna remembered her date with Lee. She was sad. After all, it was quite possible that he would have helped her if she had told him the truth. Besides, Luna was wildly jealous of Han Sarang. She was even a little jealous. She wanted to be as honest and sincere as her. A romantic sunset witnessed the date between Lee Ji-woo and Han Sarang. They had been walking in silence for 30 minutes. Lee felt awkward. Then Han asked Lee if he was upset that he hadn't seen Luna in a bikini. This question was very important to her. However, Lee Ji-woo hadn't even thought about it and was surprised. He was also surprised by Han Sarang's jealousy, especially when Han asked Lee not to be alone with other girls anymore. She also asked Lee to text her more often and call her at least sometimes. Not quite understanding this, Lee told Han that he wasn't even her boyfriend. Why was she making such demands? He asked her if she liked him. She answered yes. She was surprised that he hadn't noticed it before. Lately, there have been many changes in the game. A sudden increase in the main quest, a rapid increase in the main content, but most users were impressed by the unexplored northern continent. Most users ate the ice crystal and set off on a great journey to new lands. But one user wasn't interested in anything, not even this new continent. He sat near Zvezdochka with a sour expression. She was worried about Lee. She also had no plans to go to the northern continent. She was happy where she was. The perceptive Zvezdochka guessed that it was because of the girl. Then Love appeared. She was embarrassed. Both Love and Lee Ji felt incredibly awkward looking at each other. Zvezdochka delicately left them alone, but Love asked her to stay so they could all discuss the main quest together. It was time to open the chest that Lee had received as a reward for defeating Yopi. Love didn't want to pressure Lee with her feelings and decided to take things slowly. Sure enough, inside the chest was a mid-rank angel earring. It could be used from level 500. Lee could do that. Looking at the earring, Lee felt like he had seen something like it before. He put it on. The demonstration of hidden abilities was activated. Lee was illuminated by a bright blue light. Changes began to occur in the user's body. Lee's hair grew longer, and that wasn't all. Love and Star were shocked by the result. Standing before them was an attractive dark-haired girl in a black suit. The transition to the Heavenly Kingdom was complete. The main feature of the game that attracted players was the freedom of action, and in some ways this was particularly evident. If you decided to use a sword, you would develop skills in wielding it, and if you chose a spear, the same would apply. And if you started collecting medicinal herbs, you would gain the necessary knowledge and skills and so on. Except for special conditions when a skill can only be acquired through exchange or by studying books. Depending on the user's actions, skills were created automatically with the help of the main computer's artificial intelligence. This applied not only to skills but also to weather and environmental classes. But there was one caveat. The appearance of users was limited. You could change the color of your hair, skin, and eyes, add elf ears or a tail. But excluding the external characteristics of the race in the game, the user looked the same as in real life. That's why Jiwoo's new appearance was shocking to everyone, including himself. Not only his body had changed, but his face as well. Looking at himself in the mirror, Lee was in a panic. Players around him began to notice this girl with her striking appearance. After all, they had just seen a guy there. Moving to the nearest inn, Lee's Zvezdochka and Love discussed what was happening. After removing the earring, Lee did not return to his body, which was very strange. Then Love remembered Luna's words on the beach about taking a good look at the earring. Love had seen it somewhere before, and she remembered. Rayot had the exact same earring, one of the deadly sins. That's why it's called an angel earring. That boy had angels under his command. So now she had to meet Rayot to find out how Lee could return to his body. But Lee didn't really care which character he played in the game. If you compare everything Luna said and everything that's happening, it's obvious that the next quest will take place in the Heavenly Kingdom. She'll have to go to Rayot after all. The problem was that they didn't know where Rayot was, but Lee wanted to ask Haebaek about that. After all, he was Rayot's errand boy. Lee took Haebaek's magic mirror out of his pocket. Among other things, it was also a communication device. Someone answered Lee Jiwoo's call from the mirror. It was Haebaek, of course. Lee asked him to meet up. Surprisingly, Haebaek agreed immediately. He said he would open a portal through the mirror. And so it happened. Lee Jiwoo found himself next to Haebaek. He was sitting in a dungeon by a barred window. Once again, Haebaek was missing one arm and looked rather unwell. Once he was close, Lee Jiwoo asked Haebaek who had done this to him. Interrupting Lee, Haebaek said that he had never seen such a beautiful woman before. It was clear that he did not recognize Lee. After listening to the story, Haebaek understood what was going on. And when he saw the earring, he understood everything. Why they were looking for him. With Lee's help, Haebaek had both his arms back. It wasn't the first time. The star really liked Haebaek, until she found out that he had kidnapped Boss Love in the past. The guests then got down to business. They needed Ryo to ask him a few questions. Haebaek immediately understood that Lee's goal was to return to his gender, but he informed them that it would not be possible to meet with Ryo, because he was now in the Heavenly Kingdom. Of course, Lee immediately expressed his desire to go there urgently. Lee had access to the Heavenly Kingdom, because he had fulfilled all the necessary conditions. However, Haebaek repeated that Lee would never meet Rayot there. Then, without explaining anything, Haebaek turned to Love and told her that she hadn't checked in a while. But her level was now also above 500 after the battle with the Beastman, and she could now also wear her earring. And so the same thing happened as with Lee. Now, Love looked like a very handsome guy. Unexpectedly, Love was in a state of shock. So was everyone else. And now Haebaek explained that the earring changes gender in any case. A pure body is required to enter the Heavenly Kingdom. Now that they have been reborn, both Lee Jiwoo and Love can enter the Heavenly Kingdom. But what interested Lee most was why Haebaek claimed that they would never meet Rayot. As it turned out, Ryo will soon die according to Haebaek. Ryo was put in chains. Rayot's powers were already waning. Everyone began to ask what had happened. Suddenly, Haebaek fell to his knees before Lee and began to beg him to save his master, Rayot. Haebaek knew that Lee's appearance was fate. Haebaek also promised to help Lee and Love return to their bodies. All they had to do was save his master. A hidden quest window popped up in front of Lee. It was a request from the Mirror King, Haebaek. The quest had no effect on anything, but if completed, the reward would be greater than that of a normal quest. The large reward interested Lee much more than Haebaek's pleas, and he agreed. But in return, Lee Jiwoo demanded all 8 of Haebaek's mirrors. Haebaek was taken aback. After all, if he gave them up, he would cease to be the king of mirrors. Lee was cruel but unyielding. Seeing no other way out, Haebaek was forced to agree to Lee Jiwoo's terms, and Lee accepted the quest. Now he would be able to return the bodies and receive his reward. However, as time passed, Lee realized that this was a huge mistake. Love had become a boy, and he had become a girl. Who could have known what this would lead to? But Lee Jiwoo would only come to realize this with time, unfortunately. The guardian angel knocked on the door, waking the prisoner. The time had come. Lee sat behind bars in female attire. On his hands were magical handcuffs from which it was impossible to escape. A second angel pointed a sword at Lee and ordered him to stand up. He was already waiting for the prisoner. The angel's handcuffs sealed most of the wearer's power and reduced their abilities by half. After meeting him, the prisoner was to be executed. But the angel still considered this meeting a great honor. Listening to the taunts, Lee dreamed of breaking the handcuffs and teaching those two a lesson. But he had to calm down. So far, everything was going according to plan. Now Lee had gone too far and couldn't ruin everything because of his temper. Rewinding time back to before they left for the Heavenly Kingdom, Haebaek opened a passage with a mirror. 2 would go, or rather 3 if you counted the little dragon Eurus who was always with Lee. It was time to go before it was too late. Everyone stood in front of the mirror. Since Zvezdochka did not have a high enough level for the heavens, she stayed behind to wait for her friends. Surprisingly, Haebaek did not need an earring or a new body to enter the Heavenly Kingdom, but this rule only applies to the lower races. Boss Love couldn't wait to see the Heavenly Kingdom, but Haebaek said not to expect much from what the place had become. Passing through the upper clouds, Love, Lee Eurus, and Haebaek saw a castle standing in the middle of the heavens. A rumbling sound was heard. Haebaek warned them to be careful as enemies were already close. A huge hairy creature with wings and many eyes on its body appeared. It was an angel, and it was ready to launch a magical attack. A stream of fire shot out of its huge central eye toward the new arrivals. To counterattack successfully, Love immediately activated her demonic essence. Both Love and Lee felt strange butterflies in their stomachs at the sight of each other in opposite bodies, and Lee was driven mad by this feeling. Attacking the angel, Love asked Lee not to interfere and to stay safe. But the angel was very, very strong. Flames shot out of all his eyes. Love was nowhere to be seen. Everyone began to worry about her. However, Love's energy did not diminish in the slightest. Everything was fine with the Demon King. Then Love activated her destruction and directed her power towards the angel. It was blown to pieces. Overjoyed, Love ran up to the female version of Lee and gently hugged him around the waist. Lee was stunned. According to the basic rules, the Heavenly Kingdom and everyone in it must be kind, and Yurusa was curious what had changed. That had always been the case. This angel was a tour guide and helped new arrivals. Habeck asked Urus if he knew the name Riole. It was Lady Riole who was the reason why everything had changed in the Heavenly Kingdom, why Rayet was on the verge of destruction, and even why Habeck had lost his arm before. Exhausted, Rayet waited for her arrival and opened his eyes, burning with hatred. Lady Riole was a girl with long blonde hair and different colored eyes, one red and one blue. After greeting him, Riole asked Ryo how he was doing. He wanted to say something, but she stabbed him in the stomach with a dagger. No one was allowed to speak without her permission. After mocking him, Ryola used the hill skill to restore Ryota's health. Then Riole hugged Ryota tightly and told him she loved him. She wanted him to always be by her side. Riole wondered why Habeck had brought guests to them. This dirty and disgusting lower race. Humans. Riole turned around and walked back. Ryota's younger sister was determined to exterminate the entire lower race. At that moment, Lee wanted to know where Rayot was and what kind of situation they were in. According to Habeck, he only knew that Rayot had been captured. Following the classic pattern, Lee wanted to hit him with the club with all his might, but Habeck asked him not to do so, as Rayot was weak, and if he was hit, it would be very bad. Suddenly, Lee remembered his skill of omnipresent flame, which he could use to find Ryota. And it worked. The travelers saw Ryota's dungeon and his current condition and location. In addition, they saw Lady Riole herself, who was visiting her brother. She knew that they were being spied on. In Love's imagination, Riole should have looked more sinister and frightening. Lee noticed the earring in her ear and thought that she might be a transsexual, but Habeck reminded him that only lower races change their gender. Meanwhile, Riola's sister continued to mock Ryot and spout nonsense about how much she loved him and cared for him. All the angels of the Heavenly Kingdom were ordered to detain the intruders. And there were a lot of angels, just an uncountable number, and they were all going to use their magical powers. A plan had to be devised urgently. Even Lee and Love might not be able to cope with such numbers. But as usual, Lee decided to test his strength and used an upward strike, and he made a hole in the sky. The angels were dying one after another. Love had to remind Lee of Habeck's plan and that he shouldn't overdo it. The plan was that since Rayot was in a heavenly prison, it was impossible to get inside from the outside. Therefore, they had to make sure that one of them was captured and placed inside. Lee didn't like this plan, but he had to endure it for the sake of the mirrors, and he voluntarily surrendered, pretending that he was unable to defeat the angel. Everything went as Habeck had said. The angels took the panties to the prison of the Heavenly Kingdom. Meanwhile, Habeck and Love hid in the clouds near the Heavenly Palace, and so the prisoner was led to meet Lady Riole as a captive. The guard stopped in front of huge painted doors and ordered Lee to go inside. The ruler of the Heavenly Kingdom, Riole, sat on her large throne in the center of the hall. Now Riole began to question Lee about the purpose of his arrival and where the others had gone. Lee did not answer, but asked where Rayot was. As it turned out, Ryo had mentioned Lee Jiwoo to his sister and called him a great warrior of the current generation. Without a word, Riole approached Lee and stabbed him with a dagger. Then she cut his body in two. Of course, Riole didn't know about Lee's hidden skill and was very surprised by his instant healing. It was time for Habe and Love to move out. They needed to find Ryota's stolen weapon. If they found that weapon, they would be able to release Ryota's power, most of which was currently sealed. At the moment when Lee and Love first met Ryota in the human world, his power had already been sealed. That was why Riole was able to defeat him. Because Ryo is the most powerful of the 4 emperors in the world. Love had just learned of their existence from Habeck. The first is Rayot from the Heavenly Kingdom. The second is the Demon King of the Underground Kingdom. The strongest dragon of the Valley of Death, Urus, and Yopi from the human world. Each of them represents a specific race and territory. Love had no idea that Rayot was so powerful. So why does he live in the human world like some kind of merchant? And with his power sealed away? Then Habeck explained. That's why Ryo is called lazy. He gave up everything in the Heavenly Kingdom and just lazed around. But it was time to go. Habeck knew where Ryo's weapon was. But Love was a little worried about whether they could manage without Lee Ji-woo. And she didn't trust Habeck very much either. Then Luna arrived. She said she would help them. Love was furious at her appearance. Lee's miraculous resurrection took Riole by surprise and even frightened her quite a bit. Unwilling to forgive him, Ryola decided to use the sacred whip of the Heavenly Kingdom. The guards, seeing this, began to scatter in terror. Apparently, they were familiar with this object. This whip with huge claws destroyed everything in its path, including the castle walls. Apparently, Lee had really scared and angered her, for she did not know what she was doing. And at some point, when Riole stopped, it turned out that Lee Jiwoo had disappeared. Lady Riole ordered all troops to be mobilized. All forces were to be sent to Ryota's dungeon. Riole knew that Lee had gone there, and so it was. Lee tried to find the dungeon in the huge castle, and then he suddenly remembered that he hadn't seen Adventador, whom he had made his coward, in a long time. Dragon Urus reported that he no longer wanted to see the Bren world. Nothing new was happening between Lav and Luna. They were arguing again and wasting time. When asked how she got there, Luna showed her. She put on an earring and explained that she was the first player to enter the Heavenly Kingdom. Taking off the earring, Luna became a girl again, which amazed Love. Luna knew how to return her body. As it turned out, to learn this, one had to complete a quest. Finally, Lee and Urus found the way down to the basement. Perhaps that was where Rayot's dungeon was located. And indeed, down below, Lee found Rayot. However, Rayot did not recognize him in his female form. Not until he saw the wooden club and put all the facts together. All that remained was to figure out how to remove the angel's chains from Ryota. And while Rayot repeated that they couldn't be broken by physical force, Lee Ji-woo tore the chain apart with one movement. But they couldn't escape right away. Behind Lee stood Riole with a huge number of her servants. Luna didn't want to explain the essence of the quest. Then Love moved on to complaints about Lee and Luna's advances, but Luna didn't react. Instead, she led Love and Habeck to a heavenly spring. If they drank from it, they could return to their original form. That was what Love wanted to do, but she stopped. It was unclear why Luna had brought them here at this particular moment. After all, it was more important to find Ryota's weapon. Then Habeck announced that the weapon was hidden right there, in that very spring. Then Love decided to drink the heavenly water from the spring after all. The purification of her body began. The angel earring quest was completed, and Love returned to her female body. Now she could change her gender as she wished. Surprisingly, Luna did not deceive Love. She returned her body and completed the quest. It worked even if you drank the water from a bottle, and Luna filled the vessel. It would come in handy for Lee if he couldn't return here. Jealous, Love immediately demanded the bottle of water for herself. Of course, Luna wasn't stupid enough to give it to her. Watching this, Habeck wondered who Luna really was. She knew where the heavenly spring was and apparently knew that Ryota's weapon was here. She knew that you could drink the water elsewhere and many other things. And that wasn't all. What's more, Luna had even revived Urakan. She had even revived Yopi too. Luna was always at the center of every event, not Lee Jiwoo as it seemed. It seemed that Habeck had underestimated her. Then Luna stood up and announced that the Guardians would soon arrive and the battle would begin. After all, Ryota's weapon was being guarded. These Guardians were truly fierce and powerful and could not be compared to angels. The ancient Guardians of the Heavens looked funny, small and cute creatures at first glance. They were minions. There were 3 types, close combat and long-range combat. When she saw them, Lav ran to hug the cute creatures, unable to believe that they could pose any danger. But it was foolish to be deceived by their appearance. A second later, a huge stone block stood before Love, a monster. This was the original appearance of the Guardians, super minions. 100 of Ryol's elite soldiers approached Lee, ready to attack. Ryo asked Lee not to destroy them, as they had simply fallen under Ryol's control. Greedy Lee demanded money for this service. Ryo was shocked by this, but agreed because he had no other choice. Therefore, the blows from the wooden club were not lethal. They were simply meant to knock out the enemies. The 6th mirror was activated by Habeck to escape from the Guardians. This mirror was called Protection. Then he attacked himself. The 1st mirror was activated. A wave of light, fire, pillars of icy light. Where the Guardians had stood before, there was now a huge empty hole. The Demon Queen also fought, revealing her true nature. But a second type of minion appeared, a long-range type. It copies the enemy's skills and uses them with its left hand. While Habeck was planning to help Love, Minion pierced him with his stone fist. Minion had complete physical immunity, so the light wave had no effect. At that moment, Love was also seriously wounded. The demon's essence began to deactivate. And when both Habeck and Love were on the verge of death, Luna reappeared. She was able to defeat the Guardian. Mocking, Luna suggested that Love hide behind her back while she sorted everything out. After Luna became the goddess of life, she attacked only with her staff. And the time came to show how the goddess of life really fights. So far, defeating Ryoli's knights was easy, and Lee didn't even have to try hard. The ruler of the heavens, Ryol, was shocked at how quickly Lee Jiwoo had dealt with her army. In the end, only she remained. Ryol herself. There was nothing left for her to do but fight him personally. Raising her steel whip over Lee, Ryole was ready to finish him off. But Lee was not afraid because he had already dealt with her before. But Riot grabbed Lee and told him to get out of the way. Riot had to explain. Ryol's danger did not lie in her physical strength. She was not scary in that regard. It was all about her charm. That was how Ryole was able to grab Riot. This power was short-lived, but Ryole was strong in it. Moreover, this skill did not only work through the eyes. The charm skill was activated by Ryole's heavenly whip. She struck Ryota with the whip. She said that her charm transmitted through her eyes was weak and couldn't compare to what came through the whip. And it no longer mattered what kind of magic resistance the enemy had. If the whip touched them, they would be completely subjugated. Since Ryo was now charmed, saving him became even more difficult than it had been at first. And then Love remembered how Luna had repeatedly summoned a green monster with huge paws. When he came to, Habeck explained to Love that Luna possessed the sin of lust and that her power was comparable to that of Rayot and the other emperors. In other words, her power was incredible. Luna's life force skill was activated. Her body was also renewed. Raising her fist, Luna destroyed one of the Guardians with ease. But Minion, a close combat fighter, had complete physical immunity to attacks and magic. He was invincible. Habeck did not understand how this was possible. The second Minion melee fighter simply ran away from Luna. Everyone was curious about who she was and what kind of magic she was using. Then Habeck personally asked Luna what ability she had used. Luna healed Habeck and reminded him that she was the goddess of life and had certain abilities related to life force. As Luna herself explained, her abilities were not related to magic or physical damage. It was more of a realm of authority. She could take life as well as resurrect it. Luna did not want to explain anything else and suggested continuing the search for Ryota's weapon, which was at the bottom of the spring. Luna suggested that Habeck go and retrieve the weapon, and he agreed. Just as Ryol was about to order Rayot to destroy Lee with the weapon, Love, Luna, and Habeck ran up. There was a problem. Enchanted Rayot had already attacked Lee, and the weapon was close to him, and the seal was being removed. And that's what happened. Rayot regained his former strength. The heavenly spear returned to its owner. The seal was broken. Many years later, Ryo took on his true form. The arrival of the heavenly ruler began. Ryo, one of the 4 emperors, awoke. Lai was surprised to see Luna there. She took a bubble of water from the spring and handed it to him. When Lee realized what the water was for, he was overjoyed. He wanted very much to return to his body. But Ryol did not allow him to dwell on his feelings for long. Lee drank the water from the spring. The process of changing his body began. Finally, Lee became himself again. Luna was still hugging him, which did not please Love at all. But again, no one had time for that. Enchanted by his sister, Ryo was ready to attack. The magic of the strongest emperor was truly impressive. Walls collapsed and everything flew and spun around. Even Lee noticed that after the seal was removed, Ryo became faster and stronger than in their previous encounter. However, Lee believed he was much stronger. Perhaps that was true. With a blow from his club, he even knocked Ryo out for a short time. But that wasn't all Ryo had to offer. His next skill was lightning. This lightning strike came as an even bigger surprise to Lee. He was knocked down. Not permanently, of course, but still. Ryot's entire body was generating electricity, and until the battle was over, his power would continue to rise indefinitely. Ryota's sister Riole ordered her brother to immediately destroy everyone who had arrived. When Lee resurrected himself once again, Riola was terrified again. She ordered her brother to burn Lee to ashes so that there would be nothing left to resurrect. But Lee was no fool. He grabbed Ryota by the head with his teeth. Ryota went berserk and lunged at Lee. But Lee struck him again with his club. Surprisingly, even the awakened Rayot was no match for the great warrior. Everyone understood that Lee would go down in the history of the game as an amazing creature. Exhausted, Rayot fell to his knees before Lee. He was still enchanted. This time, Riola didn't know what to do next. The further her brother went, the weaker the charm would become. She couldn't let them take him away. The only way out was to find a loophole and charm these people too. An idea of how to wake Ryo came to Lee's mind. He began to tap him on the head with his stick, quickly and methodically, to bring him to his senses. Because of this, Lee didn't notice Riole's whip flying towards him. It hit him. As a result, Lee was charmed. Riole was delighted that she had succeeded. Now all the trump cards were in Lady Riole's hands, and she suggested that everyone fight again. Suddenly, Lee's healing factor kicked in and the spell was broken instantly. It turns out it worked even in this direction. And immediately, the evil Riole was hit on the head with a club from behind. She knocked her out. The knights gradually regained consciousness after the battle with Li Ji-woo. Riole's spell was broken on everyone. Then Ryo explained that it was all because Riole had lost consciousness from the blow to the head. Accordingly, Ryo himself was no longer enchanted either. All that remained was to deal with Riole, who had already regained consciousness. She still did not understand what had happened. Lee used his club to sharply cut her whip in two. Lady Riole's weapon was destroyed. She burst into tears, surrounded on all sides, feeling helpless. But Lee told her that he would not take Riole's life, and then he decided to devour her. Only the protection of her brother Ryota saved Riole from being devoured by gluttony. After all, she was his sister, and he loved her. In fact, Riola never intended to destroy Rayot. Habeck misunderstood everything, and although Riola's ways of expressing love were strange, everything she did was for her brother. Several hundred years ago, Rayot told Riola that he was going to live among humans. He asked her to take care of the Heavenly Kingdom for a few years. The fact that Rayot was going back to the humans to throw parties and get into adventures really upset his younger sister. But chaos reigned in the world because the Demon King had invaded, and Rayot was going to descend to help Yopi defeat him. In the end, Rayot had to leave the throne, which caused some concern for Riole. He still couldn't complete the 7 sins. Riole's sister sincerely did not understand her brother. After all, he always said that they would forever remain enemies of ordinary people. But she felt that he actually loved people very much, and that was why he was helping them so much. Rayot admitted that this might be true, and he left. Lord of the Sky, Rayot, the sin of sloth. The 7 sins had to be fulfilled with human lives, but because Rayot loved them too much, he couldn't even fulfill his own. And that was open disobedience to God. Therefore, no one knew when Rayot would disappear from this world. So Riole made a decision. When the time came, she would destroy all humans in place of her brother, even if it meant starting a rebellion. That's how it turned out that Riole would never do anything bad to her Rayo. All Riole wanted was to save Rayot, and now he was asking Lee to spare his sister. But Li Ji-woo believed that she must be punished for everything she had done. Realizing that Lee would not do anything without payment, Rayot offered a deal. He promised to buy everything Lee sold at the highest price for the rest of his life. Then Haebyok approached Lee and gave him all 8 of his mirrors as promised. He also asked for mercy for Rio. In the end, Lee agreed. The hidden quest of the Mirror King was completed. Now Lee was the guardian of the 8 mirrors. Having finished this, Lee Ji-woo, Love, and Luna opened the portal and headed home. Their star was waiting for them and was overjoyed to see them. Lee, of course, was the first she saw. In addition, the boys showed the girl their transformation skills. A few days later, the goddess of life, Luna, visited Ryota in the Heavenly Kingdom. She came alone. In response, Luna approached Ryota and declared that this circus was not the end. She then pierced him with her staff. The Heavenly Kingdom is a very important episode, and such an ending suits it better. The only clue at the scene of Ryota's death was the novice's cloak. Luna framed Lee so that Riole would suspect him and want revenge. She would gather all the soldiers and attack the human world. That is exactly what happened in the end. Soon the guards found Rayot's body, and the cloak they found pointed to the culprit. Riole was furious and summoned her army, and she went to the human world. The last chapter Luna talked about began. The Heavenly Kingdom began its attack. Their army was strong. All the guards were above level 500. Moreover, the strongest monsters of the Heavenly Kingdom, known as angels, also joined the battle. The power of the angels was not something ordinary users could handle. With the power of the sanctuary, it was possible to restore the health of people within a certain range. This was done by the top-ranked healer, Mr. Physio. The physiotherapist's job is that of a priest. His main skill is the Holy Strike. Anyone struck by the physiotherapist's fist recovers health at an unimaginable speed. The physiotherapist was aided by the winner of the Royal Duel Tournament, the magical diagnostician Min Shoko. The diagnostician activated her power, ice, wind. Ice formed under the angel's feet. It became much more difficult for them to move, and when the wind spell took effect, they fell onto the ice. It was a mistake to underestimate this spell just because it was first level. Minchko's next spell was Earthquake, also a first level spell. It created a hole in the place indicated by the caster. The angel commander fell into this hole. The stone wall spell prevented the other angels from reaching Minstock. By the time the wall was destroyed, Minstock was already gone. This pair, Physiotherapist and Minstock, made quite an impression on the players. The users in Lav were pleasantly surprised. Many who had not been seen before appeared. Some were attracted here only by the fun and the opportunity to test their abilities. The 5 strongest guilds naturally rejoined the battle. Unexpectedly, the difference in strength that the users gained from exploring the northern continent far exceeded the strength of the Heavenly Knights. However, at that moment, Riole appeared. Her whip was whole again, and she attacked with it. Riole's fury knew no bounds. She hated all humans, and she had come to personally destroy the pathetic humans who had killed her brother. Riole's charm worked again, and the players fell under her spell one by one. Seeing this, Li Ji-woo ordered Love to deal with the knights while he and Luna took care of Riole. Of course, Love was against it, but Lee explained that he was going to tell Riol that he hadn't touched her brother. But if she didn't listen and had to be convinced with a stick, then Luna's power of resurrection would be needed. There was no choice, and Love joined the players below. Fans immediately recognized her and went crazy. It was Han Sarang herself. The creator watched everything with interest. Who would have thought that the Heavenly Kingdom would suddenly attack the human world? Thanks to the moon, the sin of sloth was almost completely filled, and God wanted to enjoy it for longer. But that was the moon's plan. The sin of pride had long been filled, as had the sin of lust, the sin of anger, and the sin of greed, as well as gluttony. And now the sin of laziness had just been filled. It turns out that the last sin remains, the sin of jealousy. Previously, the creator wanted to give it to Lee, but he refused. Nothing can be done. There is another candidate. This time, the creator will not give the right to choose so as not to be refused. Love immediately sensed that something had happened. She sank to the ground. The second hidden profession was obtained. The unique characteristics of the sin of jealousy were activated. The fusion of the Demon King and the sin of jealousy took place. A new personality was created. The sin of jealousy, Love. The dragon Urus carried Zvezdochka away from the front lines. It was Lee Ji-woo's order. She had to be taken to a safe place. They stopped at the end of the hill, quite far from the front lines. Sometimes bearmen might come here, but Star would definitely be able to handle them. Urus headed back. Meanwhile, Riole continued to rage. Most of the players were charmed by Riol and were ready to follow her orders. The physiotherapist tried his best to break the spell, but nothing worked. It was a powerful spell. And then Lee Ji-woo appeared in the arena with his club, but not everyone recognized him because of his simple appearance. User Minstoko shouted at him to run away quickly, until she saw his club. As usual, Lee Ji-woo scattered all of Riol's zombies with a single blow. The angels flying above were also hit. The blow was powerful. Very quickly, nothing remained of the winged creatures. Even Riol was hit again. She was lying nearby, knocked down by the blow of the club. Lee was ready to negotiate. To do this, Lee asked Luna to restore Riol's life force so they could talk normally. And Lee began. He only tried to offer his condolences for the death of Rayot when he was whipped with all his might. Apparently, Riole was not going to believe that it wasn't him. The inconsolable Riola began to yell at Lee about how unscrupulous he was, and how he had the nerve to say such things after what he had done to Rayot. Ms. Riol practically didn't listen to Lee, who kept repeating that he hadn't touched her brother, and that he wasn't such an idiot as to deliberately leave his cloak at the scene of the crime. It was obvious that the whole situation was a setup, but in the game, all the non-player characters were too prone to emotions. No matter what Lee said, Riol wouldn't believe him. Hiding behind Lee's back, Luna egged him on and laughed hysterically. Lee began to suspect that she was the one who had destroyed Rayot and asked her about it. Luna didn't answer directly. Instead, she turned to Riol and started teasing her about Rayot. But Luna continued talking. Today was the third day. That meant that Rayot was about to be resurrected. Riol didn't understand what she was talking about. Luna's quick reactions and strength impressed Lee. He was curious to find out who she really was. Of course, Luna did not answer. Then Lee asked what she meant about Rayot's resurrection. As it turned out, angels of royal blood, even if they died, would be resurrected after 3 days. Riole probably didn't know this because she had never seen anything like it before. However, in exchange, Ryo would lose his halo. He would become a star and fall into the world of humans. And as Luna spoke, so it happened. Now, the ordinary Ryo landed on the hill where Zvezdochka was. It was all wonderful, but Lee wondered why Luna hadn't told him about this before and how she knew all this. It was a secret, and Luna had no intention of sharing it. But Luna did reveal one thing. She needed Riol to start the battle. That's why she didn't tell her about the resurrection. Just then, a huge pillar of fire flew toward them. Lee grabbed Riol and saved her life. As it turned out, they were being attacked by their boss, Love. But there was definitely something wrong with her. Due to the peculiarity of the sin of jealousy, her personality had changed significantly. In simple terms, Han Sarang had completely lost control of her character. That was how the game worked. Now, artificial intelligence had taken away Miss Love's right to control her character, specifically the sin of jealousy. Han Sarang herself saw and understood everything, but she couldn't do anything about it. Only Luna could hear Love, but she had no intention of showing that she could hear her. After all, she had almost succeeded. Now Luna could sit on the sidelines and watch Love die at Lee's hands. This is exactly what Luna immediately suggested to Lee Ji-woo, even though Love began to attack Lee. But Lee couldn't raise his hand. Luna told Lee that every sin has its own peculiarity. Jealousy is hatred for all people. Even before, when Love was always by Lee's side, she didn't use even 10% of her power. And only now did he notice how strong she had become. Now everything was different. The sin of jealousy was using her to its fullest. Not knowing what to do, Han Sarang could think of nothing better than to leave the game. It worked. Han Sarang was in her room. She thought the problem was solved. But her sister and manager informed her that nothing had worked. After leaving the game, Han had not logged out of her character. Her sister showed Han Sarang a stream where it was clear that Love was still fighting Lee Ji-woo. Shocked, Love didn't know what to do. She would probably have to return to Chrono Life and come up with something. And then Han Sarang's sister became curious. Was this game really that interesting? Thanks to this small interest, an unknown master appeared in the game. But more on that later. Everyone, including the streamer Falcon Eye, froze and watched Love's massive attack on Lee Ji-woo. The sin of jealousy unleashed all the Demon King's abilities, and activated the skill Destructive Grip. Love's wings became huge like the devil's own hands, and she rushed to attack Lee Ji-woo. With all her speed, Love rushed down to where Lee was standing. As always, he activated his ego pants without emotion. The adventurer's soul materialized, Dragon's Grip. The skill was similar to the one Sin was using now. Two incredibly huge forces collided in a confrontation. Sin was wildly enraged that Lee dared to use such power. Trapped in the chambers of her mind, Love desperately hoped that Lee would be able to save her. Suddenly, Luna appeared next to Love, no longer hiding that she could see and hear her. Luna began to pressure Love, morally proving that she had always been a hindrance to Lee and caused nothing but problems. In her opinion, Luna herself was Lee Ji-woo's soulmate, and they had always been inseparable. This statement made Love laugh. She was sure that Lee would never love someone like Luna. She thought he hated her. But Luna knew how much Lee loved fighting and having fun. It was only because of her that everything that had happened before and now was happening. Moreover, Luna told Love that Lee would hardly have kissed her if he hated her. To prove it, Luna appeared right in front of Lee and without saying a word kissed him. Naturally, Lee Ji-woo was stunned. Love's eyes filled with tears. Everyone around them watched with delight. Zvezdochka ran up to Ryut, who had fallen from the sky, looking worried. She woke him up, and he came too. The former Lord of the Heavens did not immediately realize that he was in the world of humans. Thanks to Zvezdochka's care, he regained his life force. Moving away from the moon and wiping his mouth with his hand, Lee began to yell at her. Even in the middle of battle, she had come up with something like this. Since the sin of jealousy did not listen to anything and did not react to Lee, he decided to knock him out carefully for now. Then Lee noticed that Love, or rather the sin, was crying. He thought that Love had returned to her body and asked if she was crying for him. Love told him that she had become famous at a very young age and had gone through a lot because of her parents, so she hadn't talked to anyone for a while. But after some time, Han Sarang returned to the stage. Perhaps it was all the fault of the environment in which she grew up, but she was still not in a relationship and had hardly communicated with boys. Perhaps this is why Han has always expressed her feelings so awkwardly. She yelled and got angry as if she had never seen the opposite sex before. Like a child. As if her soul had returned to the body of 5-year-old Han Sarang. But in reality, she really likes Lee, and now she has said it openly. The audience watched as the battle ended and they talked about something, but they couldn't hear anything. Han continued. After her confession on the beach, she was afraid to rush him so as not to be rejected. However, now Han Sarang wants to hear his answer, especially after what she just saw. Naive Lee had believed until now that Han Sarang's confession on the beach was just a joke. Now he was in shock. Besides, Lee couldn't believe that the famous Han Sarang, who sings, acts in movies, and has tons of fans, could be in love with him. Watching this scene was the cunning Luna. She knew that Lee would do everything she wanted him to. And this fool really didn't believe that Love was in love with him. He thought it was a prank. And where would we be without Luna? She landed between them. She started telling Lee that this couldn't be true. Not in a game, not in real life, and that those who are meant for each other should be together. Luna grabbed Lee's hand. After getting her answer, Love stopped crying. The conditions for awakening the sin of jealousy were fulfilled. What Luna had hoped for happened. Red liquid gushed from Han Sarang's body. Even her usually cold-blooded sister was shocked by what she saw on the screen. Han Sarang's body was engulfed by the red liquid like two halves of a nut, and this vessel collapsed to the ground. This strange vessel cracked into two halves. Everything was bathed in red light. Miss Love was gone for good. It was the very sin of jealousy. Now Love could not return to her original form because she had completely merged with the sin of jealousy. And even if she leaves the game, the character will remain the same. This all amused Luna greatly. Apparently, the only option was to destroy the sin, and Lee Ji-woo understood this himself. After mentally apologizing to Love, Lee Ji-woo struck the sin of jealousy with all his might. But of course, it wasn't as simple as it might have seemed at first. Nothing worked. The sin was intact and unharmed. Lee's attacks and the sin's counterattacks from the air looked impressive from the sidelines. It looked like the end of the world. The creator joined the moon. He didn't want the planet to be destroyed again. He would probably have to defend it. The moon was also interested in what would happen to the human world. After all, God would be too busy preparing for the end. But he thought it was too early to talk about the end. Even though the sin of jealousy was already filled to the brim, thanks to massive explosions. When he said it was too early, the creator was referring to the outcome of this battle. If jealousy won, there would be no need for it anymore. Ever. And this amused the moon once again. She did not believe that jealousy could defeat Lee Ji-woo, but sin was much stronger than she thought. This thing wasn't even hurt, considering that Lee hit and hit and hit with all his might, trying different techniques and skills. Then Panties climbed on top of the sin of jealousy and struck it right at the top. The sin split open, and Lee began to fall inside this thing, and it swallowed him, closing itself again. The unique feature of the sin of jealousy is that it merges with its target and takes everything away from it. It is jealous of its target. It hates it. It corrupts it. And in the end, it takes everything away from it. But Lee Ji-woo is the strongest in this game, so he has a chance, especially when he's so angry at Sin. Using the speed of light after his release, Lee continued to strike Sin with wild blows. The last one tore that huge thing into tiny pieces. But Sin of Jealousy was in no hurry to give up completely. The remains gathered in a pile on the ground, and then they simply absorbed into the earth. This was an unexpected turn of events even for the omnipresent goddess of life, Luna. Now Sin had merged with the entire continent of the game. As the creator had said, this was his most terrifying feature. Sin grew and grew, never stopping for a second. It transformed into a huge red dragon of incredible size, the sea dragon of jealousy, Leviathan. This was the true face of the Sin of Jealousy. Lee noticed something on its head. It was love, almost completely merged with Sin. The moon and God waited to see what choice Lee would make. Whether the door would open depended on the outcome of this battle. Leaving Zvezdochka safe, Urus finally returned to his master. He missed Lee and rushed to hug him. Meanwhile, Leviathan attacked. Lee was just about to destroy him when his eyes fell on Love and his hands dropped. Not knowing what to do, Lee hung his head in disappointment. Urus hinted to Lee that it was Love. Lee was embarrassed and laughed it off. Lee Ji-woo also told Urus about his conversation with Love about her feelings, and that he was sure it was a joke. But there really was no choice now. And Lee had to attack the dragon with his strongest blow. The dragon was fast and agile, so it was impossible to defeat it quickly, but Lee continued. Then Urus suggested an option. It wasn't for nothing that Love's body was sticking out so conspicuously. Perhaps they should aim for it. It was a good idea, but Lee didn't know how to get himself in the right frame of mind to destroy Love's body. Then Urus suggested a kiss. It was a traditional way to wake a sleeping beauty. But Lee knew they weren't in a fairy tale and activated the spirit of the swordsman. This strengthened his skills many times over. And just as Lee thought that the last Sin had been defeated, the creator told Luna that Lee was wrong. Sin can merge with anything. This time, it merged with the moon. And now it planned to attack the entire planet, and Lee in particular. Activation of the 8 mirror skill, another one of Lee's secrets. The magnifying glass skill. The size of the owner increased in proportion to the amount of mana they had, and Lee had more than enough. He grew to the size of several planets. Then Lee activated the Titan Spirit skill. The combination of these skills was mind-boggling. After destroying the dragon's body, Lee saw that Love's body had been freed. He picked her up in his arms and carried her back home to the ground. The sin of jealousy was completely destroyed. The Adventurers Guild was conducting registration, qualification tests, and rank promotions. This place was the link between receiving a quest and receiving a reward. And it was here that the mage swordsman Minchoko sat with the physiotherapist, bored. They were thinking about how so many events had happened in the game in such a short period of time lately, especially those that the company hadn't even announced. And it was not in the company's best interest for the main storyline to progress too quickly. They had to make money somehow. The storyline was progressing slowly. Then Minchoko suggested that maybe it was because of Trusakov, and that he had somehow broken the quest system. Suddenly, a wild noise came from the street. Looking out, Minchoko saw a huge eye in the sky. On the day when everything turned an unpleasant green color and a huge eye appeared in the sky, all users knew for sure that the continent was doomed this time. The famous idol Han Sarang was sleeping peacefully in her bed in the real world. But she jumped up and started frantically hitting a toy that looked like Lee when she remembered how he had ignored her confession of love. Han Sarang's sister teased her kindly, but she told her not to attach too much importance to what happened in the game. After all, what matters is what happens in reality. Inexperienced Han Sarang listened carefully to what her sister said, but neither of them had ever been in a relationship before. After that day, Love never logged into the game again. Her sister was curious about what Han Sarang planned to do next. The doorbell rang. It was none other than Lee Ji-woo. He had come to visit Han Sarang. She jumped for joy when she saw that it was Lee. Her sister told Han that this was her chance to seduce him. However, her sister wouldn't let Han Sarang go in her tracksuit and sent her to get ready. Lee received a text message telling him to wait a little longer. Finally, Han Sarang came out looking her best, and in a very short skirt. And there they were, speeding through the city in his fancy sports car. There was a certain awkwardness between them. Neither of them knew what to say. Then Lee Ji-woo decided to ask if Han Sarang's confession in the game was sincere. But Sarang boldly admitted that there wasn't even a % of a joke in it. And Lee apologized for acting like a fool back then. He really thought it was a joke. The car stopped at its destination. It was a van room area. It was a poor neighborhood. This was where Lee had been living until recently. Sarang didn't know that. She didn't know that Lee had been so poor before. They went inside. The small room didn't even have any furniture. Lee wanted to tell his story. That's why he brought Sarang here. The reason Lee didn't believe in Han Sarang's feelings was that he was just an ordinary guy, completely unremarkable. He wasn't particularly good at sports either. His family lived here. His parents worked constantly and were hardly ever home. His life was miserable. And so Lee lived here, but he didn't feel unhappy. His parents sent him enough money to keep his spirits up. But when Lee turned 20, his parents practically stopped supporting him financially, and he had to take on odd jobs. That's how he survived every day. After work, he dragged his tired body home, and when it seemed to him that this was how his whole life would pass, he happened to look up game capsules. He entered the game center and decided to give it a try. That's how his story in Chrono Life began. A completely different Lee Ji-woo was born. After that, Lee began to live a life completely different from reality. But even in real life, Lee's personality gradually began to change. He became bolder and more open, although echoes of the past still linger. Listening to Lee's story, Lee Sarang clumsily turned around and fell right into Lee Ji-woo's arms. Sarang's fragile-looking hands pressed Lee to the floor. She leaned in to kiss him. A scream rang out from outside the window. Han Sarang's sister had climbed up to the 3rd floor and was shouting that she wouldn't allow this to happen. Then she scolded Sarang so badly that everyone felt terribly uncomfortable. After all, Han was a minor and shouldn't be doing such things. She should have just gone on her date. In the end, Lee Ji-woo, who had carelessly brought Sarang here and left her alone, was punished, and this tediousness continued until everyone went to their apartments. As they parted, Han Sarang rushed to Lee and hugged him tightly. She said they would see each other soon in the game. In reality, the most Sarang and Lee could hope for was a hug, but Sarang thought about how they could go further in the game. Satisfied with this thought, Han Sarang put on her glasses and logged into the game. Lee was also lost in thought. He remembered all the moments he had shared with Han Sarang that day, and all her confessions. He put on his glasses and logged in as well. Urus was eagerly awaiting the return of his hen Nima. Love was standing nearby. Looking at her, Lee felt emotions he had never felt before. Boss Love was so beautiful. Zvezdachka approached and immediately noticed that Love and Lee were talking about their feelings. Zvezdachka also said that someone was looking for Love and Lee and wanted to meet them both. And all together, they went to the guest house where they had been many times before. They entered the door. A surprise awaited them there. There were 2 of them, Rayot and his younger sister, Riol. Rayot got straight to the point and said that he was there for the final episode of the game. In order to complete the final episode, strength was needed from all areas. Heaven, the demon world, and so on. Representatives had gathered here. And there was also the most important character, the polar dragon Adventador. He poked his head out of Lee's shorts. The polar dragon began his story. The beginning of the story lies on the continent of Chrono, a continent that has existed since time immemorial, a world of peace and tranquility. The ancient continent of Chrono was inhabited by several races living in peace and harmony. The most numerous race with incredible fertility were humans. The most beautiful and long-lived were the elves. In terms of technology, the gnomes surpassed all other races. The ancient beastmen took on the strengths of both humans and animals. The strongest race was the dragons. There were also many other intelligent species. They respected each other and lived in peace and harmony. And God ruled over all these classes. God loved the continent of Chrono. Not just the continent, but every place on this green planet. It was the place that God loved most. However, the races living on the continent were not like God. Soon, they disrupted the peaceful course of life. Seeing all the atrocities, God decided that he could no longer tolerate it. However, he could not intervene directly in the human world. This was his only limitation. Therefore, God divided his soul into 7 parts and scattered them throughout the world. Some of these pieces became sins: pride, laziness, and greed. All those who had sins within them got rid of them, including Love, Lee, and Ryo. And here the most interesting part begins. The 7 sins were originally divine powers. Therefore, even if a sinner died, his power was passed on to the next candidate. But in the future, there would be no new 7 sinners, because all 7 sins were now filled. God was sitting and thinking about Luna when she arrived. He knew that Luna was in love with Lee. At the same time, God called Lee a friend, and the moon wondered why. After all, they had only met a couple of times. Even God himself could not explain it. He liked Lee and even missed him a little. God felt the same way about the moon. He remembered the day they first met. Much time had passed since the continent of Chrono was founded. During that time, God had punished the continent with sins. But the population quickly recovered and history repeated itself, and this began to annoy God. And then the creator met her. She was an ordinary user, but somehow she knew who he was and what he was thinking. At that moment, Luna told him about herself and that she would soon take a hidden class and become a goddess of life. After that, Luna also received the power of lust from God and became Sin. It was an excellent decision on his part. With Luna's help, the god quickly created other sin carriers and finally created this. No one will ever be able to defeat this monster, as Luna said. But in reality, it was the god's true body. And now it was time for them to unite. But there was still one last step. However, the god was confident that Luna could handle it on her own. Having finished talking, God began the union. It had finally begun, the end of the world. A vibration shook the inn-room. Players ran through the streets in terror. The monster began to move. Seeing the monster, Lee remembered that he had seen it before when Luna had summoned it. The first thing he did was try to defeat the monster with his dragon breath, but nothing happened. Ryo approached and advised Lee to think first and then act. He explained that at first glance it might seem like the creature was nearby, but in reality it was in another dimension. However, it was obvious that the monster would soon break through into the human world. Then the sky seemed to tear apart and its fragments rained down on the ground. The monster appeared from another world. All users received a message with the conditions of the final quest. They had to save the world from God. Brother and sister Ryo and Riol expected that sooner or later God would break into the world, but they did not expect it to happen so soon. After all, there was still one last step to take. Had God really decided to take such extreme measures? Rayet turned to Lee Ji-woo. He wanted to call an emergency meeting. They needed to retreat first, but Lee wouldn't listen. They were already overcome with excitement and the prospect of fighting the monster. Lee rushed into the attack and the monster fell. The boundary between the dimensions began to restore itself. Lee dived across the boundary and disappeared. Lee Ji-woo's recklessness struck Ryo as rather unpleasant. However, this time it was the best decision Lee Ji-woo could have made, because fighting a god on this side would mean the end of the world immediately. Lee continued his attempt to strike God in the other dimension, using all his techniques, including the icy breath of the polar dragon Adventador. Here he could unleash his full power. But with a single swipe of God's paw, Lee's head, body, and legs were split into 3 pieces. Fortunately, Lee possessed healing powers and continued to attack. The next thing he tried against God was a continuous slash. Lav was very worried about Lee and was very curious to know where her Piss had gone. As it turned out, Piss was Lee's first nickname in the game. Piss and Lav are so romantic. However, Ryo refused to go to his aid. He said he had underestimated Lee. No one would help him. Either he would defeat God himself, or no one would. But still, even so, the strength of all the players would be needed in the final quest. Then Love asked what would happen in this episode that would require the strength of everyone. Ryo said that she would see for herself very soon, and that there was no point in explaining. It wasn't just Love who was worried about Lee. After he saved Riol, she developed very romantic feelings for him, and believed that he would return unharmed. Hearing this, her brother Ryo was taken aback. Could Riole really be in love with Lee Ji-woo? He was jealous of her like a brother. It's better not to mention what Love thought. While they were sorting things out, God was no longer as strong and whole as before. He was missing parts of his body. This was strange to Lee. The final boss couldn't be that weak. He had almost finished him off. And as tradition dictated, the goddess of life, Luna, appeared at the last moment. She crept up from behind. The beginning of this game and revenge on Luna, and her appearance now at the end, seemed symbolic to Lee. Finally, the goddess of life, Luna, would get her just desserts for everything she had done. And he began to attack her. Luna looked completely calm, even when Lee split her body in 2. For she had a hidden ability to create life, which allowed Luna to instantly regenerate. It was no wonder that Lee had nicknamed Luna Cockroach. She could survive in any conditions. Lee grabbed her by the arm, so that Luna wouldn't escape, and he tried to devour her with gluttony. And it seemed like Lee Ji-woo had succeeded at first. Luna tried to stop him, but a message popped up saying that the absorption had failed. Completely confused, Lee Ji-woo didn't understand how this was possible. Nothing was working on her. Absorption doesn't work on the body of a god. Now the moon was going to make Lee pay for what he had done to her, in her opinion. She grabbed her staff. Using her creation skill, Luna began to resurrect the creator. And of course, she succeeded. As it turned out, the final boss had more than one phase, and after each one, he became stronger and stronger. So, phase 2. Absorption was useless against a god, so Lee decided to try the swordsman's spirit skill. And this trick worked. At least Lee Ji-woo managed to wound the god this time. Lee thought that this was it and that they would move on to the 3rd phase, but Luna said that unfortunately the 2nd phase was not over yet. President King watched the events unfold continuously. Soon, one of the 2 strongest players would win. The company's employees thought they should intervene, but the president did not agree. Recently, the game had released content for the next 10 years. There was no further plot. This meant that there would be no updates for several years if everything ended now. As it turned out, the president had not been sitting idle all this time, and had hired twice as many developers. Although doubling the number of employees would not greatly increase the speed of development, it would be able to put out the fire that had broken out. Luna was starting to annoy Lee more and more. She was openly mocking him, but first he had to deal with God. The creator's attacks were getting stronger and more painful. Lee felt that it was becoming much more difficult to fight. Some of God's attacks were able to suppress Lee's healing factor, and that was a problem. And if Luna's ability was to create, then the creator's unique ability was destruction. God's attacks were relentless, and Lee was already dreaming of help. Now he understood what destruction meant. On top of that, Luna was also using her abilities against Lee Ji-woo, and he found himself caught between two fires. Meanwhile, Ryol was already thinking about where she and Lee would go on their honeymoon. Ryol's older brother Ryo was shocked that she was already thinking about marrying Lee Ji-woo, and Love's desire to destroy Ryo became more unbearable with every passing second. Moreover, Ryole went even further and began to wonder whether their child with Lee would be an angel or a human. These conversations annoyed everyone present, especially Ryota and Love. Zvezdochka and Urus went outside. He was very upset that Lee was alone in a strange dimension without him. After the fierce attack, Lee didn't even try to recover. Luna thought it was the end. After all, he was a great warrior and was supposed to be the one to save everyone. Deep down, Luna hoped that he would save her too. But luckily, the healing factor was activated, and Lee was safe and sound. It was strange because the destructive attack should have suppressed that skill. It turned out that Lee had attacked himself before dying from the god's burning gaze. What a clever move. It was incredible. Luna was in awe of Lee's thoughtfulness and cunning. But in Luna's opinion, Lee's existence in the game was a coding error. Everything he could do was too much. Annoyed by her talk, Lee hit Luna hard from above. She was hit by a wave of fire of incredible power. But of course, it didn't affect Luna. Lee couldn't accept the idea that he wouldn't be able to defeat her. Restraining her emotions, Luna continued to talk about how, even though everyone didn't believe in Lee, her mother disagreed with them. Lee remembered that God had also mentioned his mother more than once. Who was she? So this mother decided that Lee was a mistake in the game, and Luna and God continued to attack him from all sides. But Lee also had his own tricks up his sleeve. Using one of his skills, he ended up behind her, but that wasn't all. Now Lee was practically everywhere. There were so many clones of him that it was impossible to count them all. It was the skill of the Mirror King, photocopying. One of the clones grabbed Luna by the shoulders and held her, while the real Lee approached from the front. He struck her on the head with his wooden club, but he didn't hit her hard. Several copies began to do the same. At one point, Luna even began to cry and beg Lee to stop. But Lee wanted to see her suffer, but he became more and more excited. Revenge was sweet. The quiet place was drowned in a mad scream. Lee had no intention of destroying Luna. He just wanted to hit her on the head. Surprisingly, there was a seemingly reasonable reason for this terrible and cruel act. The humiliation he had suffered in the past and the knife in the back from Luna, now was the time for real revenge for Lee. And it seemed that they had dealt with Luna, but there was still God. No matter how many clones he destroyed, it was useless. Lee created countless numbers of them. And so, roughly speaking, it became much easier to fight the god with combined efforts. The simultaneous use of the continuous slash skill caused a lot of noise and fire. And now the second phase for the god was definitely over. Lee turned off the photocopy. Satisfied with himself, Lee asked Luna what she was going to do next. And then the god's body lit up with green light. Luna was glad that the third phase had finally begun. The god disappeared. And Luna announced that the arena for the third phase would be the human world. The inhabitants of the human world watched this terrifying phenomenon. Something appeared in the sky. A huge round egg with hollows and veins, and it rushed toward the earth at tremendous speed. The players began to run. This thing crashed into the ground, causing an incredibly powerful explosion that destroyed everything around it. A powerful shockwave swept away all the players who had managed to run away from the explosion. In another dimension, Lee demanded that Luna urgently open the portal back, but she couldn't do it. Only God himself could create a breach between dimensions. Activating his omnipresent flame skill, Lee saw what was happening in the village near the front line. Luna also said that now the continent must enter the battle without Lee's participation in the third phase. Miraculously managing to activate his protective barrier magic, Ryo saved Zvezdochka from the blow. But even without that, Ryo's strength was running out, and now this magic came at a cost to his health. However, his sacrifice was in vain. Tentacles emerged from the egg, one of which pierced Zvezdochka. Seeing this through the flames, Lee went mad with rage. How dare this monster touch Zvezdochka? The mage swordsman Mincho, winner of the royal tournament. She had also performed well in the battle against the Heavenly Kingdom. Now she called on everyone to gather and stand against the god. Unfortunately, due to the fall of the ball, most of the users were either killed or seriously injured. The physiotherapist restored them as best he could, but there were so many of them. After the monster from the god's sphere killed Zvezdochka, not only Lee lost his composure, but also Ryo. An attempt was made to forcibly unlock the angel's sealed power. It was dangerous for Rado's life, but he did it anyway. Fortunately, the attempt was successful and Rado regained his halo. He is an angel once again. The power of the angel Blah was also unlocked, but then Zvezdochka appeared nearby and the unlocking of the power was cancelled. As it turned out, Zvezdochka had indeed died, but she simply reconnected. It's just a game after all. But if you get too deeply involved, you can forget that it's just a game. That's what happened to Lee. Ryota's current state was such that he didn't have much power, and against God he was pretty helpless. But fortunately, all the users united and helped each other as best they could in the battle against God. However, this monster was practically invulnerable, and it seemed as if no weapon could harm him. By this time, the physiotherapist had healed the wounded, and they were ready to join the battle. In addition, the physiotherapist had the ability to restore the health of players within a certain range. There wasn't a single player who didn't love Zvezdochka, and because the monster had dared to touch her, they were ready to fight 10 times harder than usual. Satisfied that the situation had united everyone, Lee extinguished the flames and grabbed Luna by the throat. He needed to find out if there was any way to escape from here. However, Luna said that it was impossible. Even if they died and were reborn, Lee would still end up here, in a place called the Garden of Eden. And now there were only two of them here, Lee and Luna. She started talking about their relationship again, but Lee said he wasn't interested in her at all. Then Luna said that if Lee started dating her, she would give him everything. This stubbornness infuriated Lee Ji-woo. He grabbed her shoulders again and began making photocopies to refresh Luna's memory. Apparently, the only way to get through to her was with force and blows. Lee hit Luna on the head with a bat again, but this time Luna didn't let him abuse her. She destroyed her body and recreated it in another place. The unconscious Luna began to come to and found herself completely alone. She was in some kind of clearing. Riole approached her from behind. They were 3 kilometers from the frontline village. They had been thrown here by the recent attack because they were close to the center of the explosion. According to Riola, they needed to hurry and return to the village as soon as possible to save the others. But something was wrong with Lav. She was in awe of Riol and wanted to touch her very much. Lav looked crazy. Releasing the essence of the Demon King, Lav flew after Riola with the same crazy look in her eyes. Meanwhile, the battle continued in the village near the front line. If things continued like this, the users would be able to defeat the larva from the god's sphere. But Rayot, whose arm was wounded, said that all these attacks were pointless and did not damage the monster. Because it was a particle of God, Lai continued to watch the battle through the ever-present flames. Somewhere he had heard about the particle of God. He was no longer interested in fighting Luna, as it was essentially pointless. She was essentially invulnerable. Then Li asked Luna what this particle of God was. She suggested that he think carefully and remember. And Li Jiwoo remembered. It was on the day of Love's abduction that Haebeck mentioned the Castets, the God particle. As it turned out, weapons of mythical power were called particles of God. But then it follows that these larvae are also weapons of mythical power. Even though they have different forms, they are essentially the same. This battle was never meant to be won by users with ordinary abilities, because damage to God particles can only be inflicted by God particles, and ordinary users had no idea why they couldn't inflict any damage at all. Riot told Zvezdochka about the mythical weapons, but the problem was that almost no one had such weapons. Most of the weapons had been bought up by the game's main merchant. Zvezdochka tried to remember his name, and she realized that it was Ryo. And Rayot had bought the mythical weapons not just for the sake of it, but specifically for this day. When Zvezdochka rejoiced that they could now attack, Ryo said that it was not yet time. But then a breach appeared in the monster's armor. Everyone turned to see whose attack had worked. It was Riol's whip. Finally, she had arrived. Ryol's weapon was of a mythical level, which made sense. That's why the attack worked. With her unique brass knuckles, Love joined in. Of course, her attacks also worked. This was a sight to behold. The current ruler of the Heavenly Kingdom and the current ruler of the Underground Kingdom were fighting side by side. A black and white alliance of hell and heaven. The monster larva was already on its last breath. The duo of heaven and hell seemed entertaining to Luna and Li Jiwoo, but Luna repeated that this battle would not end so easily and that ordinary users would not be able to win. The first larva was defeated, but this was clearly not the end. Others began to stir, and suddenly they began to scatter in different directions. There were now a huge number of these larvae. The players were surrounded. Luna warned them not to underestimate the final boss. Even if Love and Riol combined the efforts of all the monsters, they couldn't defeat it. Lee laughed at Luna's words. Suddenly, Lee turned to Eurus, and to his surprise, Eurus heard him. Lee explained that he was stuck and couldn't get out, but Lee and Eurus's souls were bound, and Lee could send him mana if he wanted to. Then Lee said he would send all his mana to Urus so that he could transform into his true dragon form, and destroy all the larvae without exception. The arriving mana made Urus grow larger and larger. Soon he rose up to the heavens. And so Urus reached enough mana to take on his true form. The process of materialization in his original form began. The two-headed dragon Urus was reborn in all its glory. The players were shocked by what they saw. Even the god particles in the form of insects panicked. The strongest monster on the continent frightened everyone. This two-headed dragon had always been the greatest fear of the game's users. Almost every player had been to the Valley of Death where Eurus lived at least once before. And then fear settled in the hearts of the users when they saw this dragon. Only Zvezdochka dared to ask the dragon if he would help them. The dragon ordered all the players to get as far away as possible while they still had the chance. Obeying him, the users rushed to flee. Only Zvezdochka did not hurry. She remembered her dear Urus, her friend, and it was strange for her to see his ferocity now. Zvezdochka was also worried about the dragon, but he ordered her to run away and said that he would protect her, and that everything would be fine with him. Riot approached the girl and took her by the hand, leading her away from the battlefield and leaving everything to Urus. Pillars of green light poured down on the dragon from all sides. These were magical attacks from the god, but they only bounced off the dragon's thick skin. Then Urus fired fire from his mouth in response. The wild flames burned everything in their path. Urus's attack was fatal for the god's particles. In addition to mythical or superior weapons, there are also the Seven Sins who turned away from God. Their attacks were also effective. The God particle could not be a match for the two-headed dragon Eurus, and no one could imagine the situation, neither God nor the system. No one except Lee. He was in a state of wild excitement from what he was seeing in the omnipresent flames. He didn't notice how Luna had managed to stick close to him. Lee ordered her to move away and reminded her that they weren't alone here, as she thought. Of course, Lee was referring to his underwear and the Adventador living there. Riot's shoulder looked worse and worse. Watching the dragon, a thought came to his mind. Could it be that Urus hadn't shown his true strength the whole time? Ryota's assumption was correct. Until that moment, Urus had never fought at full strength. The reason for this was quite simple. All of his previous opponents had been rather weak. All the particles of the god had been destroyed. Their total number was almost 4,000. Zvezdochka ran up to Urus with cries of joy, but he ordered her not to move. Yes, the particles of God had been destroyed, but the main enemy was still alive. The sphere from which the god's particles had poured out lay nearby, motionless for now. The dragon took to the air. The sphere began to rise toward him and glow with a bright light. The dragon's breath melted the sphere almost completely. The remains lay on the ground, but he was still alive. And these remains began to rise upward in small green squares. Everyone was very scared because no one understood what was happening. It looked like pixels. And these pixels began to glow very brightly. They circled very close to the players. Lee Jiwoo, who was still being watched by Luna, was also curious about what was happening. She explained that the final phase had begun. The final boss entered the arena, and this boss began to take the form of a human. Suddenly, Lee Ji-woo's eyes began to shed bloody tears. Luna silently watched him. It wasn't just Lee. All the other players had the same reaction. Then the god spoke. He said that this effect would pass after a while and that there was no need to panic. Compared to Eurus, the god's body was very small. He stopped in front of the dragon. The god remembered him as a cub. The god showed Eurus memories of when he was still in his egg and reminded him that he was supposed to be a seventh sinner and destroy humans, not protect them. The dragon shot a stream of his scorching flame at the god, but he remained without a single scratch. Among all the seven sinners, the god loved Eurus the most, and he was sad that he now had to destroy him. The god shot the dragon with his destructive power. A stream of light struck the dragon's scales and wounded him. Eurus fell to the ground. The little star began to cry. Then Eurus slammed God with his huge paw. The ground shook. God lifted the dragon's paw with one finger. Nothing could stand against him. And again, God wounded the two-headed Eurus. He howled in pain. Lee demanded that he cancel the transformation and fly away. He had already done enough, but even though Eurus heard Lee, he could not follow his order. He felt instinctively that he could not allow Pai, that is, Lee, to meet this creature. The new mission that the dragon had chosen for himself was to protect Lee, and he would do so even if it meant his own death. But the god repelled all attacks with a single wave of his hand. Eurus, however, was already in a bad way. The dragon had already suffered many wounds, and the god continued to mock him. He deprived the dragon of one wing. The distraught star rushed at the god, but he unleashed a devastating fire at her. The dragon shielded her with his body. Now there was a huge hole in it. The dragon was dying. The god fired another volley of fire at him. Eurus begged Zvezdochka not to cry because he was happy to protect everyone. But if the dragon died, he would not be able to be reborn like any other player. Everyone knew that. Now the dragon remembered his past, how he had destroyed people even though he didn't want to, how he had joined forces with Lee and finally got rid of his loneliness. And now it was time to repay his kindness. Grabbing the god in his paw, the dragon said that they would die together, and the dragon Eurus blew himself up. Lee held his Eurus and scolded him for not obeying when he was ordered to fly away. Eurus had done well. Zvezdochka wept inconsolably on Ryota's chest, and everyone else mourned as well. All the players just cried as they watched the dragon who had sacrificed his life for them die. Suddenly, Lee appeared out of nowhere, carrying Eurus in his arms. The little dragon was in serious condition, but alive. Zvezdochka rushed to them, and Lee told her that Eurus was fine, just unconscious because he had used up all his strength. It was all unbelievable, but it was a huge relief for everyone who witnessed it. When Eurus woke up, he didn't understand why he was alive, or how he had returned to his original form. Lee explained that he had done it before the dragon had a chance to blow himself up. Lee was angry that the dragon hadn't obeyed his orders and flown away. Then Love asked how Lee had escaped from the divine dimension. As it turned out, it was thanks to Tarakan, or rather, the moon. She threw herself into Lee's arms again, which infuriated Love. But it wasn't an embrace. Lee said he would let her lean on him. Luna was in very bad shape. She fell to her knees. Lee asked Love not to mock her because Luna was apparently about to die. And then Love understood. All this time, Lee had been trying to get out, but Luna just laughed at him. She didn't understand why Lee was so worried about Eurus, who was just artificial intelligence, literally a piece of code. And it was all just a game. Lee responded by hitting her with his baton, and then she realized that Lee Ji-woo was really worried. Besides, Luna said she would help Lee escape from Eden. But earlier she had said the opposite, that she couldn't do anything. Lee didn't know what to believe. According to Luna, both were true. During all that time, she had visited his home for the first time, kissed him, cooked for him in his kitchen, walked by the sea, and much more. And all this time, Luna had been confusing him. Lee didn't understand why she was doing all this. She didn't understand why either. But finally, Luna realized, although it was probably too late, Lee interrupted her and demanded that she let him out of there as soon as possible. Then Luna reminded Lee that she had mentioned the precious stone. It had to be retrieved. But Lee didn't understand what she was talking about. It was the day of their first kiss. During the battle with Yopi, Luna was upset that he didn't remember. On that day, Lee Ji-woo had received something. Now he remembered and took it out of his inventory. As it turned out, Luna had made the stone herself. This item is called a god's treasure. It contains all the power of the goddess. The divine dimension exists only because of God. And if Luna the goddess dies, that place will cease to exist. In other words, if the stone is broken, Luna will die, but Lee will be saved. However, there are several important conditions. Lee did not listen and broke the stone immediately. The space around him began to crumble, and now Lee was back on Earth. And now the moon decided to tell him about the conditions after all. The first was her life, and the second was that divine power does not disappear but is transferred. All the power was transferred to Pai, who broke the stone. And finally, the moon asked him to protect this world. Lee's career change was set in motion. The girls sat and watched the transformation with interest. The career change was complete, but everything looked a little strange. Lee was dressed in Luna's clothes and looked almost the same. Now he was Piss, the god of life. Love was stunned by his appearance. So were Zvezdochka and Riole. Only Luna said that Piss couldn't become a god of life. He had only been given the power of death. Therefore, the kind of god Lee would become would be determined by the nature of his game. Luna had her own guess about who Lee would become, but she didn't have time to express her opinion. She was struck by a green beam and fell lifeless. Considering Luna a traitor, God took her life. Of course, he actually survived. Luna's wound was too serious. Love was not her fan, but she understood that they were not enemies. Piss, however, was interested in why God considered Luna a traitor. After all, she had always tried to harm him, but God said it was just a game. None of this bothered Lee too much. He approached God. God wanted to ask a question, but Piss immediately hit him on the head with a club. The main office of the game was also watching. God and Piss were finally fighting. The audience's reaction was important. The future of Chrono Life depended on the outcome of this battle. From the explosive wave of Piss's attacks, Love protected her company with the help of a demon entity and her iron grip. But staying there was becoming dangerous, and they had to get out as soon as possible. God's question was why Lee was on the side of humans. Humans always start battles, destroy everything, and pollute the continent. That was true, and Lee agreed. But people can change, and not all people are bad. They deserve to live. Activating his Titan Spirit skill, Lee attacked so hard that the god was thrown into open space, but he was unharmed. The creator considered himself stronger than Pissa, which infuriated the latter, but in reality, no attacks could harm the god in the slightest. However, the god could hurt Pissa, and quite seriously. But since Lee was subjected to the destructive power, the skill of destruction was blocked. It was impossible to restore his power. This was the first time Pissa had found himself in such a situation, and then the god asked him if he wanted to join him, or die. Planet ST-389 was the main planet in the game. All of its inhabitants were viruses, and Mama created God to destroy them. In his conversations, the god was insane. He considered himself an antivirus, and the process of turning Lee into a god was only halfway complete. To put it more clearly, God considered himself the game's antivirus program, and after long observation of the players, God realized that every player was a pathogenic bacterium. Therefore, the planet must now be cleansed of these users. In Lee's opinion, this god was crazy. After all, users can be revived every time, but the god repeated that he would continue to destroy them over and over again, until all users left the game. Piz said that this was a stupid idea. After all, the game's creator wasn't stupid enough to let that happen. But Lee didn't know who exactly controlled the god and his decisions. The creator was faster and stronger than him, and he said that the creator of the game was not always on the side of its users. With each attack from the god, Lee got worse and worse. Love and Ryol didn't know what to do. The bearded man put everything on the line in this battle, which meant he would remain neutral, and the god once again gave Pissa a choice, to join him or not. And while the god gave them time to think, he decided to settle the score with Love and Riole. With a laugh, the god directed his destructive power at the girls, but before he could do anything, he heard something. The sound of a horn. Players were approaching from all sides under the banners of their guilds. Even Luna, who was lying behind him, suddenly woke up. She didn't have much time left, but those she was waiting for were here. 5 world guilds had arrived to help. Hong landed nearby and told Luna that they had made it in time. Love was surprised by this conversation. What had to be ready and how Hong had contacted the goddess of life. It turned out that some time ago, Luna had asked Hong for a favor, and she had done it. Hong had first spoken to Luna when Lee was selling weapons. Luna had called her over to tell her something important. They went into a dark alley and Luna deactivated her goddess mode so that no one could overhear them. In this mode, the god was watching her. Luna then told Hong a secret that no one else could know. She told her everything about the god and that everything had to be prepared for battle. Everything was ready. The elite troops of the guilds numbered almost 4,000 fighters, and all of them were equipped with weapons of mythical class. Then Hong asked Luna to take command of the guilds. This plan seemed optimal, and Luna agreed and ordered the attack. The god was amused that they were running straight into his hands. In order to play along, the god decided to lower himself to their level. He touched the ground, from which huge stone monsters began to emerge. More particles of the god. To defeat them, the strength of every species would be needed. Lav released the essence of the Demon King. Then Love summoned her assistant, Death. She ordered him to open a portal and summon all the demons. It is worth noting that this fact even slightly surprised the god who did not expect this. The goddess of life, Luna, who was directing the battlefield with the power of a goddess, was able to make everyone hear her voice. She told the frightened players that the demons were their allies, for they were already in a panic from the number of demons and all thought that they would attack the people. And indeed, the demons even helped ordinary users when they were in difficult situations. It was all very cool, but there was something strange. The particles of the god could only be destroyed with mythical weapons, but the demons' attacks worked perfectly. But Urus explained to Zvezdoshka that the Seven Sins guards did not need mythical weapons to inflict damage. The fact that the demons became allies of humans came as a surprise to God. He thought it would be a boring battle, but they managed to surprise him. Therefore, God did not yet have time to deal with Piss, and he gave him more time to think. Lee's career change was at 67% complete so far. In order for God to be born, he had to enter the realm of the unconscious. To make things more interesting, God gave his monsters even more power. The monsters devoured each other, becoming several times larger, 10 meters tall. It became much more difficult now that these monsters were even stronger than those in Urus's cave. The situation worsened in the blink of an eye, and then something like an earthquake began. Something appeared in the sky. Rayat was pleased. They had arrived just in time. It was Urus's guard, the most powerful force in this game. The Dragon Legion of Urus, the guardian of his cave. The 4 commanders of the Legion of Doom appeared before Urus. They waited for orders and, upon receiving them, rushed into the attack. But according to Rayat, victory was still far away. A griffin appeared in the sky. It was from the Beastmen. The users remembered the battle with them and became very wary. However, to everyone's surprise, the Beastmen were also against God. Rayat was right when he said that all forces would be needed to win. But that was not all. They had to use everything they had. The heavenly beings joined the humans, becoming their allies this time. Angels and heavenly knights were also present. Habek landed and reported that the mission was complete. He had gathered everyone together, including Urus and the Beastmen with the angels. Finally, everyone was gathered. There were 5,000 elite warriors among the Beast people. The Legion of the Heavenly Kingdom numbered 777 angels and 7,777 heavenly knights. The 5 strongest world guilds numbered almost 4,000 people. The Legion of the Underground Kingdom numbered 4,444 individuals. And of course, the Lair of the Dragon Urus numbering 1,500. All forces gathered together and attacked the particles of the gods, surrounding them in the center. Although the army inflicted damage on the gods' particles, it was not enough to kill them. For that, a weapon of mythical level was needed. But thanks to the fact that Ryo distributed all the weapons he had collected for this moment, all the heavenly particles were smashed to smithereens. And all this happened only thanks to Ryo's brilliant strategy. The lazy Seven Sins Ryo, who had failed to fulfill his duty to destroy humanity and had loved people all this time, finally put the blade to the god's throat. Even God himself did not expect the users to resist so actively. The entire game world was now against God and ready to fight to the last. Not only the users, but also the characters within the game. But God refused to admit that what he was doing was wrong. He simply believed that everyone had been infected, and now it would not only be humans who would have to be destroyed. He prepared to use his destruction skill. Luna ordered everyone to scatter. The leader of one of the guilds, Suko, couldn't hold back and rushed at God himself, but of course he fell on the battlefield without success. The long-range magic attack of the mage Abracadabra also failed. God was invincible. Then a full-scale attack began. All the forces of the legions rushed at the god. However, there was still a striking difference in strength. At that moment, Hong remembered how Luna had warned her that even after completing all the preparations, the players would not be able to defeat God. There was only one way to create a being like him, and that Luna planned to turn Li Ji Wu into a god. At the time, Hong was shocked, but now she understood everything. With difficulty, Luna approached Piss. She didn't have much time left. Piss had already lost consciousness. However, as she had already said, to become a god, one must sacrifice the most important thing, and that was Luna's life. She hugged Li goodbye. A bright light illuminated them. Suddenly, Li found himself in a village near the front line, knee-deep in water. There was not a soul in sight. It was very desolate and gloomy. None of Li's skills worked, as Luna, standing nearby in her original form, informed him. This was a test data site. Material discarded from the game was collected here. Ordinary users could not enter. According to Luna, Li's mother had brought him here to show him this place before he became a god. Li had long been curious about who this mother was. As Luna explained, she was the foundation of the game, watching over everything in virtual reality, the main computer. Short for Mom. The sun hanging above their heads is her. Even God was born from her. She is a truly invincible being. Before the moon disappeared, Luna really wanted to talk to Li one more time. He always wanted to know who she was. The hacker daughter of the company director or something like that. But alas, it was not so. Luna is an ordinary girl and an ordinary user. On the day the game was released, Luna immediately fell madly in love with it. She quickly gained levels and completed quests. She was incredibly happy. She had friends and adventures in the game. It was a wonderful time. However, happiness vanished in an instant, and a long period of pain began. But Li didn't understand why Luna had suddenly become such a psychopath and asked her for details, and she told him. It was a time when Luna was still enjoying the game, unaware of anything. While exploring the continent, Luna found a very beautiful place. It was the ruins of the horizon. Moreover, Luna became the first explorer of the ruins of the horizon. A hidden achievement was obtained. Luna liked the game so much that she wanted to know everything about it. It was like an obsession, like true love, but not for a person. So Luna studied all the maps and every nook and cranny in detail. At the same time, she completed quests and earned lots of points. However, Luna began to notice something strange. Traces of a past civilization. The chronology of events in each region was different. It became clear that this world had been destroyed and rebuilt many times since ancient times. Unfortunately, Luna's assumption turned out to be correct. In ancient times, God created 7 sins, and with their help, he had already destroyed the world several times. But Li didn't understand the essence of the story yet. The game was only a few years old. It couldn't have been reset completely several times. Luna explained that it was just a setting, and that they should enjoy the story. At first, Luna was a little confused. Why did malice awaken in her heart along with resentment? This was a game where freedom was most valued, and there was no main quest. This wasn't programmed content, and Luna realized that the same thing would soon begin. The 7 sins and the main quest to protect the world from them. So as soon as Luna returned to the village, she immediately told the users the whole truth. But everyone laughed at Luna's words. No one believed that it was necessary to prepare for battle in advance. Only one guy stayed by Luna's side. He said he believed her completely. Then this guy tried to take Luna to a quiet place to discuss the details. After that day, everything changed in her perception. Luna wanted very much to protect the world she loved, but she didn't know what to do next or how to do it right. And then one day, Luna met her. She got a chance to protect her world. She began a secret quest, after which she became the goddess of life. The final part of the quest was to destroy thousands of players. This quest became very morally difficult. The limit. Luna was ignored, insulted, and ridiculed. She easily got over such trifles. However, this was the limit. Something that protected Luna's soul began to crumble. However, no matter how difficult it was, she did not think of giving up. At some point, Luna became a different person. She no longer felt remorse, she simply caused pain to others. And so, after some time, when the quest was almost complete, Luna met Li Ji Wu. That day changed the fate of both Li and Luna. The changes were not only in the game, but also in real life. After Luna took Li's life, she finally became a goddess of life. After listening to her, Li said he understood her, but couldn't forgive her for everything she had done. If she could, Luna would have changed everything, but you can't turn back time. Luna apologized to Li once more. She was ready to do anything for Li to forgive her. Li said he would remember that, but would leave the request for later. Well, Luna continued her story. After meeting the god, she waited for the moment to destroy him, until something happened. The appearance of an invincible warrior. Li. She had a plan. But Li would never agree to help her after her betrayal, so she acted cautiously and step by step. But her goal remained the same. Li had one more question. How did Luna find out where he lived? And that's when Li's career change came to an end. The time had come. Li was returning to where he came from. Luna's character would be erased. Perhaps she would create a new one, but that was not certain. The battlefield was chaotic. Most of the players were no longer able to fight. But Hong knew that their task was to stall for time until Li was reborn as a god. She rushed back into the attack. And how selfless she was. Even without her hands, Hong did everything she could to buy time and help. It was all worth it. Li appeared just in time. The god didn't know that Li was no longer just a human. And Piss activated the god activation skill. All that remained was to find out what kind of god he would become. And it happened. He became the god of chaos. The sky over the continent suddenly turned black, and everything was plunged into impenetrable darkness. Then the sky was lit up by multiple bright red flashes of lightning. Now the god understood all of Luna's actions, and that everything she had done was to make things turn out exactly as they had. But he hadn't expected her to stab him in the back like that. The god's words bored Piss. He wanted to fight. Before the god could react, Piss was already next to him. A second later, God was lying on the ground, knocked down by Piss's powerful blow. But he still didn't seem dangerous to God, so God activated his destructive power, shot after shot. Everything around them shook and the ground cracked. God was sure that Piss would not survive this attack, but it didn't even touch Piss. With his hand, Piss directed the god's green lights to the side, and it began to rain. He turned the god's attacks into rain. Now it was Piss's turn to attack. He was eager to try out his new power. He took out his club. With a swing, Piss cut through the air, almost hitting God. Then he suddenly appeared behind him and struck. The creator flew to the side and landed on his haunches. Now he would not underestimate Piss. Punching the air with his fist, Piss somehow managed to hit God again with this attack. He continued to strike him from a distance. This was one of the skills of the god of chaos. The office workers did not understand why the god was losing so miserably. Only Mr. King knew about this skill. It is called probability. The problem was something else. Probability was just one of the many skills of the god of chaos. Then the god had an idea to get out of there and rethink the whole plan, but he failed. Piss continued to attack, blocking the exit with his powers. No matter how hard the god tried to escape, he couldn't. Piss attacked him with weak blows to torment him. This circus was starting to annoy Richito, so he shouted at Piss to attack with more force. But after a while, Piss had had enough fun with the club, and it was time to make a decision. The god began to cry. For many years, his heart was empty. God did everything to protect his beloved planet, and he lost too much. Now he wants nothing. He is ready to destroy everything on this planet, and God began to emit destruction from his entire body. The activation of the destruction power began. All the particles of God, that is, the mythical weapon, began to gather together. This was a problem. Rayet had predicted that this might happen, and now it was happening. God was absorbing all the weapons into himself. Rayet shouted again for Pizu to attack quickly. This simply couldn't happen in the game. Piss was stunned. There was a lot of destruction in the particles of God, and if he absorbed it all, it would be almost impossible to defeat him. The number of weapons belonging to the world guilds was 20,000. The weapons began to fall to the ground. The god of destruction absorbed as many particles as possible and became much, much stronger than he had been before. He intended to destroy everything on the continent, or even destroy the entire planet. But Piss asked everyone not to worry and to trust him. The god of destruction struck the ground with his fist. Waves of destructive fire swept across every corner of the planet, and there was a powerful explosion. The planet was no more. God had truly destroyed it with one hand. This surprised Piss because the god himself had said many times that this was his mother's favorite planet. Not wanting to listen any longer, Piss activated the powers of chaos. A particle of time was another skill in his arsenal. Everything around him began to change and spin. Time turned back, even before the god of destruction destroyed the entire planet. Now there was a chance to prevent the attack. The enraged god of destruction tried to strike again, but with the help of his power, Piss made the god's hit percentage 0. The probability particle power worked perfectly. The entire world, everyone even slightly interested in games, watched what was happening without taking their eyes off their screens. All the players who had been kicked out of the game because of the battle with the god, all the users who were with their families or loved ones, began to connect to the game. The game rooms were practically full. The four guys hoped they would make it in time. The reason all the users started connecting was their desire to spend the last moments of chrono life together. Everyone who was following these events had a feeling that the god's demise was very close. In the end, the heart of the god of destruction was broken, and he repented. He asked Pizu for forgiveness and begged him to spare his life so that he could continue to watch over the planet. And then Pizu received a notification that the god of destruction was asking for mercy. All that remained was to choose whether to forgive him or not. If Piz forgave the god, his sympathy would reach its maximum, and Piz would receive a special reward. This was the deciding factor. Lee was curious about what the reward would be, but in practice, the reward for destruction was greater. The god tried to escape, but Piss activated his power and authority of chaos. More specifically, he activated a magnifying glass, but he only magnified his club. God had only one option left. He wanted to ask his mother to hide him. Meanwhile, Piss's club reached the depths of space. It was 1.5 million kilometers long. It exceeded the size of the sun, and then Piss struck. Finally, God said that Piss would surpass even his mother in the future. On that day, the number of planets destroyed in a single moment exceeded 850,000. This event marked the end of the last chapter. Having fulfilled his mission, Piss canceled the God mode. The final quest was completed. All the users gathered together and welcomed their hero who had saved them all. Just as Piss was about to log out of the game, she appeared, and she transported them to another place. There she was. Mom. A new area, the city of Mashin Bairan, was unlocked, and the island of Juhikiwando, and more. Hundreds of new cities and continents were unlocked by Piss. Superior beings watched Piz from other dimensions. A powerful witch watched him. Notifications poured in. According to Mom, everything Lee had experienced was less than 1% of what was actually hidden in the game, and his mother hoped that Piss wouldn't give up the game after just trying it out. Han Sarang's phone rang just as she was about to leave. It was Lee. He was ready to go too. 3 years had passed unnoticed since Piz destroyed the god of destruction. During that time, Sarang graduated from school and became an adult. Upon reaching the age of majority, Han Sarang officially began dating Lee Ji-woo, and then her dreams were interrupted by her manager. In reality, only 3 weeks had passed. In reality, Han Sarang was still 17, but she really wanted to grow up quickly. But today, Lee and Sarang had agreed to meet, and it was already time to leave. As usual, Lee Ji-woo was waiting for Hain Sarang by the elevator. She was late, as always. Looking at her, Lee realized that she was really very beautiful. He blushed. Han Sarang noticed and teased him a little about it. 3 weeks had already passed, but yesterday the company posted an announcement on its website. A major update had been launched. It was no wonder the director had hired twice as many developers. And then King hired 10 times more developers to speed up the process, and it worked. The reason for today's meeting between Han Sarang and Lee was to exchange information about the missing moon. All this time, Lee had been trying to dig up something about Luna, but he kept hitting a dead end. So he simply entrusted the matter to a professional. As Love said, Luna completely hid her identity, and Lee realized that she did it on purpose. The only thing Lee didn't understand was how Love had managed to get so close to Luna that Sarang was now so worried about her. After the quest was over and Lee told Sarang about Luna's past, it would have been foolish to hate her. Then Sarang asked Lee why he was looking for her. Lee had an unfinished question for her that he never got an answer to. Finally, Lee and Sarang arrived at their destination. It was just a cafe. When Han Sarang went to order coffee, she recognized the barista and the professional they needed. It was no coincidence that the cafe was called Ho Cafe. The owner of the cafe was none other than Hong. Han Sarang's personal manager was sitting on the sofa, looking sad. She was very bored, until she saw the virtual reality glasses left behind by Han Sarang. Maybe she should give it a try after all. After connecting, the star's manager began creating a new character. Making herself comfortable, she found herself in the game world. The graphics immediately impressed her, and not just the graphics. The smell of grass, the sensations, everything felt real. Considering all this, the game was no different from reality. She began to customize her character's appearance. Since it was impossible to change her appearance drastically, she chose the name Rabbit Gandhi and moved to a village near the front line. That's where everyone started. Immediately rushing into hunting, Rabbit made a mistake. The strength of a first-level player was minimal. Having skipped the training, the manager acted very rashly. The club was useless and intended for training. It was necessary to buy weapons for combat. However, something strange happened. With her club, Rabbit defeated the monster, stunning those who saw it. And all because, although modern games were difficult for those who learned to play decades ago, it was easier than easy. After that day, people began to talk about Rabbit Gondo as some kind of secret expert. After all, she had become the best player in the game in a short time. Despite the fact that there were many other visitors in the cafe, Hong sat down with Lee and Sarang, but she was the owner after all. After exchanging compliments, the girls got down to business. After receiving their assignment, all members of the Robin Hood Guild in the game did everything they could to find out something about Luna. To get straight to the point, they couldn't find out anything at all. This didn't surprise Lee Jiwoo much. Of course, there was a high probability that Luna was currently developing a new character. Therefore, people were stationed at all the starting points of the game, but she was not seen there. Now all that was left was to intensify the search in real life, which seemed even more difficult to Hong. Lee remembered that besides him, Sarang, and Luna, Star had also been seen in real life. They set off to meet her. Zvezdochka was very happy to see everyone. She dragged Sarang to a cafe. Meanwhile, Hong thanked Lee for saving her from God. They all stopped at the nearest cafeteria. It turned out that Star had only seen Luna yesterday. Everyone was shocked. They had been looking for Luna for so long, and Star had only seen her recently. As it turned out, Zvezdochka had received a message asking her to meet someone. Moreover, she asked her to pass something on to Lee. And Zvezdochka gave Lee an envelope with a heart instead of a stamp on it. Luna passed the letter on. They all read it together, even though Lee was incredibly embarrassed. Luna wrote that she was ashamed to show her face to Lee after everything she had done, but she still wanted to see him very much. Therefore, if Lee felt the same way, Luna wrote that she would wait for him at her favorite place. The letter was written in a romantic tone, which greatly angered Han Sarang. But that wasn't all. Luna also left a letter for Love herself, that is, Sarang. This fact surprised everyone just as much. It was a so-called happiness letter passed around in a circle. It was obviously meant to be mocking. Sarang was ready to tear Luna to pieces, so she planned to go with Lee. Min Dong-hee, also known as Min Shoko in the game, came to the beach. She was met by the owner of the sashimi restaurant. The owner was Park Ben-chul, who was also a physical therapist in the game. She placed an order. In real life, Min Suko looked the same as in the game and even dressed the same. Suddenly, they heard a wild scream. It was Sarang screaming for Tarakan to come out of wherever she was hiding. After calming Sarang down, they all went to the water, to the place where Lee and Luna had their so-called date. But Luna wasn't there. Lee was sure it was the beach. Lee, Sarang, Star, and Hong stopped at the nearest game club to rest. The search yielded nothing. They agreed to meet tomorrow and continue. When Lee returned home, he found Luna there. She was surprised that he didn't immediately recognize her favorite place. After making ramen for himself and Luna, Lee was about to ask her a question, but she beat him to it. Luna was curious about the reward Lee had received for completing the quest. It turned out that Lee had been given the opportunity to become a god of destruction. But for now, Lee had placed the essence of the god, enclosed in a sphere, in his inventory. In fact, Lee planned to sell this essence for an astronomical sum in the future. Now it was Luna's turn to tell how she had ended up in Lee's house so easily. But Lee interrupted her and said that he had another question for her. What interested Lee most now was what Luna's real name was. The moon's name was Moon Borim, which meant full moon. That's why she chose that nickname in the game. But now Lee asked how Moon had ended up at his house, and not just once. Just then, Lee Jiwoo's phone rang. It was President King, also known as Che Dak-bae. Upon learning that Lee was with Moon, the president invited them both to his office. They were in the Chrono Life observation room. The president's sudden invitation confused Lee and Moon. Since the guys were the main characters of the first season, the president asked them how they liked everything. They replied honestly that the management was irresponsible. The god of destruction was actually created by the main computer, and no one even intervened. Freedom is good, but control is also necessary. This was exactly what Luna had always been interested in. How could King allow this god to exist? He replied that he was curious to see how it would all end. And fortunately, everything ended well. The president said that he greatly appreciated that Luna's sacrifice had saved the game, and he understood why she was now going to quit the game. Then Moon said that she wasn't quitting the game because of that. She was doing it for herself. She had destroyed many innocent users and almost lost herself. After these words, the president moved on to the reason he had called the meeting. The servers would be unavailable for the foreseeable future, as some improvements were being made to the game. The work will take 3 months. Then the second season will be launched. However, not all game data can be obtained through the observation room. Therefore, President King decided to offer Lee and Moon the opportunity to become testers for the second season of the game. Lee Ji-woo immediately agreed to these conditions. The excitement had already taken hold of him. Luna was about to refuse, but Lee suddenly decided to persuade her. He even promised to help her develop a new character since hers had been deleted. This was what Luna had been longing for. Who would have thought that after everything that had happened, Luna would get another chance? And she agreed. Moreover, King decided to make an exception for Luna. They began testing. This time, everything was reversed. Luna was now the loser with nothing. The event was hosted by Falcon Eye, or Kim Hong-gu in real life. This was the opening of the game's second season. About 100,000 spectators gathered. The servers were closed for 3 whole months while these major updates were being prepared. There were only 5 minutes left until the server opened. And today, Kim Hong-gu invited a special guest. A famous idol and active user of the game came to congratulate everyone with a song. The atmosphere was just right, and President Cho Dog-bai was very pleased. So, the game begins. Han Sarang Lee Ji-woo watched the performance on TV rather than in person. He needed to log into the game as soon as the servers opened. And then the moment came when the servers were opened. Lee put on his glasses and immersed himself in the game world. The lecture was quite boring, and half of the students were practically asleep. Lethargy, emptiness, and thirst. After 3 months without the game, the users looked like soulless creatures. They tried to replace the game with something else, started playing sports, but nothing could fill the void. Immediately after the server opened, the number of users connected at the same time was very high. There were too many people, it was maddening. There was nowhere to even walk. And then he saw Urus. They hadn't seen each other in a long time and missed each other very much. Unfortunately, Urus couldn't participate in the testing. And then people started to recognize Lee's hero, the warrior in Pissa's underwear, and Urus. There was too much attention. After finishing her performance, Han Sarang entered the dressing room. She wanted to get home as soon as possible and get back into the game. But a surprise awaited her in the dressing room. Her manager was lying on the couch wearing virtual reality glasses. After marveling at this, Han Sarang decided to log in right there in the dressing room. Lee had a meeting scheduled on the hill near the frontline village. Of course, it was with Love. They arrived at the meeting place almost simultaneously. As Lee said, one more person was supposed to come. An unpleasant surprise for Love was that they were waiting for Luna. Love was shocked. After all, Luna's character had been deleted in the first season. Then Luna told them about the beta testing and that the director had given her a gift by not deleting her character. Love didn't know about the testing, and Lee broke out in a cold sweat, knowing what awaited him for keeping quiet about it. But since everyone was gathered, it was time to get ready. It was about to begin. Only Lee knew what was about to begin. Or maybe Piz. The sky above their heads suddenly split open. A task window popped up, stating that the players had to protect Chrono from the Dimension Invader. This was the first main quest of the second season. Water began pouring down from the sky in powerful streams. Luna activated her reverse gravity magic, and all 3 rose above the ground to escape the water. Since Luna always carried a staff, it made sense that she was originally a mage. Very loud and strange sounds appeared. Huge whales flew across the sky. On the back of the largest whale, a crowd of strange human-like creatures could be seen from afar. The king of the sea gods, Descartes, was the leader there. His level was more than 7,500. Descartes considered humans to be inferior creatures incapable of anything and ordered them all to be destroyed. Until a blow from below by Pissa knocked him off his feet and stunned him completely. The second season turned out to be the mainland from another dimension. Each of these dimensions was much larger than the continent of Chrono. In the closed beta version, Lee cleared a total of 30 dimensions. By the way, these guys were from the dimension of the sea gods, as everyone already understood. It took about 10 minutes to wipe them out. In her apartment, Luna was also waiting for the season to begin. She remembered the 3 months she spent with Lee in the beta version. It was the best time of her life. Luna jumped up, undressed, and opened the closet. It was time to get ready to go to Lee. A latex suit hung in the closet. Standing on the roof of the house, Luna once again tied herself to the railing with a rope and jumped. It had been a long time since Luna had been to Lee Ji-woo's house. She had even forgotten to bring clothes to change into, as she had done before. There was nothing she could do. Luna opened a stranger's closet and took Lee Ji-woo's shirt. She would borrow it just like last time. The owner of the apartment was lying on the sofa, far away from the real world. After changing into his shirt, Luna plopped down next to him on the sofa. Hugging Lee, she put on his glasses and lay down next to him. Sea monsters attacked Lee, Luna, and Love. Lee's eyes lit up with anticipation, and he activated his speed. To defeat Pizu, he didn't even need to activate his godly essence. His club was doing the job perfectly. So much so that Love initially thought these creatures were very weak, until she encountered them personally. The Demon King had to be activated because the sea creatures turned out to be very strong. And it worked. The Demon King, Love, was also very strong, but Love's attack didn't even touch the strongest monsters. The sea gods were not as simple as they had thought at first. They were on a different level and possessed incredible strength. One of the monsters severely wounded Love, and the Demon King's essence was blocked. Love was on the verge of death. The sea god was ready to finish off Love, but Luna saved her by activating her flamethrower magic, and they found themselves back in the protective sphere. Love sincerely thanked Luna for saving her. But it was too early to be thankful, as they still had many enemies left. Sea gods are the strongest sea race. Their main feature is their physical strength. They reproduce extremely quickly. The scale of this army was unmatched by any other. But after one powerful blow from Pisa, only their leader remained. He wanted to resurrect his army, but to do so, he needed seawater. The continent of Chrono was already flooded with water. The players were in complete despair. And now Pizu had to activate his divine arrival skill. The god of chaos, Pizu, activated his powers. Control over reality. All the water summoned by the sea god turned into soap bubbles. The inhabitants were saved in time. The sea god was once again stunned by Pissa's power. Using the power of 8 mirrors, Piss enlarged his club and killed his enemy with a single blow. The quest was completed. A new quest, the Book of Awakening, was unlocked. If completed, Piss will reach level 9,999. As mentioned at the end of the first season, the world has become multi-dimensional in the second season. A huge map with no end in sight, incredibly powerful enemies. Users set off for new worlds in search of adventure and new rivals. And the first thing Piss did was gather his team members. There must be 4 people in the team. He has not yet revealed his reasons. The girls began to guess who would become the 4th member of their team. Lee had already made his choice. On the northern continent, in the Forest of Eternal Frost, Sentry finally found him, the thief Raikon. The thief was a collector of rare pets. Sentry had been looking for him since the first season to teach him a lesson. After defeating Raycon's guards, Sentry was unable to touch him. Raycon asked her what had happened to the Holy Guild, since she was alone. The thing was, Sentry didn't want to use the guild for personal gain. To her surprise, Raycon easily dodged all of Sentry's blows. He was strong, not what she had expected. In an instant, Raycon had Sentry by the throat. He threw her so far and so hard that she broke through the wall. Guild leader Holly Sentry had not expected the thief to be so strong. The building that Sentry had broken through caught her interest. 4 heads hung on the wall. She recognized one of them. The memories were still vivid in her mind. The sword fell from Sentry's hands. Those large, kind eyes looked at her with curiosity. And their first meeting. At first, there was awkwardness, but then they quickly became friends. That collar suited him so well. Sentry stood there and cried bitterly. The hope that he was still alive, which had been lingering in Sentry, collapsed in an instant. At that moment, Rakan approached from behind and stabbed Sentry with his sword. His poaching team had returned. One of them was holding a cage with some kind of creature inside. They had found a new specimen in the forest. In the cage sat a wild creature, either a cat or a dog, blue in color, growling at Raycon. It looked like a wolf cub. Raycon did not want to sell it and opened the cage, letting the animal out. He began to beat it. He was going to make a stuffed animal out of it. The thief continued to torture the animal until Piss suddenly interrupted him and hit him. Piss apologized to the animal. He would have come earlier if he had known what was going to happen. The last member of their team turned out to be this puppy, Pharaoh. Piz had met him in the beta version, but back then he looked different. At that time, Pharaoh was under the influence of bad emotions, so he looked like a terrible monster. Because of him, Luna had died a brutal death back then. The puppy bit Piss on the hand, still in shock from Raycon's bullying and trusting no one. Raycon, who had come to his senses, immediately began to insult everyone. Then he flew up to Piss and grabbed him by the throat. But it didn't work out like it did with Sentry. Piss quickly put Raycon in his place. The puppy Pharaoh, who saw how Piss avenged him, approached with much more trust than before. A message indicated that Piss had managed to win Pharaoh's sympathy. The room lit up blue. As it turned out, Piss had completed a hidden quest he didn't even know about. Instead of a puppy, a boy with a tail and ears was sitting in front of him. He immediately clung to Piss with his arms. Pharaoh was grateful for his rescue. But when Luna came over to pet him on the head and said she hoped they would get along this time, Pharaoh bit her hard, drawing blood. Then Love decided to show Luna how to treat dogs properly, but she also failed and ended up with a couple of broken fingers. President Cho Dok-bae was in the game observation room as usual. According to reports for the second season, they had broken the record for the number of simultaneous user connections. When the president asked how Pies was doing, he was told that he had completed his first quest in just 7 minutes. Moreover, Piss had found the Dimension Eater. It turned out to be Pharaoh who joined his team. The developers were concerned that Peas was using his experience in the beta version to complete the game in the shortest possible time, and then the company would go bankrupt. President King agreed but could do nothing about it. The place where Peas' team ended up was stunning and very beautiful. The city was completely covered in snow. Everyone was curious as to why they were there. Peas replied that the entrance was located in the city. Their goal was a tavern, which Piss found quite easily. There they could discuss everything calmly and quietly. At the table, Piss officially introduced Pharaoh to everyone as the one who devours dimensions. Of course, Luna wasn't very surprised because she had also taken part in the testing, but Love was shocked by the 4th member of their team. In the second month of testing, when Piss and Luna were clearing the 8th dimension, they heard that Chrono was in danger. But when they returned, everything had already turned to ash. Now Luna wasn't sure if it was worth taking this kid with them and how safe it would be. Hearing about Pharaoh's strength, Urus became curious if he was really that strong. He wanted to arrange a small competition. No one was against a little spectacle. But Pharaoh was so scared that he turned back into a puppy from the shock, and so the hierarchy was established. Urus was now more important than Pharaoh. However, the rest of the internal ranking was unclear. Then Luna had an idea. The first fight was between Love and Pharaoh. This had to be done because Pharaoh was intimidated by Urus and didn't want to fight. As it turned out, Pharaoh was quite fast and agile. He had a good fighting spirit, but he was still just a little wolf cub, so Love won. And then Pharaoh lost his fighting spirit even more. Love even thought that maybe she should have let him win. Just then, a girl in a dress approached them. It was Islero, the priestess of dimensions. She was there to lead the team to the next dimension. This wasn't in the beta test, and Piss was surprised. Islero thanked him for taking care of her younger brother. He turned out to be the polar dragon Adventador, who was now Piss's underwear. Long ago, in primitive times, Islero was born and given the task of protecting this place. And now, Islero was ready to lead the team to the place she had protected, the Altar of Dimensions. The place inside was huge, majestic, and beautiful. There were huge statues of beast people everywhere. Suddenly, Zvezdochka ran out to meet them and threw herself into their arms, greeting everyone. When Zvezdochka began to get acquainted with Pharaoh, everyone was worried. But he didn't bite her. This girl had an amazing ability to find common ground with anyone. There were more surprises. Zvezdochka was not alone here. Habek Riot Riol was here too. They gathered a team. It turned out that Piss wasn't the only one who knew that teams of 4 people needed to be assembled, even though Ryo was not in the beta version. But he was the ruler of the Heavenly Kingdom, and he knew a lot about other dimensions too. The manuscripts of the Heavenly Kingdom contained some information about Cheonmen. The priestess of the Islero dimension began her final mission. She was curious to see if these pathetic warriors could overcome the wall in front of them and earn the right to enter other dimensions. Now it became clear to Pizu why Islero had been added to the game. It was to test the strength of the players before they could move to another dimension. And so Islero began with Pizu. He walked past her and stopped near the statues. The club sliced through the air, producing such an explosive wave that it blew the roof off the altar. The group quest to destroy 30 statues was completed in a matter of seconds. Islero was speechless. The priestess's trial was passed. Unlocked regions opened up before Pisu. Only one could be chosen. President King was throwing in surprises. Now Pisu wouldn't be able to get through the game so quickly. The team waited for Piss's choice, and he chose Galanvader, the land of dragons. According to ancient texts, the Dragon's Edge was a place imbued with life energy. It was also home to the last of the 3 great dragons, Gallardo. Finally, Islero decided to ask Piss for a favor. It was a quest. In the farthest Gulkbin of the Dragon's Edge, there was a slab that held the truth. Islero asked her to bring it back. In return, Piss would receive a Philosopher's Stone. Adventador was shocked that Islero had decided to give it away. This stone, which belonged to the dragons, contained incredible power. It heals and grants wishes. Intrigued, Piss accepted Islero's quest and agreed to search for the slab. It was time to set off. Rayat's team left for the planet and said goodbye to Piss's team. A smile slipped from Piss's face. Could this gloomy, empty place really be Galanvader, the land of dragons? It felt as if the entire dimension had been destroyed. Piss turned to Love. She was wounded. No one even understood how it had happened. A piece of summer was simply gone. Piss picked her up in his arms. When Piss wanted to heal Love, Luna told him it was too late. Love was dead. And she was a unique boss. Her character had to be deleted. Piss activated the Divine Arrival. Then he activated his power, the Time Particle. But when he turned back time, nothing changed. The wound was still there. Some kind of dark slime fell near Piss. He turned around and saw people. One of them said he had hit another. And Piss understood what he meant when he looked at the moon. It was also wounded. It was impossible to heal it, and it fell. The leader of the strange gang pointed his hand toward the rest of the team. A dark beam was his skill, but he didn't have time to do anything and was hit in the face with Piss's club. However, he survived. He said he had heard a lot about Piss and had wanted to meet him for a long time. This was the first serious enemy of the second season. He activated his dark bullet skill and fired at Pisa. But luckily, Pisa knew how to manipulate probability and made the enemy's shots completely inaccurate. The guy laughed and something incredible happened. Chaos's authority was corrupted and deactivated. The strange guy began to mutter and call his god for help. Something appeared above Pisa's. The monster grew and became huge, a toothy, terrifying thing. The guy turned around, satisfied, and started to walk back. But something was happening behind him. His monster exploded in the air, and now Piss was running toward the guy at the speed of light. It continued to beat him until one of the girls created a cubic barrier with magic. The group found themselves in a protected cube. Piss attacked him, he cracked, but the ladies defended themselves with all their might. Unfortunately, they didn't succeed. In the end, only their leader survived. He began to pray to his master again. A black shadow burst out of the guy's body and enveloped Piss. It lifted him into the air, and then Piss saw something terrible. All the ladies were alive and were about to leave, carrying Love and Luna in their arms. Before Piss could do anything, they all began to sink into some kind of dark slime. The forces of chaos were exhausted, and the regime was deactivated. So untimely. This was Piss's first defeat, and such a strong opponent. This rat was good at hiding. Piss couldn't find him anywhere, so Piss decided to just destroy the planet. But he was stopped by a message. There were no internal messages in the game, and as soon as Sarang came out, she wrote the usual. She asked him not to do it. The character Han Sarang had not been deleted. That meant she wasn't dead, and she asked to meet in real life. Piss decided to log out for a while. When he woke up, Lee was shocked to find Moon next to him again, having somehow made her way into the house. The doorbell rang, Han Sarang had arrived. Moon offered to open the door. Lee said he would take Sarang to a cafe. And then Lee saw how Moon had made her way to him and back. Saying she would see him in the lobby, she went home. In the lobby, Sarang saw Moon, and was surprised to learn that she also lived in the same house. At the cafe, they ordered food and started talking. As soon as Luna and Love died, they both ended up in the resurrection zone. No one understood how this was possible. Then President King sat down at their table. Luna called him over to clarify the situation. He explained that Love's return was not a system error. The unique boss system had simply been removed from the game. This news stunned Lee Ji-woo. But as it turned out, it wasn't the president who did it, but the main computer, Mom. How this was possible was unclear. How could the computer decide what to do on its own? This was the first time this had happened since the game was released. The boss system was invented by the god of destruction to limit the 7 sins and their helpers. After all, they were so powerful that they could cause a catastrophe if something went wrong. But now the god of destruction is gone, and these restrictions have simply fallen away, as the president explained. A new day dawned. It began for the players with their usual activities. There was excitement everywhere. However, something was not right. They appeared in the middle of a village near the front line. Piss's group had made a serious mistake. They did not pay attention to the approaching threat. It was unclear why these enemies needed only the bodies of Love and Luna. The seeds of evil had been sown on the continent. Something terrible was happening on the continent of Chrono. Not a single player remained alive in the frontline village. The strange priest thought for a moment and ordered his assistants to gather all the bodies. When Piss returned to the game, Urus and his new friend, the wolf cub Pharaoh, were already waiting for him. Relaxing, Pharaoh took on human form and pointed Piss toward the bushes. Someone was there. It was the giant dragon Gallardo Gallard. Meanwhile, Love and Luna were already approaching, both feeling pain. The message said that they were both infected. The infection process was at 5% so far. The infected areas on their bodies were the same places where they had been wounded by that strange liquid. Then the girls saw a huge dragon in front of them. It was a low-ranking dragon named Drake. Just in time, Luna lifted herself and Love into the air using her flickering skill, and Love attacked Drake from above. Together, Love and Luna quickly defeated the dragon. But something was wrong. It was too fast. Then a message popped up. Due to their status, the girls' stats had been increased by half. Seeing the dragon, Gallardo Piss was more than surprised because he had imagined it differently. Standing before him was a small, pretty girl with sad eyes. It was his spiritual body. After all, the real one was huge and very uncomfortable. This greatly excited Pace's imagination. He asked Gallardo to show him his true form. He also dreamed of defeating the dragon and making it his ego cloak. The dragon girl told him that her planet was infected and she was very depressed. Soon everyone would die and rise as zombies. And this had already happened, as Love and Luna understood. The dragons were being reborn with wounds and were infected just like them. Therefore, Gallardo was very afraid of becoming infected herself and offered to become Pisa's ego weapon. But there was a catch. The dragon wanted to know if Piss was worthy of this. And to start with, Piss had to defeat him. The dragon, the size of many planets, appeared in the galaxy. The Earth trembled. Piss ordered Pharaoh and Eurus to go to the girl's aid. He stayed behind to deal with the dragon. He activated the maximum size skill from 8 mirrors to get closer to the dragon's size for fairness. But as a result of excessive use, the item was damaged. Therefore, Piss remained slightly larger than a planet, which was much smaller than Gallardo. But Piss also had his trump cards. The god of chaos was activated. Rewinding time, the mirror became whole. Using it, Piss became no smaller than the dragon Gallardo. The battle was also watched at the main office. The spectacle was breathtaking. The two strongest rivals in the galaxy.